Welcome back to Harry's Cosmos. Tonight's tale, what if Harry was secretly Regulus Black's son and Hermione his betrothed heir? Before we dive in, do smash that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss a story. Now let's begin. Chapter 1, The Vault of Names. The letter arrived at 7 minutes past midnight, and it arrived the way trouble always arrived at number 4, Privet Drive, quietly and addressed to him. Hedwig had been out hunting. The owl that came instead was a great gray thing with eyes like old coins, and it did not hoot or scratch at the glass. It landed on the sill of the open window, set an envelope on Harry's chest while he slept, and was gone before the weight of it woke him. The envelope was heavy cream parchment, sealed in black wax. The seal showed a raven over crossed wands and a motto too small to read by streetlight. Harry sat up, put on his glasses, and turned it over twice. No stamp, no name of sender. Just his own name in a narrow, upright hand, and beneath it, in smaller letters, to be opened by the addressee alone, by hand and by blood. He tried his thumbnail first. The wax didn't crack. He tried the blunt letter opener Aunt Petunia kept in the hall drawer, creeping down and back up again with the stairs complaining under him, and the blade slid off the wax without leaving a mark, the way a knife slides off glass, by hand and by blood. He sat on the edge of the bed and pressed his bare thumb flat against the seal, and the wax went warm under his skin, warm and then soft, and the raven sank into it like a stone into a pond. The envelope opened along its own fold with a sound like a breath let out. Gringotts Bank, London Branch, Office of Estates, Trusts, and Standing Contracts. Mr. H. Potter, you are summoned to attend upon the Office of Estates in the matter of the noble and most ancient House of Black, in which matter you are a named party. The bank observes that you are a minor under wizarding law, and further observes that the bank does not care. Goblin law recognizes blood, contract, and gold. You are relevant to all three. Enclosed is a silver nut. It has been made a portkey keyed to your touch and to no other. It will activate at 9 o'clock in the evening on the third day from this letter's delivery. You are advised to be holding it, to be dressed, and to have eaten. Estate matters run long. You are further advised to tell no one whose discretion you have not personally tested. By order of Gornuk, Senior Manager of Accounts, House of Black, may your gold flow and your enemies count their fingers. Harry read it 3 times. The nut sat in the corner of the envelope, ordinary and tarnished, and he did not touch it. He put the letter under his pillow, lay back, and looked at the ceiling, where the streetlight laid a long yellow stripe across the paint. The House of Black, Sirius's house. Sirius, who was somewhere south by now, somewhere with palm trees if Buckbeak had anything to say about it, and who had written twice this summer already short letters with no return address, signed with a paw print. A named party. Named how? Named why. He was going on 14, he had a godfather on the run, and a bank that did not care that he was a minor had just told him to eat a good dinner first. At midnight he lit his wand under the blanket and wrote to Hermione. Her answer came back in under a day, which meant she had replied within an hour of reading. He knew her turnaround times the way other people knew train schedules. Harry, first, yes, obviously you have to go. Gringotts summons a named party, and the named party doesn't appear. They can proceed in your absence, and you do not want decisions about you made in a room you're not in. That's true everywhere, actually, not just at Gringotts. Second, rules: don't sign anything at the first meeting. Ask for copies of everything, and I mean everything, and ask them to certify the copies. It costs 2 sickles and it's worth 200. If anyone says this is merely a formality, that is the part you read twice. Goblins respect clients who check the arithmetic. They despise clients who pretend to understand things they don't, so if you don't understand something, say so plainly. It's the wizards who bow and scrape in the bank and then sneer at them in Diagon Alley that they hate. Third, and I want you to actually do this one, write down everything they tell you as soon as you're out, before you sleep. Memory rewrites itself overnight. I read a study. I looked up the House of Black in Nature's Nobility. Mum let me order it. She thinks it's like Debrett's, and honestly she's not wrong. They're one of the oldest recorded lines in Britain. The book lists Sirius, disowned, and a brother, Regulus, deceased 1981, no issue. If you're a named party, it's probably through your grandmother's side. There was a Doria Black who married a Charles Potter. You're likely in somebody's will. Write to me the moment you're back. The moment, Harry. Hermione, P.S. Eat the dinner. They're right about that. He copied the part about certified copies onto the back of his hand in bureau, where he could see it. Then he ate 2 helpings of shepherd's pie under Aunt Petunia's narrow watching, said he was going to bed early, and at 9 o'clock exactly, dressed, fed, and holding a tarnished silver nut, Harry went out of Privet Drive on a hook behind his navel, like a cork out of a bottle. He came down on stone. Not the marble of the main hall he knew, with its chandeliers and its long counters. This was somewhere beneath and behind all that, a corridor of dark granite torchlit, the flames burning a green so deep it was nearly black at the root. The air tasted of cold metal and old water. Somewhere below, a long way below, something rumbled on rails. A goblin waited for him. Not young, not old. Goblins made it hard to tell. He wore a suit of charcoal wool cut better than anything Uncle Vernon had ever owned, and a single earring of what looked like knife steel. Mr. Potter, a shallow bow exact to the millimeter. Gornuk, senior manager of the Black accounts these 41 years. You are punctual. It has been noted in your file. There's a file. There is always a file. Gornuk turned. Walk with me. The office is warded. What is said here in the corridor is heard by the corridor. The corridor curved down and down, past doors of black iron with names in a script Harry couldn't read, and Gornuk asked him nothing and told him nothing, and Harry, remembering Hermione's letter, matched the silence and kept his questions in his pocket with the nut. The office, when they reached it, was round, windowless, and warmer than the corridor. A fire burned in a grate with no chimney. There was a desk of gray stone, 3 chairs, a wall of ledgers bound in cracked leather, and standing by the fire with his hood pushed back, thin as a fence post and grinning like his own younger photographs, was Sirius Black. "You're taller," Sirius said. Harry crossed the room without deciding to. The hug knocked a soft oof out of both of them, and Sirius's laugh happened somewhere above his head, and then his hands gripped Harry's shoulders and held him out at arm's length for inspection. There were new lines on his face, but the gray tinge of Azkaban had faded to something like weather. He smelled of the sea. "You're supposed to be somewhere with palm trees," Harry said. "I was horrible things, palm trees, all the shade land somewhere else." Sirius glanced at Gornuk. "The bank doesn't serve ministry warrants, never has. Goblin sovereignty, Treaty of 1614, subsection something. As long as I'm on bank soil, I'm a client, not a fugitive." "A client with substantial deposits," Gornuk said, settling behind the desk, which improves anyone's legal standing considerably. "Sit, both of you. We have 3 matters tonight, and the third will take the longest." They sat. The fire ticked. Gornuk drew a single sheet of parchment toward himself, read it upside down out of what looked like pure habit, and folded his long fingers. "Matter the first. Lord Arcturus Black, third of that name, died in the winter of 1991. His grandson Sirius, here present, is by blood the senior male of the line. The ministry holds him attainted. The family magic does not, attained or requiring a conviction, and there was, remarkably, never a trial." A pause, dry as dust. "The bank has opinions about governments that imprison the heirs of major depositors without trial. The bank keeps its opinions in vaults with the rest of its valuables. In sum, Sirius Black may claim the lordship, but a lord in hiding is a lord half-armed. He has therefore petitioned to do the next best thing, to secure the succession, to name an heir." "Me," Harry said. "You," Sirius said. He leaned forward, elbows on knees. "Harry, if the ministry ever does attaint me, if they kiss me or kill me or just keep me running, the house goes into abeyance and the ministry appoints a custodian for the estate. Guess who has friends on the appointment committee? Lucius Malfoy has been eyeing the Black Vaults since he married my cousin. I'd sooner leave the lot to Buckbeak." He straightened. "You're Doria's great-grandson, James's boy. There's black blood in you, close enough for the magic to take. It was always going to be you." "And that," Gornuk said, "brings us to matter the second, which is procedure. An heir of the House of Black is not named with ink. The family magic is old, older than the bank's charter, and it accepts or it refuses. The instrument is called the rite of the written blood, 7 drops freely given on tapestry vellum prepared from the family's own records. The vellum writes the truth of the blood, all of it." The goblin's coin-black eyes rested on Harry with something that might have been care if you were the sort of person who went looking for care in a banker. "The bank is required to tell you, the rite cannot be made to lie, cannot be edited, and cannot be unread. Wizards are frequently surprised by their own blood." "It has been noted in many files." "Surprised how?" Harry asked. "Grandmothers," said Sirius. "Somebody's always got a surprise grandmother. Go on, it's 7 drops. I did it at 16 just to watch my mother's face when it listed me anyway." The vellum came out of a drawer in the stone desk, a square of cream gold material that didn't quite lie flat, as though it were breathing. Gornuk set a knife beside it, black-handled, with an edge that seemed to make the light around it quieter. "Your left hand," Gornuk said. 7 drops, count aloud, the counting matters." The knife didn't hurt, which was somehow worse. Harry held his hand over the vellum and counted 1, 2, 3, and his blood didn't bead or splash but sank 4, 5, drawn down into the surface the way rain vanishes into dry earth 6, 7, and the cut on his thumb sealed itself with a sensation like a cold kiss. For a moment nothing, then the vellum began to write. It wrote the way a garden grows, if a garden could grow in seconds. Lines climbing upward from the place his blood had entered, branching, budding, names opening out of the branches like leaves. He saw Potter unfurl in strong black strokes, saw Charles, saw Doria Black beside him with a fine silver line binding the names, saw the writing rise through Fleamont and Euphemia, and it was working backward, he realized, upward into the past, a tree growing toward its own roots, and the names kept opening, black and black and black, Phineas Nigellus, Cygnus, Arcturus, names in silver and ink black climbing into a canopy of ancestors, until the whole square of vellum rustled with them. And the light of the fire moved among the written branches like wind. "There," Sirius said softly. "Told you, Doria's line, clean as anything." But the vellum hadn't stopped. At the base of the tree, where Harry's own name should have budded at the end of James's line, the writing paused, the way a pen pauses when the writer is deciding how to say a difficult thing. Then with great deliberation, in strokes darker and heavier than all the rest, it wrote, Altair Regulus Black B 31 July 1980 Father. Regulus Arcturus Black Mother. ELARA Black, nay FAWLY taken in blood and bond. James CHARLUS Potter, blood father taken in blood and bond. Lily Potter, nay EVANS, blood mother called. Harry James Potter, the blood is true, the bond is true, the name is written, the fire ticked. Below, far below, a cart rattled on its rails and faded. Harry heard his own voice from a distance, saying, "That's wrong." He looked at the branching names, at the four of them gathered around his birth date like people around a cradle, and said it again to Gornuck, who would fix it because banks fixed errors. "It's written me down wrong. The rite cannot be made to lie," Gornuck said quietly, "for a goblin, cannot be edited, cannot be unread, it has been noted in many files." Yeah. The room had gone very close and very loud, though nothing in it made a sound. Harry's thumb, where the knife had kissed it, was numb. "Regulus, that's," he turned. "Sirius, that's your brother." Sirius hadn't moved. He was looking at the vellum the way people look at car accidents, and all the weather had gone out of his face, and underneath it was the Azkaban gray, right there where it had always been, just below. "My little brother," Sirius said, "died in 1981. He was a Death Eater. Signed up at 18 like a good boy, did what mother wanted, what they all wanted, and then he got cold feet and tried to back out, and Voldemort doesn't accept resignations. That's the story. That's been the story for 13 years. Reggie the coward, Reggie who ran." His hand came up and touched the name Alara Black, nay Folly, not quite landing, hovering above the vellum like a man warming his fingers at a fire he doesn't trust. "He was married. He had a son. He had a son and he gave him to James." Sirius's voice did something in the middle of the sentence, some crack poorly plastered over. "He gave his son to James and not to me." "You were a wanted man's best friend in the middle of a war," Gornuck said, "and forgive the observation, Mr. Black, but you were also loud. Matter the third." He rose, went to the wall of ledgers, and did not take down a ledger. He pressed his palm flat against the spine of one, and the wall unmade itself around a deep drawer that had not been there before, and from the drawer he took a box. It was small, dark wood, banded in silver, gone black with years. On the lid, inlaid in mother of pearl, a single constellation, the eagle, with its brightest star picked out in a chip of diamond. Altair. "On the 4th of March, 1981, Gornuck said, setting it on the desk with both hands, "the way you set down something that is owed somewhere, Regulus Black came to this office. He had been my client since his majority. He was 20 years old, he had not slept in some days by the look of him, and he deposited this box under a blood seal to be opened by his son and no other, upon the discovery of the blood, whenever that discovery should come. He paid the storage fee for 100 years. The goblin paused, "in advance, in gold. Men who expect to survive do not do that." The box knew Harry's hand. That was the only way to describe it. The silver bands loosened at his touch like something exhaling, and the lid rose on its own hinge, and inside, on a bed of gray velvet, lay three things: a folded document thick with seals, a ring, silver, cut with the raven end wands, cloven neatly in half so that only one half lay there, its broken face polished mirror bright, and on top of everything a letter addressed in the same narrow upright hand as the summons that had started all this, 3 words only: "For my son." "I'll be in the corridor," Sirius said, rough, already standing. No, Harry didn't know he was going to say it until it was said. "Stay, you're his brother, you should hear it too." So he took the letter and unfolded it and read it aloud with Sirius standing at his shoulder, and the fire in the chimneyless grate burned low and green and quiet. "To my son, who is asleep in the next room while I write this, and who will be a stranger when he reads it. I have started this letter 11 times. Every draft began by apologizing, and I have torn every one of them up because you will have enough people in your life who are sorry, and I would rather be the one who is useful. So. Useful things. Your name is Altair Regulus Black. Your mother chose the first, I the second, and she laughed at me for a solid hour for choosing my own. Your mother was Alara Folly, a healer, the finest I ever met of anything. She was mending the people my colleagues broke, and I was fool enough to be one of her colleagues and lucky enough to be, briefly, one of her patients. She died on the 2nd of February. I will not write how. I will write that she held you first, before anyone, before the midwife could fuss, and that she looked at you for a long time and said, 'Well, he's certainly yours, poor thing,' and that it was the last easy laughter of my life. I took the Dark Lord's mark, and I am going to die undoing it, not because I was brave. Get that out of your head straight away, whatever they tell you later. I signed on at 18 because I was flattered and frightened and my mother wanted it, and I discovered too late that the thing I had sworn to was not a cause but a hunger. Then I found out what he had done to go on living forever. I will not write that here either. I have left what I know where those I trust will find it, and by the time you read this it will be dealt with, or nothing will matter anyway. You will want to know why you are not a Black, why I gave you away. Because he marks the children of traitors, Altair. Because everyone who shares my blood openly will be made to answer for me. Because James Potter is the only man I know whom the war has not made smaller, and because when I came to him at 2 in the morning with you under my cloak, this man I had not spoken to since school, whose politics I was raised to spit on, looked at me for perhaps 5 seconds and then stood aside from his door and said, 'He'll want feeding, whoever he is.' They lost their own son, Altair, born the same week as you, and gone within a day, one small failed heartbeat, and the world never knew because the world was never told. Lily carried her grief into the ritual chamber and came out carrying you, and I want you to understand what that means because it is the whole of everything. The blood adoption is not a disguise, it is true. The old magic does not launder children like stolen gold. She is your mother now as much as Alara was, James your father as much as I. You are not a cuckoo in their nest. You are their son and you are my son, and both of these things are entirely true at once, and if anyone tells you otherwise, including your own grief, including my brother, who will be angry with me about all of this and will be right, you may show them this paragraph, which I have signed separately like a contract. Signed, R.A.B. There is more. There is a document in this box and a broken ring, and both belong to a promise older than you or me, and there is an old man in Sussex, if he lives, who holds the other half of the ring. The document will explain itself. It was my grandfather's amends for the cruelest thing this family ever did, and I countersigned it the week you were born, because I had learned by then exactly what our house's love was worth when it came with conditions, and I wanted yours to come with none. Be better than the house was, make it what it always pretended to be. The motto says Taugers purr, and they all decided it meant blood. Let it mean intention, let it mean the whole heart. Your mother would have told you to eat properly and never trust a man who is cruel to healers. I tell you, love where you like, kneel to no one, and be kind to the house elf. He was braver than all of us. Your father, Regulus Black, who held you while he wrote this, and put the pen down twice just to look at you. The last page Harry did not read aloud, because it was folded separately, sealed small, marked in the corner, later, when you have found her. He put it back in the box with hands that were steadier than they had any right to be, and he became aware that Sirius had walked to the far wall and was standing with his back to the room and his forehead against a shelf of ledgers, and that the sound in the office, low and even and awful, was a grown man crying in the way of someone who learned young to do it silently. Harry looked at Gornock. Gornock examined a ledger spine with tremendous professional interest and said nothing, and in that nothing there was more courtesy than Harry had been shown at the Dursleys' table in 12 years. He waited. The fire burned green. After a while Sirius came back, sat down, scrubbed his sleeve across his face once, and said in nearly his own voice, kind to the house elf. Creature, he said, be kind to Creature. A laugh came out of him with a limp. Merlin's teeth. All right, he nodded at the box. The document then, grandfather's amends. I know Arcturus's seals, that's his wax. Let's see the cruelest thing we ever did, their stiff competition. Gornock drew the document out and unfolded it on the stone desk, and it opened and opened again, a single sheet the size of a tablecloth, written in two hands, one antique and iron straight, one narrow and upright, with a seal at each corner that turned slowly like small planets. The bank holds the master copy, Gornock said. This is the family's counterpart, it is called, and here even the goblin's dry ledger voice slowed down and gave the words their full weight, the concord of the severed branch. Tell him the story, Sirius said. He won't know it, nobody tells it. In 1925, Gornock said, a son was born to Cygnus Black II and Violetta his wife. The child was named Marius. The child was a squib. He let the word sit. The House of Black did not, contrary to rumor, drown its squibs. It did something it considered more hygienic. When the boy turned 11 and no letter came, he was removed from the tapestry, removed from the records, given a purse of Muggle money and the clothes he wore, and placed on the other side of a door which was then closed. He was 11 years old. His name was never spoken in that house again. The bank knows this, and the goblin's eyes glittered, because the bank was instructed to close his trust vault and redistribute the contents, and the bank keeps minutes. Family hygiene, Sirius said, to nobody. Mother had a euphemism for it, pruning. One member of the family objected, Arcturus, the boy's cousin, 17 at the time. He objected loudly enough to be beaten for it, and then he stopped objecting loudly, and the house considered the matter educated out of him. The house was mistaken. Arcturus became lord in 1952, and in the first year of his lordship he came to this office alone and instructed the bank to draft the instrument now on this desk. Wizarding solicitors would not touch it. It admits in writing that the house committed a wrong. Pureblood houses do not put such sentences on parchment. Gornock turned the great sheet toward Harry. He put it on parchment. Read the operative clause aloud if you would. Instruments of this kind like to be heard. The ink was black-brown with age, and the antique hand was so straight it might have been ruled, and Harry read, whereas the House of Black did sever from its tapestry, its table, and its love the child Marius, son of Cygnus, for no crime but the silence of his blood, and whereas blood does not forget, though houses may command it to, now therefore the house binds itself as follows, that the severed branch shall be watched over in secret and want for nothing. That its children shall be counted, though they be counted in a hidden ledger, and that if ever magic should return to the line of Marius, and a witch be born of his blood, the first such witch shall be offered, freely and without compulsion upon her, the place of betrothed heir matched to the heir of the House of Black then living, that she may, if she consents, and only if she consents, be joined to the house which cast her fathers out, that the tapestry may be rewoven. and that the wrong may be paid for in the only coin blood accepts, which is blood honored, blood restored, and blood freely given a home. Below it, in the narrow upright hand, a shorter paragraph, and Harry knew the hand now and read it more slowly. I, Regulus Black, heir of the house, countersign and bind my line to my grandfather's word, this 8th day of August, 1980. My son is 8 days old. I have lately learned everything about how much a house's love can weigh. Let his come to him with the strings already cut. If she comes, let them owe each other nothing but honesty. That is the richest marriage portion in our vaults. Silence again, but a different one with a kind of hum in it, the way the air hums near the tracks before a train. Betrothed, Harry said. The word felt like someone else's coat. That's marriage, that's a marriage contract. It is precisely not, Gringotts said, with the relish of a professional presented with a well-made thing. Read it as a banker, Mr. Potter, since you are too young to read it as a bridegroom. Clause by clause, it compels the house and only the house must offer. The witch may refuse at any time unilaterally without penalty to herself. Nothing whatsoever is asked of either child before the age of 17, and at 17 the parties must jointly affirm or the instrument dissolves like sugar in tea. Meanwhile, one long finger tapped a dense paragraph near the seals. Meanwhile, it armors them. While the conquered stands, no other contract of betrothal, guardianship, apprenticeship, or magical obligation may be laid upon either child without the assent of the house's own council. Do you understand what that clause is, Mr. Potter? In a world of scheming old men, do you understand what that is worth? It's a shield, Harry said slowly. Nobody else can sign either of us up for anything. Nobody else can sign you up for anything. Gringotts said it the way other people recite poetry. Regulus Black spent 30 years watching wizards traffic their children like promissory notes, and he built the one instrument that jams the mechanism, and he disguised it as an apology. I have worked these accounts for 41 years, and it is still the finest thing in them. Sirius had been reading the hidden ledger clause over and over. Harry watched his eyes make the same circuit 3 times. Watched over in secret, Sirius said, counted in a hidden ledger. Gringotts, has magic returned to the line of Marius? Gringotts did not answer with words. He went to the wall and took down the smallest ledger, bound not in leather but in gray linen like a workman's coat, and he opened it to the last written page and turned it around on the desk. The page held a short column of entries in the bank's mechanical record hand. Marius Black, M. 1946, Margaret Hollies of Rye, East Sussex. One daughter, Rosalind, B. 1948. Rosalind, M. 1965, David Wilkins. One daughter, Helen, B. 1966. Helen Wilkins, M. 1978, Richard Granger, dental surgeon. And then a final line, entered in ink that still looked wet after 15 years, because the quill of record had pressed so hard it had nearly gone through the page. One daughter, B. 19 September 1979. Magical, first witch of the returned line. Hermione Granger. The office did the thing where it went very loud with no sound at all. Harry read the name 4 times. He was aware of his own pulse in the cut on his thumb, and of Sirius saying distantly, Granger. Why do I know that name? The one from the lake, the one who stood between you and 100 Dementors, and of Gringotts beginning some sentence about notification protocols, and none of it came in properly because what Harry was mostly doing was laughing. Sitting in a stone office a quarter-mile under London, with a dead father's letter in front of him, and a new name written in his own blood, laughing. Not hysterically, not even loudly, but helplessly, the way you laugh when a long joke finally lands and it turns out the whole thing was kind. Something entertains you, Gringotts observed. It's her. Harry got it under control mostly. You don't understand. I got summoned here by a magic bank about a secret inheritance, and the first thing I did before I even touched the portkey was write to Hermione Granger and ask her what to do, because that's just what I do. It's what I've always done since we were 12. She told me to get everything in certified copies. He pointed at the gray ledger at the pressed hard name. Some contract from 1952 has been waiting 40 years for a witch from the severed line, and it's her. Of everyone in the world it could have been. The person I'd have picked with no contract at all, just to have standing next to me while I read the fine print. He shook his head. Her parents are dentists. She's going to arrive with a list of questions. She's going to cross-examine your tapestry. The bank, said Gringotts, will look forward to it. Her line has a file. Of course it does. Sirius was grinning now too, unsteady but real, the grief and the laughter operating out of the same crack in him. Reggie, you mad little planner, he countersigned this 8 days after you were born. He knew he was going to hide you as a Potter, and he still bound your line to the conquered first, which means he wanted you findable. He built a treasure hunt with you at both ends of it. He stood, restless, walked the round room. Right, rules of engagement. She's a minor, her parents are muggles, and the offer has to be made freely and formally, which means properly in person with her mother and father in the room and a bank officer present, and with the renunciation clause explained before anything else is. She hears the way out before she hears the way in. His voice cooled several degrees, and nobody breathes a word of any of this to anyone at Hogwarts, anyone wearing any sort of beard. On that subject, Gornuk said, one final item, and then the hour is late even by goblin standards. He produced from the box's lower tray a slip of bank vellum, stamped and counterstamped. When Regulus Black made his deposit, he left also a guardianship writ, naming in order his brother Sirius, his cousin Andromeda Tonks, and thereafter the choice of the boy's blood parents. Standard practice is delivery to the office of the chief warlock for registration within 30 days of a parent's confirmed death. The bank attempted this delivery in November of 1981. He slid the slip across. Here is the receipt of attempt. Delivery was accepted at the office of the chief warlock. Logged, sealed. Registration never occurred. The writ was returned to our vault 11 weeks later by third-party courier, unregistered, with an unsigned note stating that in the current emergency, alternative arrangements had been judged to serve the greater good. Gornuk's voice stayed perfectly level, which was its own kind of comment. The office of Chief Warlock in November 1981 was held as it is held today by Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore. The bank draws no conclusions. The bank merely retains receipts. Harry looked at the slip, accepted, logged, sealed, returned, somewhere behind his ribs, very quietly, something that had been off balance for 13 years, some gyroscope that wobbled every summer on the drive back to Privet Drive. Every year he asked why he had to go back there and was given answers that answered nothing, stopped wobbling and came level. It wasn't anger. Anger would come later. He could feel it queued up patiently, like a person who knows the appointment will be kept. What came first was just the level place, the sensation of a fact clicking into a slot cut exactly to its shape. He'd had a guardian. It was supposed to be Sirius. Someone had read that writ and sealed it away and sent a 15-month-old to a cupboard under the stairs and called it the greater good and kept no receipt, not knowing that goblins keep them for everyone. Certified copies, Harry said, of everything. The vellum, the concord, the ledger page, the writ, the receipt. 2 sets, one to stay in the vault, and whatever it costs to make this office the registered address for anything with my name on it, any of my names, I'll pay it. Gornuk looked at him for a long moment and then made a note, and the note took more strokes than it needed, and when the goblin spoke there was a new line item of respect in the ledger of his voice. It has been noted in your file, Mr. Black. They divided the practical matters like people dividing up a map. Sirius would go ahead to the old house in London, the one he'd sworn never to enter again, and see what 13 empty years had left of it. The bank would draft the formal notice to the Grangers, to be delivered by hand by Harry, because some offers should not come from strangers. Harry would go back to Privet Drive for now, 2 weeks at the most, while the guardianship writ, 13 years late, finally crawled toward registration through channels Gornuk described as quieter than the chief warlock's office and considerably harder to lose things in. At the end of it, Sirius walked him back up the curving corridor to the portkey chamber, one hand on his shoulder the whole way, as though he were checking every few steps that Harry was still solid. Altair, Sirius said, trying it. She'd have called you Alt, Ilara. I remember her, you know. Folly girl, couple of years below me, hexed a 7th year into the hospital wing for kicking someone's cat and then visited him twice a day until he healed up. That tracks, that absolutely tracks. He stopped at the chamber door. What do you want to be called? And don't answer fast, you're allowed to take years. Harry thought about it, standing in a torchlit corridor under London with a half ring on a cord around his neck, where it had lain cold for a minute and then taken the warmth of his skin and kept it. Harry, he said, my mum's picked it. He heard the plural arrive in his own sentence, natural as breathing, and watched it land in Sirius's face like light. But I'm keeping the rest, all of it. He wrote it down so someone would find it, and someone found it. Someone found it, Sirius agreed, not quite steadily, and put the silver nut in Harry's palm and folded his fingers over it, the way you'd close a small door on something safe. The last thing Harry saw before the hook caught him was the corridor stretching away behind Sirius, black iron doors with unreadable names, going down and down into the dark that held, somewhere among its ledgers and its vaults, a sealed page marked later, when you have found her. Privet Drive at 1 in the morning was the same as it had always been, the same streetlight stripe on the ceiling, the same radiator tick, the same thin carpet worn pale in a path from door to bed by 10 years of a child told to stay in his room. Harry sat down at the wobbly desk, took out parchment, and did what she had told him to do. He wrote down everything before sleep could rewrite it. It took 4 pages. His handwriting fell apart in the middle of the second one, at the part where he tried to record what the vellum had written, and he stopped and flexed his fingers and made himself do it properly. Altair Regulus Black, B31 July 1980. His own hand, writing his own name, and the letters looked like a stranger's until he got to the birthday, which was still his, which had always been his. Same boy, same day. One more mother, one more father, and all 4 of them dead protecting him, which was a kind of arithmetic he decided not to do at 1 in the morning. He recorded the conquered clause by clause the way Gornuk had walked through it. The house must offer. She may refuse at any time without penalty. Nothing until 17. The shield paragraph he underlined twice and then wrote beneath it because the page was his and no one else would read it. This is the part she'll like best. She'll pretend it's the history, it'll be this. He recorded the receipt last, accepted, logged, sealed, returned unregistered, greater good unsigned. He looked at that entry for a while and then drew a small box around it, neat and closed, the way you contain a thing you intend to deal with later on your own schedule with witnesses of your choosing. Then he took out a fresh sheet and wrote Dear Hermione and stopped. He tried, something happened at the bank, true, useless. He tried, you know how you said I was probably in somebody's will, and got as far as it turns out the will is sort of about both of us before he read it back, appalled, and scratched it out so hard the quill sputtered. There was no version of this that worked on paper. On paper, Betrothed Heir match arrived before Marius did, before the Garden of Names, before a 20-year-old writing to a sleeping baby with the pen put down twice. On paper it was a headline. Out loud in the right order with her parents there and the way out explained before the way in, it was what it actually was, which was somebody's grandfather trying to give back a stolen thing and somebody's father cutting the strings off a gift. In the end he wrote, Hermione, back safe. You were right about the dinner, right about the copies, right about writing it down, 4 pages. I can't put the rest in a letter, and not because it's bad. It's the opposite of bad, it's just the kind of thing that has an order to it, and letters get the order wrong. Can I come to you? Your parents should be there too. I mean that in the most boring, official way possible. There'll be paperwork, you'll love it. Harry P.S. When you see a gray linen ledger, ask them what's in it. You've had a file since you were born. So it turns out, he read it over twice, decided the postscript was exactly the right amount of unfair, and set it aside for Hedwig, who was back from hunting and watching him with both amber eyes, visibly holding opinions about the evening's security arrangements. Under his shirt, the half-ring held the warmth of his skin. 8 weeks until term. Her house was in Crawley. Some letters you don't open until you can open them out loud. Chapter 1 and Chapter 2. The Granger line. The guardianship writ cleared registration on a Tuesday, through a sub-office of the Department of Magical Records that Gornuck had selected, he said, for the excellence of its filing and the incuriosity of its staff. On Wednesday morning a bank courier delivered 2 documents to number 4 Privet Drive, one for Harry confirming that his legal guardian under wizarding law was now, and had technically been since 1981, Sirius Orion Black, and one for the Dursleys. Harry watched Uncle Vernon read the second one at the breakfast table. It was a fine piece of work. It informed the Dursleys that the wizarding guardianship of their nephew had been formally assumed by his godfather, that the family would be compensated for 13 years of fostering at a rate calculated by the bank, the sum enclosed as a banker's draft, redeemable at any branch of Barclays, and that the boy would be collected on Saturday at 10 o'clock in the morning by a representative of the noble and most ancient house of Black. Vernon's mustache went through several distinct weather systems. The draft, when he unfolded it, produced a stillness at the table like the stillness after a struck bell. Collected, Vernon said at last in a voice from which everything had drained except capitalism. Saturday, 10 o'clock, Harry said, buttering his toast. You'll want to be out, probably. He's a convicted murderer. He considered the toast with sudden interest in doing things properly the way Gornuck did. Well, accused, there's a difference, it turns out. It's got quite important lately. Petunia's teacup had stopped halfway up. Over its rim she was looking at Harry the way she'd looked at him on the doorstep 13 years ago, or so he imagined. There was old arithmetic moving behind her eyes. She said nothing. She said nothing so loudly that Harry, gathering his plate, almost asked, there would be time later for whatever Petunia knew and didn't say. He had learned this summer that sealed things kept, and that the trick was knowing they existed. Saturday at 10 o'clock, a motorcycle the size of a bull seal idled up to the curb in front of number 4, and off it stepped, in muggle leathers, helmet under his arm, hair like an advertisement for something illegal, a man the tabloids had spent a year calling the most dangerous wizard in Britain. He rang the doorbell. He was very polite. He complimented Petunia's hydrangeas in a voice that carried the length of the street, and thanked the Dursleys for their years of service to his family, pronouncing service and family with a courtesy that had knives all through it, and he carried Harry's trunk out to the sidecar himself while every net curtain on Privet Drive twitched like a struck web. That, Sirius said, buckling the trunk down, was for James. He always wanted to see their faces. Right. He handed Harry a helmet, and his grin flattened out into something with a purpose in it. You've had my letter about the house. It's bad, Harry. 13 years empty, and it wasn't friendly before that, but it's warded like a fortress. It's unplottable, it's mine, and there's one thing in it I think you'd better see before we do anything else. Well, one person. Number 12, Grimmauld Place, unfolded itself out from between numbers 11 and 13 like a conjurer producing a card that had been up his sleeve for a century. Sooty brick, blind windows, a black door with a silver knocker shaped like a twisted serpent and no keyhole, no letterbox. Inside, the hall was long and dark and smelled of damp cloth and dust with something bitter underneath it, gaslight guttering awake along the walls as though the house were grudgingly acknowledging visitors. A row of shrunken elf heads mounted on plaques climbed the stair wall. Harry stopped in front of them. I know, Sirius said. First thing to go, I promise. The house's decorating opinions are its own. The house's opinions over the next hour turned out to include a troll's leg umbrella stand, curtains that hissed, a chandelier that shifted its weight overhead like a roosting bird, and behind a set of moth-eaten velvet drapes on the first landing, a portrait the size of a barn door. Sirius drew the drapes aside with the air of a man ripping off a bandage. The painted woman inside had been handsome once in the way of cliff faces, black-dressed, yellow-skinned, drooling slightly in her sleep. Sirius said tightly, "Mother," and the eyes snapped open. What happened next Harry mostly experienced as pressure. She screamed about blood traitors, about shame, about besmirchment. The portrait's voice hit the hall like weather, and Sirius shouted back, and the curtains fought him, and it might have gone on all day if the thing that had shuffled out of the kitchen stair had not stopped dead in the middle of the hall, staring at Harry, and dropped the tarnished tray it was carrying. The clang cut through everything. Even the portrait paused. The house elf was ancient, bat-eared, bloodshot-eyed, wearing a filthy rag with the resentful dignity of a deposed king. It was staring at Harry with its whole crouched body, nostrils flared wide, and it took 2 steps toward him and stopped and took another, like something pulled on a line it didn't trust. "Creature," Sirius began, warning in it. "Master Sirius brings a boy into Mistress's house," Creature rasped, in a voice like a rusted hinge, eyes never leaving Harry. "The Potter boy, the famous Harry Potter. Oh, Creature knows what the Daily Prophet says, the mudblood lover's godson, and yet..." The elf's throat worked. He was close now, closer than sense, and he inhaled once deliberately, the way a sommelier does. "And yet, back off him," Sirius said. "It's all right," Harry said and crouched, which put his eyes level with the elf's, and he thought of the last line of a letter he had read aloud in a stone office. "Be kind to the house elf. He was braver than all of us. Creature, my name used to be different." The old elf went very still. "My father wrote me a letter before he died. He mentioned you." Harry kept his voice even, the way you talk to something wild on a windowsill, not the way people mention servants. "He told me to be kind to you because you were braver than all of them. His name was Regulus." Later, Harry would try 3 times to describe to Hermione the sound Creature made, and give up all 3 times. It was not a wail, though it had a wail in it. The elf folded down onto the flagstones as though his strings had been cut, and pressed his forehead to the floor. Not in servility, Harry understood somehow, but because the alternative was falling, and out of him came words in a flood. Half to Harry and half to nobody. Master Regulus's boy. Creature smelled it. Creature smelled the blood and did not dare believe. The little master, alive, and the whole time the portrait of Walburga Black hung silent in its frame. Staring down at the scene with an expression Harry couldn't read and didn't try to. Sirius had gone white. "Creature, you knew Regulus had a son." Creature carried him, the elf said into the floor, and the rusted hinge of his voice swung open on something soft and ruined. 3 nights when it was not safe for Master to go himself. Creature carried the little master under warming charms and gave him to the red-haired witch at the potter's door, and Mistress never knew, and Creature never spoke it. Never, not to Mistress, not to anyone. Master's last. The voice shut like a door. Creature's hands, flat on the flagstones, had begun to shake. "Not the last order, the other order. Creature keeps Master's secrets." "There's something he's carrying," Harry said quietly to Sirius, watching the elf tremble. "Something he was ordered to do." "Dad's letter said I left what I know where those I trust will find it." Creature. Sirius crouched too now, and for the first time in 13 years, perhaps in 30, he addressed the elf with none of the old contempt. The hall had rearranged something in both of them. "In this house sleeps my brother's son. Whatever Regulus started, it's his blood's business now. When you're ready, you'll tell us. That's not an order, that's the family asking." The elf lifted his face at last, wet and furrowed, and looked between them, the last 2 blacks, the traitor and the hidden one, and something in the ancient bloodshot eyes performed a slow, creaking recalibration, like an instrument being reset after years of drift. "The little master will want tea," Creature said with shattering dignity, and picked up his tray and shuffled off toward the kitchen, and that was the first day. The letter to Crawley took 4 drafts, even with Sirius helping, or possibly because Sirius was helping. In the end it said only that the matter from the bank had grown, that it now concerned the Granger family directly and formally, and that Harry would like to come and explain everything in person with a representative of Gringotts at their convenience in their home, because the explanation had an order to it and the order mattered. Hermione's reply came back in 9 hours, Saturday, 2 o'clock. "Mum is making a cake and Dad is pretending he isn't nervous, and I am not pretending anything, Harry. I have been staring at the phrase concerns your family directly and formally for 10 minutes. You know I'll take this apart clause by clause, whatever it is." Good was Gornuk's professional assessment when Harry showed it to him. "The ones who take it apart clause by clause sign the fewest bad contracts and hold the most grudges against those who deserve them. The bank will send the linen ledger." It should meet her. Number 7 Heathgate Close, Crawley, was a red brick semi with a clematis over the porch and a bay window, and it looked so resolutely ordinary that the black-suited goblin walking up its front path with a briefcase chained to his wrist seemed like a printing error. Hermione opened the door before anyone knocked. She'd grown an inch since June, her hair was up in the fight me arrangement she used for exams, and her eyes went from Harry to Sirius in his court-respectable robes to Gornock and back to Harry cataloging, and what she said was, "You've been sleeping, you never sleep properly by August. Whatever it is, it's not bad." A pause, one notch quieter. "Is it? It's not bad," Harry said. "It's big. It's the biggest thing I've ever had to say to anyone, and I've been practicing the order for a week." "Can we come in?" The sitting room had cake on the good plates and tea in a pot with roses on it. Richard Granger was tall and sandy and shook hands like a man who'd read that Goblin's valued a firm grip, which, Gornock's face suggested, had been noted in a file. Helen Granger had Hermione's exact way of sitting forward when she was about to concentrate. On the mantelpiece among the family photographs stood a small framed picture, black and white, of a young man in 1940s clothes with a rose in his buttonhole, and Harry, primed by a gray linen ledger, felt the picture like a hand on his shoulder before anyone had said a word. They did it in the order they'd agreed, and the order held. Harry went first and told it plainly. The summons, the vault, the 7 drops, the vellum writing a garden of names, and then the 4 names around his birthday and what they meant. He watched Hermione's face do the work in real time, hypothesis, resistance, revision, landing, and when he finished, so legally and magically and in every way that turns out to count, "I'm both. I'm James and Lily's son, and I'm Regulus and Alara's son. Harry Potter and Altair Black." Both true at once. She didn't say any of the 12 things other people would have said. She said, "Blood adoption. That's why the Potter glamour never needed maintaining. It's not a glamour at all." And then, arriving at it the way she arrived at arithmancy proofs, fast and appalled, "Harry, your parents died protecting you. All 4 of your parents died protecting you." "Yeah," Harry said. "I decided not to do that arithmetic at 1 in the morning. I recommend it as a policy." Sirius went second and told the story of a family that pruned. He told it without sparing his own name's share, the heads on the staircase wall, the tapestry with its scorch marks, and then the year 1936, and a boy named Marius whose letter never came, and a door that closed. Helen Granger's hand crept up to the locket at her throat halfway through the telling and stayed there. When Sirius finished, she rose without a word and took down the framed photograph from the mantel and set it on the tea table, facing them, next to the cake. "My grandfather," she said, "Marius Gray. He's still alive. He's 69. He lives in Rye, near where Granny Margaret's people were from. He taught me to press roses. He is the gentlest man I have ever known, and once a year on a day in September he shuts himself in his room and doesn't come out, and my grandmother told me before she died never to ask him about it." Her chin was level, her voice was a dentist's voice, precise under pressure. "The day the letters come, that's the day, isn't it? Some school somewhere sends its letters, and my grandfather remembers being 11. September the 1st, Sirius said quietly. "The train leaves at 11 in the morning. He'd have watched the calendar every year. Mrs. Granger, I'm sorry, my family did that. I won't dress it up." "Your family also sent someone to say so," Helen said, looking at Harry, "which no one has done in 58 years. Go on, there's more. You've all got the faces of people who are only halfway through." Gornock went third. The briefcase unchained itself. The concord of the severed branch unfolded across the Grangers' tea table like a tide coming in, seals turning slowly at the corners, and the linen ledger was set beside it, open to the page where a quill had pressed Hermione's name nearly through the paper. The goblin read the operative clause aloud, all of it, and then before a single question could be asked, he did what Sirius had insisted on that first night in the stone office. He read the way out before the way in. Clause the 9th, the which of the returned line may refuse this offer at any time before or after acceptance, unilaterally, without cause given, without penalty, forfeit, or magical consequence to herself or her line, and upon such refusal the House of Black shall owe her line its protection in perpetuity regardless. Note the final word, Miss Granger, regardless. Refusal costs you nothing. It does not even cost you the house's protection. Arcturus Black wrote a contract in which the house takes on every obligation and the offered party takes on none, because the debt being paid is the house's own. As a banker, I am obliged to tell you it is a catastrophically one-sided instrument. As the manager of this account for 41 years, I am obliged to tell you the one-sidedness was the point. Silence in a sitting room in Crawley, with the tea going cold and a tide of parchment on the table, and a black and white young man with a rose in his buttonhole looking out of 1946. "Betrothed Heir match," Hermione said. Her voice was steady, which Harry, who knew her voice in 20 weathers, understood to be a construction project. "That's the phrase, that's what it says. I'm named by name in a betrothal instrument written 27 years before I was born." "You're named by description," Gornock corrected, with precision that was somehow gentle. "First witch born of the line of Marius. The quill of record identified you the night of your birth. The instrument does not know you. It waited for whoever you would be. It waited for whoever I would be." She stood up. She walked to the window and back one circuit, which was her thinking lap. Harry had watched her wear a groove like that in front of every common room fire at Hogwarts. "All right. I want to be very clear about what I'm feeling because I've read about this and I know how it goes. She turned and faced the room, chin up. Some part of the wizarding world has once again decided things about me without asking me. A tapestry has opinions about my marriage. In most books, this is the part where the girl is grateful. I am not grateful, I'm furious. Good, said Sirius. She blinked at him. That's the correct response, Sirius said. You've just described my entire childhood, by the way. A house that decides things about you without asking. The difference, and I say this as the person in this room with the most cause to hate every syllable my family ever put on parchment, is in the mechanics. So take it apart, clause by clause, your words will wait. And she did. She sat back down, pulled the great sheet toward her, and actually read it, for 40 minutes, while her mother cut cake and her father asked serious, increasingly technical questions about motorcycle maintenance, and Gornuk sat with his hands folded in the manner of a craftsman watching his work inspected by someone qualified. She asked for a pencil. She was given by Gornuk a bank pencil, and the look she gave it suggested she understood she was being courted institutionally and declined to be charmed. Her margin notes accumulated. Twice she laughed, once at the hidden ledger clause, they've been paying for things. Harry, there's a scholarship at my primary school. I got it. It's called the Rose Fund, tell me that's a coincidence. And once, shorter and stranger, at the shield paragraph, which she read 3 times and then pushed across to Harry with her finger on it. You know what this clause is, she said. Gornuk says it jams the mechanism. It's the reason we were allowed to hear about all the rest of it, Hermione said. Think. You're the most famous minor in Wizarding Britain. You're an orphan. Technically, you weren't even that. You were a hidden heir with an unregistered guardian, which means for 13 years you have been a walking vacancy. Anyone with enough standing could have filed to fill it. Marriage contracts, apprenticeship bonds, wardship petitions. Why hasn't anyone? What's been sitting in a vault under London flagging every attempt? She tapped the paragraph. This has. It's not part of the apology. It's the fence around the apology. Arcturus knew that a contract that generous would draw predators to both children the moment it activated, so he built the shield into the same instrument so that neither of us could be got at ever by anyone without the house's own counsel saying yes. She sat back. It's been protecting me since I was born and I never felt it. That's how good the fence is. It has on 4 occasions been tested, Gornuk said. The bank does not disclose by whom. The bank will say that all 4 petitions died in a sub-office of natural causes and that the petitioners never learned why. The goblin's smile was a brief display of professional teeth. The instrument does not only jam the mechanism, Miss Granger, it eats the paperwork. 4 times. Richard Granger set down his teacup. He'd been quiet through most of it, watching his daughter work, and his voice now had the flat calm that Hermione's took on at the edge of a genuine line. Someone has tried 4 times to file legal claims on my daughter or this boy, and a contract written in 1952 by a dead man ate the paperwork. He looked around the room. I want to shake this Arcturus's hand. Failing that, I want to know what we do next, because I gather from all your faces that there's a formal step, and I want to hear my daughter's read on it before anyone else speaks, including me. Hermione looked down at the great sheet, at her 40 minutes of pencil. There are 3 levels, she said slowly, working it out loud for the room but mostly Harry knew for herself. Refusal, which costs nothing and closes the tapestry again. Acknowledgement, which is signing to say I know the offer exists, I accept the house's protection, I reserve everything else. An affirmation, which can't even happen until we're both 17 and requires both of us jointly or it dissolves. She looked up at Gornuk. Acknowledgement binds me to nothing. Verify. To nothing, Gornuk said. It binds the house to you. Protection, standing, access to the family's resources and records. You would hold the status of heir match presumptive, which obligates you to no person and no conduct. In exchange, the house receives, he consulted the parchment with theatrical care, clause the 14th, the honor of her name upon its tapestry if she consents to be woven. That is the entire consideration, her name, woven, and the betrothal part. She said the word like she was picking it up with forceps. Nobody expects, nobody assumes, this isn't a quiet way of at 17 there's not going to be a room full of people looking at me. At 17, Harry said, there's going to be a piece of paper that dissolves unless we both, actively in writing, say otherwise. That's all it is. It's a question that's not allowed to ask itself until we're grown, and in the meantime it stands in the doorway and stops anyone else from asking either of us anything. He'd thought about how to say the next part for a week, and it still came out only half-planned. Hermione, when the ledger opened and it was your name, I laughed. Gornuk witnessed it. It's probably in a file. Not because it's a betrothal. That word's as weird for me as it is for you. Because of everyone in the world an old dead man's apology could have pointed at, it pointed at the person I'd already have picked to read the fine print with. That's all I've got. There's no clause about what it means. We'd get to decide what it means. Nobody's decided anything about either of us today except a quill in 1979, and all it decided was that you exist. The sitting room was quiet. Helen Granger was looking at her daughter with an expression Harry couldn't parse, pride and fear holding hands. Richard was looking at Harry with the specific assessing frown of a father revising a file of his own. And Hermione was looking at the linen ledger at the pressed hard name, and her jaw was set at the exam hall angle, and when she finally spoke it was to Gornock, and it was a question none of them had predicted. The tapestry, when a name is woven back, does it show the whole line, the people between? Every soul between the severed branch and the returned witch, Gornock said. That is the weaving. The line is restored entire or not at all. So if I sign the acknowledgement, Hermione said, my great-grandfather goes back on the wall of the house that threw him out, by name Regulus Black, after 58 years. Her voice stayed level and her eyes had gone bright, and she blinked it back like someone refusing to be rushed by her own heart. Then I want to see him first, before I sign anything. He gets asked before I do, because it was done to him first and nobody asked him anything, they just closed a door. She stood and started stacking plates with ferocious efficiency, which was what she did instead of crying. Mum, we should ring Rye tonight. Harry, you're coming, bring the ring. The house in Rye stood on a cobbled lane that fell steeply toward Salt Marsh, and its front garden was roses, floor to wall, 60 years of them, pruned by someone who did it the slow way, by hand, without magic, because he had no magic, because that was the whole story. Marius Grey, born Black, was small and neat and white-haired, with Hermione's own habit of tilting his head when he listened, and he met them at his gate with secateurs still in one hand and no idea yet why his granddaughter had brought two strangers and a nervous silence to Sussex on a Sunday. They did it gently in his front room with the sea light coming through lace curtains. Hermione told most of it. She'd insisted on that on the drive down. He hears it from Blood. When she got to the words, the House of Black, the old man set down his teacup and his face didn't crumple. It went instead very still and very correct, a boy's face from 1936 surfacing under the wrinkles like a watermark, a face schooled at a cold table to show nothing, and Harry recognized it. He had worn it at the Dursleys' table all his life. And when Hermione finished and the room held its breath, Marius said in a voice like dry paper, "You will forgive me. At my age one hears things wrongly. I thought you said that Arcturus wrote it down." He turned his head aside one sharp movement and looked out the window at his roses. Arcturus, the big cousin, he fought them, when the letter didn't come. 17, and he stood in the drawing room and shouted at my grandfather, at the whole assembled pack of them, that magic that couldn't keep a family wasn't worth the wand it rode on. They beat him for it. He came to see me after, at the school they'd parked me in before the door shut for good, climbed the fence. The paper voice wavered, held. He gave me half a ring and he said, "This is a black thing, Marius. We cut things in half when we mean to mend them," and he said, "Keep it, and one day someone will come with the other half if I have to arrange it from the grave." And then no one came. For 58 years no one came, and I thought, well, he was 17. Boys say things. Harry stood up. His half of the ring was warm from his skin, and he lifted the cord over his head and crossed the sea-lit room and held it out on his open palm. The raven and wands cloven, its broken face polished mirror-bright from 13 years in a box marked for my son. "He arranged it from the grave, sir," Harry said. "It just took 2 graves and a bank." The old man's hands did not shake as he went to the sideboard and took out a small tin that had once held tobacco, and unwrapped from a square of chamois, a half-ring worn bright with 60 years of being privately held. When the two halves met on the lace tablecloth, edge to edge, and knit themselves back into a whole ring with a sound like a cord being resolved, a sound felt in the teeth and the sternum rather than heard, Marius Grey put both hands over his face and wept at last in the way of a man finishing something, and Hermione knelt at the arm of his chair and held on to him, and Sirius stood by the window with the light on him, looking like a man watching a debt he'd thought unpayable being paid by other hands. "Well," said Marius eventually, into the wet handkerchief his granddaughter had supplied, with a shred of the family's iron surfacing his humor, which was where the iron had gone in him, all of it, all along. "Well, I find I have views, young woman, on this document of yours. I am given to understand I get asked first. Then I ask this, is it true the old pile in London has my mother's tapestry on the drawing-room wall? Then sign it, girl, and put us back, every name between me and you." Not for them. He lowered the handkerchief, and his eyes, red-rimmed, were the exact fierce brown of his great-granddaughters. For Arcturus. Somebody kept his word for him. It would be rude to leave the job half done. He showed them the garden before they left, because visitors to Rye were shown the garden the way visitors to churches are shown the east window, and he named the roses as they went, 60 years of grafts and stubbornness, and stopped at a bush of white ones grown against the warmest wall. "Margaret," he said, "my wife, not named for her. She bred it, crossed it herself over 9 seasons, and registered it with the society under my name, because hers, she said, was going on the gravestone eventually, and mine needed something to outlast the family that binned it." He touched one bloom with the back of a knuckle, an old habit worn gentle. "She knew, you understand, everything. I told her on our 3rd evening, magic, the tapestry, the door, all of it. A man shouldn't ask a woman to marry a mystery." She was quiet for a minute, and then she said, "Well then, we shall have to be the good part of the story when it finally gets told." He looked at Harry and at his great-granddaughter, and the fierce brown eyes had gone bright again, but his voice held the line. 50 years I wondered what she meant. Took you 2 until Tuesday to sort it. When you sign girl, sign her name in your head alongside. She earned the footnote. The first sign that the wider world had noticed anything came, as the first sign always did, by Owl. It found Harry at Grimmauld Place on the Thursday before the signing, which was itself informative, because Grimmauld Place was unplottable and warded to the chimney pots, and the owl had not come to the house. It had come to the bank, and the bank had forwarded it under its own seal, with a covering note from Gornock that read, in its entirety, "The following was addressed to you at a residence you no longer occupy. It was collected by our agent from the windowsill of number 4 Privet Drive, where it had been waiting 2 days. The bank observes that the sender did not know you had gone. The bank finds this interesting, given who maintains the wards there." The letter inside was written in a looping, elegant hand Harry knew from 6 years of Hogwarts notices and 1 glimmering ceiling's worth of announcements. "Dear Harry, I hope this letter finds you well and that the summer is treating you kindly. I write with a request and I confess a mild concern. Arabella Figg tells me you have not been seen in the neighborhood this fortnight, and while I am sure there is an innocent explanation, you will understand that an old man worries. There are matters we ought to discuss before the school year begins, some touching on your safety, which has ever been my first concern, and some touching on certain family matters of which you may lately have become aware. These things are better spoken of than written. The Weasleys would, I know, be delighted to have you at the Burrow for the remainder of the holidays. I could meet you there at your convenience. Until then, I would counsel patience regarding any documents that may have come your way. Old papers are like old wands, Harry, unpredictable in inexperienced hands. With warm regards, Albus Dumbledore. Harry read it twice, then handed it across the kitchen table to Hermione, who read it once, laid it flat, and took out a pencil. "Sentence by sentence," she said. "Tell me what you see." "He knows," Harry said, "certain family matters of which you may lately have become aware. He knows about the inheritance test, or he's guessed. And he wants me at the Burrow, where he can drop in, and he wants it before September. Better look at the 3rd paragraph." She underlined it. "I would counsel patience regarding any documents. He doesn't name them. If he named them, he'd be admitting he knows what they are, and the only way he knows what they are," she looked up, "is if he's known all along. Nobody told him about the Concord this month, Harry. The bank didn't. We didn't. So either he's fishing, or he's known since 1981, and this letter is him finding out how much you know. Either way, the correct answer is the same, which is the most boring letter ever written." She pulled a fresh sheet toward her. "Polite, warm, empty. You're having a lovely summer with your legal guardian. All correspondence regarding legal matters goes through the account office at Gringotts. You look forward to seeing him at the welcome feast. Sign it Harry Potter, nothing else, no other names, and let him spend August wondering which name you'd have used if he'd asked a straight question." Sirius, who had been leaning against the dresser through all of this with his arms folded, made a sound low in his throat that Padfoot would have recognized. "Arabella Figg," he said. "Batty old dear with the cats, 2 streets over from your aunt's. She's a squib. She's also order from the war, which means she wasn't a neighbor, Harry. She was a watch post. 13 years, he came and sat, and the humor had gone out of him entirely, and what was left was older and stiller. Here's what I can't stop chewing. He had eyes on that house the whole time, which means the cupboard, the bars on the window that Ron told me about, the locks. Either his watch post never reported it, or she reported it, and it didn't move him. I knew the man half my life, and I don't know which one I'd bet on, and I hate that I don't know, because there was a time I'd have bet my wand hand on him." "Don't bet anything yet," Hermione said. Her pencil had stopped. "That's the discipline. We have 1 receipt and 1 letter. The receipt proves he intercepted a guardianship writ and called it the greater good. That's real, and it's damning, and at the right moment, in front of the right people, it's checkmate on the guardianship question forever. Is 1 move, and if we spend it in August in private by Owl, it buys us 1 satisfying scene and no protection at all." She slid Dumbledore's letter into the folder she had, of course, already started, and tied the string. "He counsels patience about documents. Fine, we'll be patient about documents, all of them, including his." Sirius looked at her for a long moment and then at Harry and jerked his thumb at her. "Reggie would have liked her," he said. "That's not a small thing, mind." Reggie didn't like anyone. The boring letter went out the next morning through the bank. No answer came, which was an answer. And in a sub-office of the Department of Magical Records in the 3rd week of that July, a quiet query was logged, requesting the registration status of any standing contracts naming the minor H.J. Potter. The query was submitted under the seal of the Chief Warlock. It was received by a clerk of excellent filing and no curiosity, rooted according to protocol drafted decades earlier by parties unknown, and forwarded intact and unanswered to a stone office a quarter-mile beneath London, where a goblin read it twice by green firelight and filed it in a drawer of similar things, and made in a grey linen ledger a small notation whose translation from gobbledygook was, approximately, "The fence has been leaned on. The fence held." She signed the acknowledgment on the 24th of July, a Sunday, in the drawing-room at Grimmauld Place, at the great table under the tapestry, with her parents on one side and Marius on the other, and Creature hovering at the door in a tea-towel he had, without comment or explanation, laundered. The tapestry took up the whole wall, and it was a ruin and a glory at once. 7 centuries of names in thread gone gold-black with age, and the scorch marks like bullet wounds where Walburga's wand had burned out the disappointing Sirius, Andromeda, and there, 3 generations up, a burn the size of a fist where a boy named Marius had been made never to have existed. Gornock laid the Concord across the table. Hermione read it one final time, straight through, because she was Hermione. Then she took up the quill and paused, nib over parchment. For the record, she said, to the room, to the wall of names, to whatever in the old house was listening, and something was, the gas flames had all leaned in like ears. I'm not signing because a contract chose me, I'm signing because I read it, and because my great-grandfather asked, and because, her eyes found Harry across the table, somebody I trust told me we'd get to decide what it means. Those are my clauses, witness them. Witnessed, said Sirius and Gornock together, and witnessed, creaked Creature from the doorway, unbidden, and she signed. Hermione Jean Granger of the line of Marius. What happened then, Harry would hold on to for the rest of his life, through everything that came after, the way you hold a stone from a particular beach. The ink left the page. It rose off the parchment in a fine dark thread, like smoke that had decided on a purpose, and it drifted the length of the table and touched the scorched wound in the tapestry, and the burn began to unburn. Thread found thread. The fist-sized wound filled from its edges inward with weave the color of new gold, Marius Black blooming letter by letter out of the mend. And then the line dropped, stitch by stitch, through names none of that wall had ever held: Margaret, Rosalind, David, Helen, Richard, Muggle names woven in the same gold as 7 centuries of wizards. The house acquiescing to them with a long groan of settling timbers, like an old spine straightening, and at the foot of the line, last, the threads gathered and spelled. In gold brighter than all the rest, Hermione, and beneath it, in the formal script the tapestry reserved for standing, ere matched to the air, by her own hand. Nobody spoke. Marius stood with his restored whole ring on his finger, looking up at his mother's tapestry, at his own name in gold on the wall of the house that had unmade him, and he held his great-granddaughter's hand, and the sea would have been proud of the silence they kept. It was Creature in the end who broke it, shuffling forward with a tray of tea things nobody had requested, setting it down with a click, and announcing to the drawing room at large in a rasp polished up into something almost like ceremony, "The house is more than it was this morning. Creature will make dinner for 9. 9, Sirius counted the room twice. There are 7 of us, you mad old thing. Creature drew himself up to his full and inconsiderable height and looked at the tapestry, at the 2 names newly gold at the foot of 2 mended lines, and said with the finality of scripture, Creature counts the master and the little mistress twice. They are each 2 people. It is, he added, daring anyone to argue, more work. And in the dark kitchen that night, at the scrubbed table, over a dinner cooked for 9 and eaten by 7, with her parents debating rose graphs, with Marius and Sirius telling a lie about a motorcycle to Richard, who knew it was a lie and had begun, visibly against his will, to enjoy him, Hermione leaned her shoulder against Harry's once briefly, the way she did in the library when a proof finally went through, and said under the noise, 2 people each. We'll have to introduce them all. All 4 of us, no rush, Harry said. Apparently we've got until 17. She laughed into her water glass, and above them the old house creaked and settled around its new gold thread, and on the drawing-room wall in the dark, 7 centuries of names kept watch over 2 more. Chapter 2 and Chapter 3, Number 12, reborn on the 31st of July, Harry Potter turned 14, and for the first time in living memory the event was noticed by more than one person. He came down to the kitchen at 8 to find it transformed. Creature had been up since some hour that predated hours. The long table wore a cloth Harry had never seen, white damask with the raven and wands worked into the corners, and on it sat a breakfast of the sort that gets painted rather than eaten, and a cake because Creature held views about the proper sequencing of cake that no one had dared contradict, and around the table, variously pajamaed and dressing-gowned, and in Marius's case fully dressed with a rose in his buttonhole because standards did not sleep, sat everyone. They sang, badly. Sirius conducted with a fork. The presents were a modest pile by Dudley's metrics and an impossible one by Harry's. A wand holster from Sirius, dragon hide worn soft, that had been Regulus's. Harry buckled it on, and Sirius looked at it on his forearm for a moment and then away, and neither of them made anything of it, which was how they had learned to manage such moments, by letting them through with the traffic. A book from Marius Muggle second hand, The Prince and the Pauper, inscribed in careful fountain pen, for the boy who is both, it can be done, and be a penknife from Ted that opened any lock that doesn't object on principle. From Andromeda, a slim volume bound in gray silk, a grammar of the House of Black, which she informed him was one of 4 copies in existence and the only one annotated by somebody sane. From Tonks, a sneakoscope she had personally offended so that he could see what it did when it went off, which it was still doing, faintly, from inside its box, like a kettle sulking. Hermione's parcel he opened last because she was watching him with the contained fidget of somebody who has either done something exactly right or catastrophically wrong with no middle option. It was a photograph album, Not a new one, the leather was scuffed, the corners soft. She had written to Remus Lupin, it turned out, and to half a dozen of his parents' surviving schoolmates, and to Bathilda Bagshot of Godric's Hollow, and she had asked for pictures, and people had sent them. James at 17 with his tie around his head, Lily asleep in a library carrel much as Hermione herself slept in kitchens, the wedding, confetti hanging in the air in looping magical orbits. And then, because Hermione defined a family by its actual boundaries and not its convenient ones, the last third of the album given over to a narrow-faced, careful-eyed boy in Slytherin colors. Regulus at 12 with a beater's bat too big for him, Regulus at 16 reading in a window, Regulus at 18 in formal robes looking like someone bracing to be photographed, and only one that Bathilda had sent with a note saying she'd never known who the young man was. Regulus in muggle clothes on a bench in Godric's Hollow in the spring of 1981, looking at something out of frame with an expression the camera had caught between grief and resolve, 4 streets from James Potter's door. The kitchen had gone quiet around the last page. There aren't any of Alara, Hermione said into the quiet, businesslike because her voice would have gone otherwise. Yet, the Follies were scattered by the war, but there's a grey tant in Portugal who answered my letter, and she's looking. So there's a section reserved, it's not finished. It's the kind of album that doesn't finish, that's the point of it. I've labeled everything I could verify and left queries where I couldn't, and Harry, you're allowed to just say if it was the wrong. He got up and hugged her in front of everyone, which was answer, evidence, and thanks in one, and Sirius said, forks up, singing again, purely to give them all somewhere to put their eyes, and the day proceeded, and that night Harry put the album on the shelf by his bed. Between the grammar of one of his houses and the Prince and Pauper of the other, and thought that 14 had opened strongly. Andromeda Tonks arrived at Grimmauld Place on the 1st of August with 1 suitcase, 1 husband, 1 adult daughter whose hair changed color twice on the doorstep, and the expression of a woman returning to the scene of a crime she intended, this time, to solve. She stopped in the hall. She looked at the troll's leg umbrella stand, at the gas brackets, at the staircase of elf heads, and her face, which was Bellatrix Lestrange's face gentled by 22 years of better decisions, moved through recognition to something cooler and more useful. Right, she said. It's exactly as I remember, which is to say, a mausoleum with opinions. Ted, don't touch the umbrella stand, it bites. Nymphadora, wands away from the curtains until I've mapped them. She drew off her gloves finger by finger, the way surgeons do it in films, and looked up the dark stairwell as though taking a case history. Where's my patient? Which one? Sirius said, coming down. The house, the elf, or me? Yes, said Andromeda, and walked past him toward the kitchen stairs, and that was how the reclamation of number 12 began, not with a battle, but with an intake assessment. The tapestry had readmitted her the day Harry, at Sirius's elbow, had touched the heir's ring to her scorch mark, and said the words Andromeda had never expected to hear from any mouth attached to that wall. The house was wrong. The burn had unburned. Andromeda in gold and the line down to NYMPHADORA, and Ted woven in beside them. The tapestry's first muggle-born son-in-law rendered in thread that Sirius swore had hesitated for a full 3 seconds before committing, like a diner deciding the new dish wouldn't kill him. She had stood in front of it for a quarter of an hour alone, and no one had asked her anything about it, and at dinner that night she had begun, without preamble, the education of the heir. You've been handed a warship, Harry, and nobody's taught you to sail. Sit down, both of you, this concerns the heir match too, and by every account I've had of her, she'll lap you twice on the theory inside a month anyway. We'll start with what a house actually is. What a house actually was, it emerged over that August, in lessons at the kitchen table in the library and once, memorably, in the attic while ejecting a colony of doxies, was 3 things wearing one name. It was an estate, vaults, properties, investments, the drowsy compounding weight of 7 centuries of gold, all of it administered by Gornuk's office, and none of it, Andromeda, was blunt interesting. It was a seat, a chair in the Wisengamot, votes on committees, treaty standing with the Goblin Nation, a voice that the ministry had to schedule rather than summon, and that, she said, was interesting and dangerous, and they'd get to it. And it was last and realist, a magic, an old accumulated intention, soaked into blood and stone and thread, that recognized and protected and remembered, that could take in a grieving Lily Evans's love and make a hidden boy truly her son, that could hold a promise from 1952 like a coal banked under ash and blow it bright 40 years on. The magic is the part the ministry can't regulate and the part your enemies covet, Andromeda said. They'll say they want the seat or the gold. What they want is the third thing, because the third thing can't be bought and doesn't renew. A house's magic is fed by its family. Feuds starve it, cruelty curdles it, you've seen the curtains. My generation nearly killed this house. Your job, and she looked at the 2 of them across the scarred kitchen table, the heir and the heir match, 14 going on 15, ink on their fingers, is to feed it better. Fortunately, the 2 of you appear to do that just by arguing over a book, so I expect the house will be fat by Christmas. Hermione was there 4 days out of 7, by flew from Crawley under her parents' negotiated terms, which she had drafted herself as practice, and which included, to Sirius's delight, a clause requiring her home for Sunday dinners, excepting emergencies, the definition of which shall not be stretched. She took to house theory the way she took to everything: notes, cross-references, a color-coded folder that creature dusted nightly with visible reverence. But what she was best at, better than Harry, better honestly than Andromeda, was the law. It's because she reads it like an outsider, Ted Tonks said, watching her disembowel a treatise on magical guardianship one wet afternoon. He was a big, comfortable, sandy man who had built a solicitor's practice on exactly that trick. Purebloods read law like scripture, something to be interpreted. Muggleborns read it like a machine, something to be operated. Watch her. She's not asking what the guardianship statutes mean, she's asking what they do. They leak, Hermione said, not looking up. Mr. Tonks, did you know that magical guardianship of a minor lapses if unexercised for 7 years, unless renewed before the Wisengamot, but that the renewal only has to be filed, not heard? Which means anyone who is maintaining an irregular guardianship would have to file renewals quietly on a schedule. Filings are indexed, indexes are public. She did look up then, and her expression made Ted put down his tea. Somebody should pull the index for filings referencing Harry between 1981 and now. If Dumbledore renewed a guardianship he never lawfully held, there's a paper trail, it's public, and he built it himself every 7 years like clockwork. Ted pulled the index. It took him 9 days, 2 owls, and 1 lunch with a former colleague. The filings were there: 1988, renewed, magical guardian of record, APWB Dumbledore, basis, emergency placement 1981. Certified copies joined the folder, which had a name now because Hermione named her projects. The folder was called Accounts Payable. The lessons Harry liked best had no books at all. Once a week Andromeda took the two of them down to the hearth room, the oldest chamber in the house, below even the kitchen. Bare stone, a round hearth in the center, the foundation beam overhead black with 7 centuries of smoke. This was where the family magic lived, she said, insofar as it lived anywhere. Hearths were anchors, and this one had been laid when the house was, its fire never allowed to die entirely, banked to coals every night by generations of elves, an unbroken thread of burning older than the statute of secrecy. Wands away, this isn't spellwork, this is introduction. She knelt at the hearthstone and beckoned them down. A house's magic knows its blood, but knowing isn't the same as being acquainted. Palms flat. Say nothing, listen with your hands. The stone was warm, which was expectable. There were coals 2 feet away, and then it was warm in a second way that had nothing to do with the coals, a slow tidal warmth that rose to meet their palms and paused, considering, the way a very old dog lifts its head at a new voice in the hall. Harry felt it take stock of him. The blood, the bond, both lines, all 4 parents ticked off some ancient register one by one. Beside him he heard Hermione's breathing change as it reached her, and what it did with her, near as either of them could describe it afterward, was read her signature, the acknowledgement, her own hand, her own clauses, and then unmistakably warm further, a stone exhaling, some tension of decades letting itself out through the floor of the oldest room. The severed branch home. Above them the black foundation beam creaked once like a nod. There, Andromeda said softly, now you're acquainted. Everything else, wards, the tapestry, the doors that will open for you two and no one else alive, is grammar on top of this. The house does not serve you. Get that pureblood nonsense out of your heads before it gets in. The house keeps you, and it keeps you because it is kept. Creature banks this fire every night of his life. Understand what you just felt, and you'll never need telling why we don't starve a hearth, a ledger, or an elf. Tonks's lessons ran to the opposite pole and were officially not happening, because teaching underage magic outside school skated the edge of several statutes that her mother could recite from memory and chose not to. What Tonks taught in the attic on Thursdays, with the sneakoscope set on a shelf as referee, was everything around the spells: footwork, angles, cover, the arithmetic of a room. How to fall and come up with your wand still pointed somewhere useful. How to make the first move of every encounter be moving, because she said, straight from the Aura manual with the page number, stationary people are called targets. You, she said, circling Harry, have reflexes that make me want to file paperwork on whoever's been coaching you because nobody has, and that's criminal. Seeker instincts, war zone posture. You move before you decide. We're going to teach the deciding to keep up. And to Hermione, who had arrived braced to be the remedial student and had her stance corrected twice and then stopped needing correction. And you decide before you move, which everyone will tell you is a flaw, and everyone is wrong. You're not slow, you're sequenced. We're going to shorten the sequence until it fits inside a duel. Between the two of you there's one complete fighter, which is why, she flicked her wand and the attic's one candle went out and her voice grinned in the dark, you're always going to work in pairs. Rule 1 of pairs, find your partner's hand before your eyes adjust, go. It became, without anyone legislating it, the summer's habit: reach out, find the hand, then deal with the dark. Years afterward, Aurors who trained the pair of them would note, in evaluation after evaluation, with varying degrees of professional bafflement, that neither of them ever glanced to check where the other one was. They always already knew. Creature told them about the cave on the 9th of August. Nobody made him. That had been Sirius's one inviolable rule, and he kept it with a discipline that visibly cost him. The elf would come to it or he wouldn't. What brought it out in the end was small, the way the hinge of a whole life is usually small. Harry, helping clear the drawing-room cabinets, had found a photograph in a drawer. Two boys on a beach, 8 and 11 maybe, the older one making the younger one laugh with some vanished joke, and he'd asked Creature, without thinking much about it, where it was taken. The elf looked at the photograph for a long time. "Brighton," he said. "Mistress took the young masters in the summers." Master Regulus could not swim and would not say so. Master Sirius knew and did not tell, and stayed in the shallows all that holiday so his brother would not be alone in them. A pause. They were good boys. It was the house that was wrong, and Creature could not see it then. Creature sees it now. The little mistress leaves the lights burning, and nothing punishes anyone. He set the photograph on the mantel, adjusted it by a degree, and then said to the fire, "Creature must show the master's son what is in the drawing-room cabinet that does not open, and Creature must tell what happened at the sea. Master Sirius should sit down." What he told them in the gaslit drawing-room, with the curtains drawn and Hermione's hand finding Harry somewhere in the middle of it, and both of them forgetting to be self-conscious about that until long after, was this: that the Dark Lord had come to Master Regulus in the first weeks of 1981 and asked for the loan of a house elf. That Master Regulus had said, "Creature, go with him, do whatever he asks, and come home." That there was a cave by the sea, and inside the cave a lake, and inside the lake an island, and on the island a basin of poison that could not be spilled, only drunk. That the Dark Lord had made Creature drink it, all of it, while things in the water listened, and had dropped a golden locket into the emptied basin and refilled it, and had left Creature on the island to die of it. That Creature had come home because he had been ordered to come home, and elf magic does not ask permission of caves. That Master Regulus had listened to all of it and gone very quiet and been very kind, and some weeks later in March had said, "Creature, take me to the cave." And Master Regulus had drunk the poison himself, refusing to let Creature take a second dose of it, drinking and drinking while Creature wept and swapped the true locket for a false one. And at the end Master had looked at the water where the dead things were rising and had given his last 2 orders: go home, destroy it. And the water had taken him. Creature tried, the elf said, and his voice by now was a flat, scoured thing worse than weeping. 12 years Creature tried, fire, axes, acid, the hottest coals in the kitchen. It laughs at Creature. It sits in the cabinet and it laughs, and Master's last order sits in Creature's chest like a swallowed knife, and Creature cannot, and Creature could not tell anyone because Master said tell no one, and Master is dead, and the order cannot be changed. Master's blood can change it, Harry said. The words came out of him without passing through thought, the way the right thing sometimes did, and the room went still. Creature's head turned, slow, disbelieving, hope surfacing on the ancient face and being fought back down like nausea. Harry knelt to the elf's height. He thought of the letter of "I have left what I know where those I trust will find it," of a 20-year-old drinking poison in the dark so that nobody else would have to, and he said clearly in the formal cadence Andromeda had been drilling into him all month, "Creature, servant of my father's house. I am Altair Regulus Black, son of Regulus, blood of your master, and I take his last order onto myself. You have not failed. You carried it further than any living soul could have carried it. I take it from here, give it to me." Creature went to the cabinet that did not open. It opened. The locket was heavy, gold, warm in a way that gold should not be, a serpentine S and green stones on its face, and the moment Harry's hand closed around it, something behind the metal noticed him, a pressure and a tension like an eye opening against his palm, and across the room Hermione said in her exam voice, the one that got steadier as things got worse, "Harry, put it on the table and step back, and somebody tell me what we know about objects that survive Fiend-for-grade destruction attempts and are described by a first-hand witness as laughing." It was after the cave telling in the flat quiet the house kept for 2 days like a held note that Harry finally opened the door on the second landing with the enameled sign that said, in a boy's careful lettering, "Do not enter without the express permission of Regulus Arcturus Black." Creature had kept it. That was the room's whole story, told at a glance, 13 years of an elf's grief expressed in dusting. The Slytherin green faded exactly evenly, the bed made to parade standard, the collage of newspaper clippings about the Dark Lord curling at the corners under preserving charms that had been renewed, and renewed, and renewed, and on the desk, out of place in all that cold boyish worship, a single photograph in a plain frame. A baby days old, asleep in the crook of an arm whose owner had been cut out of the picture, for safety, the amputation done with scissors, and you could see it in the wobble of the cut line, with shaking hands. Harry stood in the doorway a long time. Then he asked Creature's permission, which rearranged the old elf's face entirely, and went in and took nothing, and moved nothing, except that on the way out he unpinned one clipping, the earliest, the recruiting rhetoric a 16-year-old had thought was a cause, and put it face down in the desk drawer and left the photograph where the morning light reached it. He can keep the room, he told Creature in the hall. We keep him. There's a difference. My dad taught me it in a letter. Andromeda knew. That was the terrible convenience of her childhood. She had been raised in the kind of library where such things were named. She came down at midnight in a dressing gown, looked at the locket lying on a silver salver like a served heart, listened to Creature's account with her arms folded and her face going more and more still, and then she said one word, an old word, and the gas flames burned low as though the house had flinched at it. You're sure, Sirius said. It wasn't really a question. It's in the counted books, the ones grandfather kept sealed, a vessel that keeps a torn piece of a living will. It's why he didn't die at Godric's Hollow, Sirius. It's the how of the whole last 13 years, sitting on my nephew's tea table. Andromeda drew her dressing gown tighter, precise even at midnight. Regulus didn't defect. Regulus performed surgery. He found the Dark Lord's actual wound and died putting a knife in reach of it, and then the knife sat in a cabinet for 12 years because the only soul who knew was under orders not to say. She looked at Creature then and inclined her head slowly and deliberately, the young lady of the House of Black saluting the household's other survivor. We do not tell children fairy stories in this family, so I'll say it plainly. This object is a piece of the war, possibly the peace. The question is what we do with it, and the answer is not keep trying the kitchen coals. The answer's in the treaty standing, Hermione said. Half the room looked blank. She had accounts payable open on her knees, but she wasn't reading from it. She was watching the middle distance, running the machine. Gornuk told us, the House of Black has treaty standing with the Goblin Nation. Goblins unmake things, it's in every history. Wizards make goblins forge, and then goblins resent the forgings. That's the whole tragic economics of it, but the forge that makes can unmake. Gringotts destroys cursed objects for clients of standing. There's a schedule of fees in the account charter. I read it while you were all admiring the vault door. She looked up. We don't destroy it, we commission its destruction. From the people who have hated everything that Locket's maker stands for since before he was born and who keep receipts. There was a silence with respect in it. The feel be teeth, Sirius said. Goblins price by significance. Then we pay teeth, Harry said. The locket sat on its salver, warm, attentive, laughing at kitchen coals, and he thought, my father died to put you in reach of a knife, and we found the knife, and it's a bank. Out loud he said, set the meeting, and Creature comes, he gets to watch. For a moment the old elf stood absolutely still. Then he bowed, so low his ears brushed the carpet, and when he straightened his face had changed in some way none of them could have named, except that it was easier at last to imagine the young elf on a Brighton beach, keeping a boy's secret about the shallows. The matter of Sirius's freedom advanced that August the way Ted liked things to advance, quietly on paper, downhill. The obstacle had never been evidence. Obstacle was that there had never been a proceeding at which evidence could exist. A man convicted of nothing could not appeal, and a ministry that had jailed him without trial had no incentive to schedule one now. What changed the incline was the house. A fugitive was the ministry's business, but the head of a noble and most ancient house held, by statute so old it had never been repealed because no one remembered it was there, the right to demand trial before his peers upon first accusation. First. The right had never been invoked in 1981, because in 1981 the head of House Black was old Arcturus, silent in his grief, and Sirius was merely an heir presumptive in a cell. But he's not an heir now, Hermione said, the night Ted laid it out at the kitchen table. She'd seen it 2 sentences early. Harry watched her get there. The lordship's claimable. The moment he claims it, he's a head of house accused of a capital crime who was never given his statutory trial, and the demand isn't a request, it's a writ. They have to convene. They have to convene, Ted agreed comfortably, before the full Wisengamot in open session with the accused given voice, veritaserum on petition, and pensive evidence admissible. Which point the case is Peter Pettigrew's finger versus my client's memories, the marks of a secret keeper switch that 3 living wizards can testify to, and 12 years of nobody once checking. Amelia Bones has seen the file. Amelia Bones has been in this job 11 months and is still angry about things, bless her, and what she said to me off the record was, bring me the writ and I'll clear the docket. Then why are we waiting? Sirius had been silent through it, back to the dresser, arms crossed. The waiting was carved on him. He'd worn the house's freedom all summer like a coat one size too small. December, Andromeda said, term will have started, the children visible at Hogwarts out of the first blast radius of press. The Concord registered past its challenge window, and Fudge's autumn budget hearings finished because Cornelius mid-budget will trade anything for quiet, including his own obstruction. You've waited 13 years, cousin. Wait one more season and walk out the front door of the ministry instead of a side one. She gathered the parchment square. Besides, there's a courtesy owed first. If this house is about to stand up in public, certain members of the family deserve warning before they read it in the Prophet. I've written to Narcissa. The reply came 4 days later, and it came wrong, not by owl but folded into a florist's box, Muggle carrier, no magic on it anywhere, which was itself the message. This bypassed the manor's wards and my husband's knowledge both. Inside, wrapped in tissue, lay a single black rose pressed flat, a variety Marius identified at a glance as Nuits de June, grown in exactly one garden in Wiltshire. Beneath it, one line unsigned in a hand like engraving: "The minister dines at our table on Thursdays. Set your dates accordingly and know that not everyone at that table is hungry." Andromeda stood at the drawing-room window with the pressed rose in her palm for a long while, her back to the room, and when she turned around she was brisk again, but she set the rose between the pages of the family grammar like a bookmark rather than discarding it, and nobody commented on that either. "December," she said. "After budget week, Thursday's out, Ted. Tell Madam Bones a Friday." Dumbledore moved in the last week of August. To be fair to him, and Hermione insisted they always be fair to him on the record in writing because fairness closed loopholes, he had run out of quieter options. His query to records had returned nothing. His letters, 3 more over August, warm, avuncular, increasingly specific, had drawn courteous nothings rooted through the bank. Mrs. Figg reported an empty house. The Weasleys, gently pumped, knew only that Harry was with his godfather, a phrase Molly pronounced with a sniff and Arthur with careful neutrality. Somewhere in a locked drawer of his long experience, the headmaster had presumably begun to hear the particular silence of a chessboard rearranging itself under a cloth, so he filed Wisengamot Petition 94-388. That in light of the fugitive status of Sirius Black and the apparent absence of the minor Harry James Potter from his established residence and protections, the chief warlock be confirmed as magical guardian pro tempore, with authority to determine residence and educational arrangements, in the minor's own vital interest, pursuant to the emergency placement of 1981. The petition was set for hearing before the Committee on Family and Estate, 11 Witches and Wizards, on the Thursday before term. It never got its hearing. What it got instead, Harry heard about afterward in 4 different registers: Ted's professional relish, Sirius's savagery, Andromeda's satisfaction, Hermione's forensic delight, because the children, by unanimous adult insistence, stayed home. What it got was Ted Tonks rising for a preliminary matter of standing, and laying before the committee: 1. The guardianship writ of Regulus Black, 1981, bank certified, naming Sirius Black and then Andromeda Tonks. 2. Its registration completed that July, backdated by statute to the date of deposit, because deposit with the Chief Warlock's office constituted filing, and filing, as the committee well knew, was all the statute required. 3. The bank's receipt showing that self-same office accepting and sealing the writ in November 1981. And 4. A certified copy of the Concord of the Severed Branch, seals turning gently, with its shield claws flagged in goblin red ink: "No guardianship may be laid upon either child without the assent of the house's own council." "The petitioner asks to be made guardian of an heir of the House of Black," Ted said mildly, a big comfortable man holding a committee in his palm like a sandwich. "The House's council is instructed to note its assent or refusal. For the record, the council refuses. The petition therefore fails as filed, unless," and here the way Sirius told it, Ted had looked up over his half-moon reading glasses in a wicked parody of a much more famous pair, "the petitioner wishes to explain to this committee how an emergency placement in 1981 acquired 13 years of quiet renewals, despite a validly deposited writ sleeping in his own office seal. My clients are curious. They have asked me to say that they are keeping accounts." Dumbledore had not explained. Dumbledore had, by all foretellings, sat very still for a moment, an old man in half-moon spectacles looking at a certified receipt with his own office's seal upon it, and something in his face had shifted, not defeat and not anger but recalculation, the look of a man discovering that a door he had walked through freely for years had been, all along, counted. Then he had risen, thanked the committee for its diligence with a courtesy no one could fault, withdrawn the petition without argument, and paused on his way out beside Ted's table. "They are well," he had asked, quietly, off the record. "Both of them." "They are excellent," Ted had said, "both of them." That, the old man had said, was always the whole of my hope, whatever the accounts show, and had gone, leaving Ted, who had prepared for wrath and got wistfulness, unsettled in a way he was still turning over at dinner that night. "It wasn't a performance," he said, passing the potatoes, "or it was the kind that's real underneath. Mark me, that man has a ledger of his own somewhere, and the entries are all in a currency called necessary, and the thing about that currency," Ted looked around the kitchen table at Sirius, at Andromeda, at the 2 14-year-olds who between them constituted the future of the House of Black, "is that a man who pays himself in necessary never audits, so we will. Gently, thoroughly, and in public when it serves. Pass the gravy, Nymphadora, and don't melt the boat this time." School shopping fell on the 29th, and it was a military operation with an ice cream budget. Andromeda planned it the way she planned everything, on paper in columns. The party would be six, the children, herself, Ted, Tonks in plainclothes drifting a shop length behind, and Creature, who could not be dissuaded and was accordingly commissioned, given a modified tea towel in house colors, and tasked with parcels, which meant that parcels vanished from counters and were home before their ink dried. Sirius, still officially a fugitive until December's paperwork ripened, saw them off at the door with a list of his own. One new broom servicing kit, a pound of the fudge from the place by Gamble and Japes if it still stood, and if the opportunity arises, which it will, one photograph of Lucius Malfoy's face the first time he sees the prophet after the trial. Frame budget unlimited. The alley noticed them by increments. It noticed Andromeda first, a black by carriage and cheekbone, dead ringer for a wanted woman, steering through the crowd like a keel. It noticed the goblin-liveried parcels business next, because the alley always noticed where money was moving. And at Madame Malkin's it finally, collectively, put the sum together because Madame Malkin, pinning Harry's school robes, asked comfortably whether he'd be wanting the usual plain fastenings, and Andromeda said, house clasps. Raven and Wands silver, both sets, and the fitting room went so quiet you could hear the tape measure change its mind. Both sets, Malkin repeated, tape hovering. Her eyes went from Harry to Hermione on the next stool, arms out, being pinned. Both sets, Andromeda confirmed in a voice that closed topics, and by the time they reached Flourish and Blot's 40 minutes later, the whisper had beaten them there by half a street. The Potter boy in black silver, and the Granger girl in it too, and had you heard, had you possibly heard? Hermione bore the staring with her chin at the exam angle, and got them both through it by the simple expedient of being genuinely, unstoppably interested in books, and it turned out you could not gawk effectively at a girl who kept handing you things off the shelf and asking which edition your grandmother had sworn by. She disarmed a bookshop. Harry watched it happen. 3 separate matrons who had entered the biography aisle to stare came out of it 15 minutes later having recommended monographs, promised all post addresses, and in one case unbent so far as to say that her late husband's aunt had known the Follies, lovely people, healers back 6 generations, and that the young man had his mother's chin. Everyone said the Potters, but look at the chin. Harry, ambushed mid-shelf by his third mother's chin, thanked her with more warmth than grit. The prophet's man found them at Fortescue's, because reporters, Ted observed without looking up from his sundae, could smell an ice cream budget. He was a stringer, young, hungry, quill already out, and he got as far as Mr. Potter, is it true, before 3 things happened in close order. Tonks materialized at the adjacent table stirring a coffee she had not purchased. Creature took the reporter's hat, brushed it, and returned it in a manner that established beyond litigation that the house's elf had assessed him and priced his shoes. And Andromeda said pleasantly, all press inquiries go through the account office at Gringotts, young man. Ask for Gornuck, do give him your full name. The stringer wrote down nothing, thought about the sentence, do give him your full name, and left at a pace just below discourteous. That's a no comment, Harry asked. That's the only no comment that files itself, said Andromeda. He'll report the clasps, the elf, and the goblins, which is exactly the inventory we brought. Eat your ice cream. We've taught the alley everything we came to teach it. The Prophet's Monday edition ran it on page 2, heir apparent. Potter seen in black livery, source to onlookers, hedged to the eyebrows and wrong about 4 particulars, but above the fold and unmistakably respectful. Sirius read it aloud at breakfast twice, did all the voices, and had it framed. The frame budget, he explained, had come in under projections. The last night of the holidays the house was full. That was itself the miracle, and Harry, coming down late to the kitchen for a glass of water, stopped on the stairs to take an inventory of it. Grimmauld Place, mausoleum with opinions, had over one August been argued into becoming a house where the Granger's sensible rover was parked outside a wizarding front door under a notice-me-not Ted had cast with the air of a man committing his one annual misdemeanor. Marius Black slept in the second-best guest room, which Creature had unasked, filled with cut roses. Nymphadora Tonks's boots stood by the umbrella stand that had learned, after one warning, not to bite them. And the drawing-room tapestry, which had for decades recorded only subtraction, had put on 6 names in gold in a single summer and seemed, in some wordless textile way, smug about it. In the kitchen a candle was burning. Hermione was at the table in her dressing gown with 3 books open and the list, the great list, the Equipmentrope's Defense Schedule Contingencies list, half annotated in front of her, asleep. Completely unfixably asleep, cheek on her forearm, quill still in her hand, a line of ink wandering off the last item where the pen had gone down with the pilot. 4th item from the bottom Harry noticed in her tidiest handwriting, Kay's birthday, ask us what month elves. She had been trying to establish Creature's birthday for 3 weeks. Creature, interrogated, had gone vague with what everyone but Hermione could see was cunning delight, and the campaign had continued, and somewhere in the middle of it the old elf had started calling her the little mistress without any irony at all. Harry stood in the doorway with his water and understood, with the sudden completeness of things you understand at 14, at night in doorways, that he was looking at the whole of it, not the vaults or the seat or even the tapestry. This A candle someone would trim, a list someone had fallen asleep improving, a house around it that had decided creakily at the end of a long wrongness to be worth defending. The magic is fed by its family, Andromeda said in his memory, and Harry thought, then look at it eat. He didn't wake her. He took the throw from the settle by the fire. The one creature had begun leaving there, seemingly by accident. On nights she stayed and put it over her shoulders and moved the candle back from her hair and eased the quill out of her fingers the way you'd take something from a sleeping cat. She surfaced a quarter of the way. Times it. Late. Trains at 11. MMH. Platform strategy, she mumbled into her forearm, mostly gone again. Prophet'll have someone. Reporters. You're a story now, whole thing's a story, someone will have tipped them. Whether the good coat, heir has to look like an heir on day one, Andromeda said. First impressions calcify. Noted sleep, filed under sleep, a breath, then from all the way down, muffled and matter of fact, in the voice of someone stating a checked fact from a trusted source. Good house now. The candle burned. Above them both, on the wall of the drawing room in the dark, a thread of new gold held two names at the foot of 7 centuries, and the house lay quiet around all of it like a hand closed over a coal. And if it was smug, nobody was awake to check, and creature who absolutely was never told. Chapter 3 and Chapter 4, the goblet's weight platform 9 3/4 had always been loud. On the 1st of September 1994, in the vicinity of one particular compartment window, it was loud about them. They had planned for it, which helped. Andromeda's briefing over breakfast had run to one-page headed platform, and its clauses were simple. Arrive at 20 past when the crowd was thick enough to swallow a scene but thin enough to move through. The good coats, both of them, no comment to anyone with a quill, warmth to anyone with a child, and underlined, you are not hiding anything, so do not move like people who are hiding something. Walk like you're expected. You are. So they walked like they were expected, through a crowd that parted and murmured and pointed with varying degrees of subtlety at the silver clasps, raven and wands on 2 school cloaks, and Ted carried Hermione's trunk, making comfortable weather talk at everyone. And at the barrier column, in full view of the platform, in a coat that had cost the frame budget its remaining surplus, stood Andromeda Black Tonks, seeing off the heir of her house and his heir match with 2 kisses to 2 foreheads, deliberate as notarization. Look at them, look, Hermione murmured as the train pulled out and the platform's faces slid past like a gallery. Andromeda choreographed the whole platform and never told the platform. She told us, Harry said. That's the trick of it, I think. Everyone else is improvising. Ron found them at reading, flushed from the corridor crush, trailed by Ginny and a boy with a camera, and stood in the compartment door with his ears going red, and the conversation that followed had been rehearsed by all 3 of them in their separate bedrooms for a month, and still ran off its rails inside a minute, because that was Ron. It came out in a tumble that his dad had told them some of it, that the prophet had the rest wrong probably, that Percy said the guardianship filings alone were a scandal for the ages, that, and here the rehearsed part collapsed. You could have told me, mate. Hermione knew. Hermione's in it, fine, she got drafted by a tapestry, I'm not, I found out you're some sort of secret heir from my dad at the dinner table like it was ministry gossip, which it was. You're right, Harry said. Ron blinked mid-breath, ambushed by agreement. You're right, and it wasn't about trust. Harry had thought about this on the beach at Rye and in the hearth room and in the dark of his new bedroom under the eaves. The first month we didn't know what was radioactive. There's a receipt in a vault that could end a career. There's an old man in Sussex who cried when we gave him half a ring. There's an elf who kept a secret 12 years and it nearly killed him. Every person who knew was somebody who could be put in a room and asked, your dad works for the ministry, Ron. We weren't protecting the secret from you. We were protecting you from the questions. Ron sat down slowly amid the sprawl of the compartment, absorbing that, turning it over for the insult and not finding one, and Ginny took the seat by the window with the unembarrassed directness of a girl who had decided the drama was finished. And after a moment Ron said, in nearly his normal register, an elf, a ring, a receipt, and a secret vault. You had the best summer of anyone I've ever met, and my brother works with dragons. Then squinting, what's it like then, being 2 people? Crowded, said Harry, and the compartment laughed, and the worst of it was over, not healed but set, like a bone that would ache in weather but hold. The rest of the journey was cards, sweets, and briefings. Hermione conducted the last, blinds drawn in the voice she used for group projects. What the prophet knew, what it didn't, what to say to housemates, the truth minus documents, and what was coming that no one on the train yet knew because Ted's contacts owed him lunches. No Quidditch this year. A tournament, 3 schools, a cup, eternal glory, an age line. Eternal glory, Ron repeated, reverent. A death toll, Hermione said, is the other traditional feature. It was discontinued for a reason, and they're restarting it in the exact year the ministry's hosting foreign delegations and everyone's distracted. I've read about the last 3 tournaments and I want it on the record now in front of witnesses that my prediction is something goes wrong by Christmas. Filed, said Harry. Witnessed, said Ginny solemnly and stole the last cauldron cake. Hogwarts absorbed the news of Harry Black Potter as the prophet had taken to hyphenating him with the institutional efficiency of a school that had previously metabolized a basilisk. The staring lasted 9 days. What outlasted it was subtler, and Andromeda had predicted it almost to the syllable, the recalibration. Slytherins who had spent 3 years pretending Harry was furniture began nodding to him in corridors, tiny, precise nods, the diplomatic recognition of a state previously unrecognized. A third-year Greengrass sister conveyed, through a chain of intermediaries so elaborate it constituted its own message, her house's compliments on the restoration of the tapestry. Professor Snape, confronted at the welcome feast with the son of Regulus Black seated at the Gryffindor table wearing Raven and Wand's clasps, had gone through a sequence of expressions that Ron described as a man swallowing a live eel in stages, and thereafter treated Harry with a scrupulous, crackling neutrality that was somehow more unnerving than the old malice, and marked one of Hermione's potions essays, for the first recorded time in history, acceptable, adequate, which Flitwick assured her was. From that quarter a sonnet, and Draco Malfoy did not sneer. That was the strangest instrument in the new weather. He watched from down the Slytherin table from across courtyards with the guarded expression of a boy who had received private instructions that contradicted his entire upbringing, and in the second week, in an empty stretch of the Charms corridor, he delivered what he had clearly been sent to deliver. "Mother says," Draco began without greeting, pitched low, eyes forward, the words moving like contraband, "that the houses of Black and Malfoy are kin, and kin need not be friends to be civil. She says civility costs nothing and buys options." A pause, and then in a voice with the first crack of something personal in it, "She wrote to me twice about it. Father doesn't know she wrote at all. I'd take it as a courtesy if that stayed between us." "It stays," Harry said. Or the House of Black received the message, both of them. Draco's eyes flicked sideways, calculating how much Harry knew about pressed roses and Thursday dinners, arriving correctly at more than me, and he nodded the tiny diplomatic nod and walked on, and Hermione, who had watched the whole exchange from 20 feet with a book held at reading height and her attention nowhere near it, fell into step beside Harry and said, "That was a boy asking for asylum and not knowing it yet." "I know," Harry said. "Andromeda says the house keeps a list of doors we might someday need to be open. She says you never slam one an inch from a child's face, whatever his father is. We're civil, we stay civil, and we write the date down." They wrote the date down. Accounts payable had grown a second folder over the summer in Hermione's neat capitals. Accounts receivable. Kindnesses owed and owing. It was, she said, the half of the ledger everyone forgot. McGonagall summoned Harry to her office in the second week, poured tea without asking, and conducted the entire interview in the key of transfiguration, precise, formal, and with something underneath it running much warmer than the surface let on. She had taught James, she observed. She had taught Sirius, heaven help her, and she had taught Regulus, a fact she produced quietly and set down between them like a third cup. A careful boy, she said, mannerly, watchful, the sort who was easy to overlook in a loud family, and she had overlooked him, and had thought about that this summer at some length. She did not apologize. McGonagall's apologies, like Snape's compliments, were structural rather than spoken, and this one took the form of what she said next. That her door was open, that her flue was warded to Andromeda Tonks's kitchen for reasons no one at this school required explaining, and that if any person, she paused, any person at all, of any rank whatsoever, attempted to manage, isolate, or handle either him or Miss Granger within these walls, she would take it as a matter for her house and her temper both. "You have counsel, Lord-to-be," she said, showing him out, and the title had no irony in it at all. "You should know your head of house considers herself on the rota." The delegations arrived in October, ship and carriage, and the goblet of fire was unveiled in the entrance hall in its ancient casket, and for 3 days the school orbited it, the age line chalked on the flagstones, the flutter of parchment names, the blue-white flames that made every face around them look carved. Fred and George grew beards and were laughed at. Angelina put her name in to standing ovation. Hermione stood in front of the goblet exactly once, arms folded, examining the flames with the expression she reserved for library books that had been shelved out of order. "It's a binding artifact," she said. "It doesn't ask. That's what everyone's celebrating around, an object whose whole function is a contract you can't read before signing. The parchment goes in blank of terms. Terms unstated, arbiter magical, penalty unspecified but reputed to be your magic itself." She turned away from it and the blue light slid off her face. "I've been in a contract since before I was born, so possibly I'm oversensitive, but mine came with the way out printed first, and I've seen what that costs the people offering it. This thing," a jerk of her chin at the most beautiful object in the hall, "is everything Arcturus was armoring us against, wearing a party hat." On the night of Halloween, the goblet gave out 3 names to 3 storms of applause, Crumb, Delacour, Diggory, and then in the settling hush, with the whole hall breathing toward the feast, its flames turned red one more time. Harry watched the parchment spiral down into Dumbledore's hand with a strange, suspended calm, a calm he would only later learn to name, and it was Andromeda's voice that named it from a summer kitchen. When the attack finally comes, you will find you have already had every feeling about it in advance. You will be surprised to be merely ready. The hall's noise went far away and came back wrong, mutter and creak, and somewhere a goblet knocked over, and Dumbledore read the name everyone could already see in his face. And up at the staff table McGonagall had gone white, and Harry felt Hermione's hand close on his wrist under the table. One pulse, code from the attic lessons, located you. Move when you're ready. He stood. The hall's eyes came down on him like weather. And because Andromeda Tonks had spent a summer teaching him that the first sentence spoken into a crisis frames every sentence after it, Harry did not walk to the staff table. He said clearly into the silence, pitching it to carry to the four corners and the foreign guests and the quills he knew were somewhere writing. For the record in front of this hall, I did not enter my name, I did not ask anyone to enter it, and I am 14, which everyone in this castle who has spent the last month worshipping that age line knows. Someone put my name in that goblet. I'd like to know who, and so should you, because whoever it was walked past all of your children to do it. Then he turned to the staff table, to the headmaster standing with the parchment in his hand, and finished, in the formal cadence of the hearthroom, "Headmaster, I'll come to the anteroom, but the House of Black contests and its council will be heard before anything is agreed. Nothing about me gets decided in a room I'm not in, not anymore." He walked the length of the frozen hall with his back straight and the raven and wands catching the candlelight, and afterward, for years, people who had been in that hall disagreed about many details but agreed about one, that the fourth name had come out of the goblet and the school had looked at a boy and a house had looked back. The anteroom filled and quarreled. Karkaroff cried sabotage, Madame Maxim's head grazed the rafters, Bagman bubbled, Crouch stood in the firelight with his toothbrush mustache in his creases and pronounced, in a voice like a stamp coming down, the sentence Harry had been waiting for since the flames turned red. "The rules are clear. The goblet constitutes a binding magical contract. Mr. Potter has no choice but to compete." "Counsel for the House of Black," said Ted Tonks comfortably from the doorway, "begs to differ on 4 points." He had arrived with a speed that told Harry the emergency flu protocols had worked exactly as drilled, creature to Grimmauld inside a minute of the flames turning red, and he came in shaking rain off a muggle overcoat, a big sandy man with a briefcase, and something about him made the room rearrange itself from a quarrel into a hearing. Point the first. Ted set the briefcase on the table and did not open it, which Harry had learned was Ted at his most dangerous. The unopened briefcase meant he knew it all by heart. A contract requires parties. My client tendered no signature, no consent, and no proxy. What the ministry is calling a binding contract, Muggle law would call forgery, and Goblin law, I checked this afternoon, calls it theft of hand. Point the second, my client is a minor under active guardianship, whose house's standing instrument, registered and unchallenged, bars new magical obligations laid upon him absent the assent of the house's council. The Conquered Shield clause has eaten 4 petitions to date. I am here to inform this room formally that the house's council does not assent. The goblet, Crouch said, predates your instrument, sir, and does not petition. The magic is elder magic. If he does not compete, he loses his magic. That is not the ministry's rule to waive. Which brings me to points 3rd and 4th. Ted nodded, unbothered, a man who had expected exactly this wall and brought exactly this ladder. "Third, we will not gamble a 14-year-old's magic on the goblet's forbearance tonight. He will compete under protest, with the protest lodged in writing with the ministry, the bank, and both foreign ministries before midnight." Which means, fourth, and here the comfortable voice acquired an edge like the underside of ice, that every party in this room is now on notice. My client competes because an artifact was compromised under this castle's wards, past an age line drawn by the headmaster's own hand, on the watch of the Department of International Magical Cooperation. He competes as the victim of a security failure, not the beneficiary of one. And the House of Black will therefore expect an independent investigator with full access. We suggest Madame Bones's office. Parity of information, my client learns everything the other champions learn when they learn it, and a written acknowledgement from the tournament's governing panel that his participation is compelled. Because if my client is to carry the risk of your failure, gentlemen, madame, the record will carry the ownership of it. That is the price of quiet. It is, Ted smiled pleasantly, a discount. Silence of the recalculating kind Harry was coming to know. Dumbledore had stood apart through all of it, firelight moving in the half-moon spectacles, and Harry had felt the blue eyes on him more than once, weighing, and what they held did not look like anger. It looked like a man rereading a page he thought he had memorized. When the headmaster finally spoke, it was quietly and to Crouch, and it settled the room like snow. "Barty. The acknowledgement costs us only honesty. I suggest we pay it." And then to Harry, as the officials shuffled toward their protocols, low enough that only Harry heard it, "You did not come to me first. A year ago you would have. It wasn't an accusation. That was the strange thing," Harry thought. "It was said the way you press a bruise, to learn something about it. A year ago I didn't have counsel," Harry said, "sir." The old man considered him for a moment longer, and there passed over his face the same look Ted had reported from the committee room: recalculation, a door discovering it had been counted, and something else under it that Harry, 3 months into learning to read the family in the mirror, could not place until he was halfway back to the tower. It was the way Marius looked at photographs from before 1936. It was mourning for a version of things that was gone. Gryffindor Tower, when he finally climbed through the portrait hole near midnight, was awake and waiting, and Harry braced for the version of this night that had played out in his imagination on the walk up. The accusations, the turned backs, the long cold winter of a house that thought he'd cheated it. It never arrived. He had underestimated, Hermione explained afterward with some professional satisfaction, the evidentiary value of theater. Half of Gryffindor had watched him stand up in the Great Hall and demand an investigation in front of 2 foreign schools. Theater like that could be faked. Teenagers knew performance when they saw it, but then the other thing had happened, the thing no 14-year-old glory hunter could have staged. A solicitor had arrived, within the hour, in a muggle overcoat with a briefcase threatening paperwork. The tower had discussed it at length before Harry ever reached the portrait hole and arrived at a verdict best expressed by Lee Jordan, standing on a table. No offense, mate, but nobody schemes their way into eternal glory and then immediately calls their lawyer. Guilty people don't have counsel on retainer. Famous people do. A pause for effect. Also, Angelina says if you didn't put your name in, the spot she deserved is still stolen, so we're finding who did it and posting bits of them to the other schools. Fair, fair, Harry said, and the tower cheered, and somewhere in the back Fred and George began composing a ballad titled The Fourth Champion Retains Representation, and that, remarkably, was that. The quieter verdicts came later and mattered more. Neville, in the dormitory dark after the candles were out, said to the ceiling in the tone of someone who had rehearsed it, "My gran says the old houses used to look after their own like that. Counsel inside the hour. She says nobody's seen it done properly in 20 years, and she read the prophet's account 3 times. A rustle of blankets. She also says your great-aunt Doria once hexed my great-uncle Algy at a wedding, and he deserved it. Gran's sort of hoping you'll invite her to something." "Tell your gran," Harry said into the dark, "that the House of Black owes the House of Longbottom a wedding hex's worth of apology, and she's on the list for the first thing we host." "She'll frame the letter," Neville said, and went to sleep. And Harry lay awake a while longer, listening to the fire settle, thinking about lists and doors held open an inch, and how strange it was that the machinery of an ancient and terrible family, pointed carefully, produced this. A round boy sleeping easier 2 beds over. Sirius's letter arrived at breakfast 2 days later by a barn owl with no markings, and it was 4 pages long. The first page was outrage, in handwriting that got larger as it went. "Somebody put my godson's name in a death tournament. I am coming to Scotland. I will live in a cave. I have lived in worse." The second page, in handwriting that had visibly been made to sit down and breathe, was Andromeda's postscript reporting that he would not be coming to Scotland, that the cave proposal had been vetoed by the entire council including the elf, and that the house's response was proceeding on. She wished to emphasize the word channels. The third page was Ted's, typed, and consisted of the protest's acknowledgement, countersigned by the tournament panel, with the sentence "participation is compelled" underlined, and beside it in Ted's fountain pen, "They signed it, son. Whatever happens in that arena now happens on their ledger. That's armor of a kind. Wear it." The fourth page was Sirius again, calmer, and Harry read it 3 times and then put it in the folder with Regulus's letter, because it belonged in the same drawer of himself. "Here's the thing nobody will say to you because they're all being professionals about it. Somebody wants you dead, and they were clever, and we don't know who they are yet. You've noticed. You've probably noticed harder than any of us because you've had the instinct since before you had the reasons. So December 2nd, the trial. Bones has the writ, the date's set, and when it's done I'll be at every task after it in the front row as a free man in the good coat, being embarrassing. Between now and then you do the drills, you keep the elf clothes, and you remember what your father wrote to you, because I've read that letter a dozen times now, and the useful sentence is the one about kneeling. Whoever did this wants you frightened and alone in a maze of other people's rules. You are neither. You have never in your life been either, you just didn't have the paperwork before. Padfoot, front row, December. Somebody in this castle put your name in, Hermione said, and we're not going to find them by wondering. The war room convened the next evening in an unused classroom off the Charms corridor, warded by Tonks's own checklist, sworn to order by Creature's Tea. Present Harry, Hermione, Ron, who had walked in gone crimson and said, "I was a git for about 11 hours yesterday. McGonagall's cat face cured it, what needs doing," and been handed a folder before he finished the sentence. On the board in Hermione's capitals, WHO benefits, beneath it a taxonomy. Category 1, Glory Seekers, students, idiots, excluded. The age line held all week against the Weasley twins, who are idiots but gifted idiots. Category 2, Political, someone wanting the House of Black embarrassed or exposed. Possible, but the method's wrong. This hurts the Ministry's tournament more than us. Ted's protest saw to that. Category 3. Her chalk tapped the word she'd underlined twice. Lethal, someone who wants you in the tournament because the tournament kills people. Because it's a way to get at you past every protection we spent the summer building, past the conquered, past the wards, past creature in public with plausible accident written on it. Category 3 fits the method exactly. So we assume 3 and we work backward. Who in this castle since September is new, capable, and close to the goblet? 3 quills wrote 5 names. All 3 lists had one name in common, and Ron said it aloud apologetically as though it were heresy. The new bloke teaches defense like he's been in a war, drinks from his own flask on the hour, and turned Malfoy into a ferret, which look, I cheered. But you said new, capable, and close. Moody was guarding the goblet. Moody's also Dumbledore's oldest friend in the Auror office, Harry said. Which is either the best alibi in the castle, or, and he heard the sentence arrive from the summer, from Ted at a dinner table talking about a man who paid himself in a currency called necessary, or it's the one door nobody watches because everyone trusts the lock. They didn't have proof. They had a list, a method, and a habit of writing dates down. Hermione labeled the folder in capitals that somehow conveyed lowered voice, EYES only, watch, do not touch. And Creature, collecting the tea things, paused at the door and said, to no one in particular, in the tone of an elf remarking on the weather, that the defense classroom's window shutters latched from inside, that the good professor took delivery of private parcels by owl at odd hours, and that elves saw everything in a castle and were seen by no one. And should the little mistress ever want a watching done properly, Creature had in his long life watched. Hermione looked at the ancient elf for a moment. Then she wrote at the bottom of the folder's first page in her tidiest hand, Asset, K coverage, total, cost. He gets to say Creature told you so at the end. Agreed and witnessed, said Harry and Ron together. Creature's first report arrived 11 days later, delivered in the war room with ceremony, the old elf standing on a chair to reach the level of the table, consulting no notes because elves, he informed them loftily, were not made of paper. The professor called Moody, Creature reported, lived like a man under siege, which for an old Auror signified nothing. Creature had known paranoids of quality all his life and rated this one's ward work as merely sound. 3 items, though, did not sit level. Item, the professor drank from his own flask on the hour, every hour which the school put down to whiskey or to caution, but Creature, who had served drinkers of quality too, observed that the man drank by the clock and never larger or smaller, dosing not drinking. Item, the professor kept a trunk of 7 locks, and the trunk was warded past the wardwork of the rooms themselves, inward, the way you ward a thing from getting out. Item, and this was the one Creature waited because elves weighed people by their courtesies. The man had in September thrown a second year's dropped quill back to her in the corridor, and thrown at wand hand, crossbody, a duelist's reflex, and Alistair Moody, whom Creature had once watched take 4 Death Eaters in Diagon Alley in the first war from behind an overturned fruit cart, had lost that arm's fluency to a curse in 1979. The famous limp was accurate. The reflexes were somebody else's. You're saying it's not him, Ron said into the silence. You're saying somebody's wearing Mad-Eye Moody. Creature is saying, said Creature with the precision of a witness who intended to be quoted correctly at the end, that the limp has been studied and the arm has not. Costumes are learned from the outside limps. Arms are learned from living, and the living arm is young. He climbed down from the chair and gathered the tea things, and paused at the door to deliver the last line over his shoulder, because the old elf had earned his theater and collected it in small change. Also, he keeps the flask on a chain. Paranoid men chain their trunks, masters. Only a man whose drink is his face chains the flask. Polyjuice. Nobody said it aloud. Hermione wrote it in the folder in capitals, followed by a column of names with question marks, and at the top of the column, because the war room had learned to think in categories, the category itself. Someone who needs an hour at a time, indefinitely. Who is dead or missing, that isn't it was the 9th of November. The proof and the name and the almost were still 5 months out. But afterward, when the whole shape of the year lay on the Wisengamot's table like a finished puzzle, it would be entered into the record that a house elf of the House of Black had identified the impostor by his arm and his flask chain before Christmas, and had, per standing agreement in a folder marked EYES only, been formally awarded the right to say he had told them so, which he exercised at length at dinner forever. The weighing of the wands ambushed them on a Friday, which Hermione noted was the day you scheduled things you wanted printed before anyone could correct them over the weekend. It was meant to be a brief ceremony, champions, wandmaker, one photographer. What it actually contained, sprung from behind a velvet curtain in a burst of jeweled spectacles and crocodile skin handbag, was Rita Skeeter of the Daily Prophet, radiating the specific warmth of a hunter who has found the season's fattest story wandering unattended. Her eyes went over Cedric, Crumb, and Fleur with brisk appraisal, pricing them by the column inch, and then arrived at Harry and dilated like a cat's in the dark. The hidden heir, she breathed. The orphan who was never quite an orphan. Britain is desperate for you, darling, absolutely famished. A few little words, the real Harry, the boy behind the bloodlines. The acid green quill was already out, already licking its nib. Shall we find a broom cupboard? I do my best work in broom cupboards. All press inquiries go through the account office at Gringotts, Harry said pleasantly by rote, the way other children recited their address if lost. Oh, I've heard the little speech. Everyone's heard the little speech. Skeeter's smile tightened at the edges, the quill hovered. But you see, darling, I don't need your cooperation. I have sources. I have background. I have, she said with relish, producing each word like a chocolate from a box, the tragic tale of little Altair, the Death Eater's cast-off, smuggled into decent society under a dead baby's name. The room's temperature dropped by an amount that had nothing to do with the dungeons, and it was not Harry who had done it. Hermione had come in with him in her capacity, per Ted's letter to the panel, as the champion's designated second, a role the tournament rules technically provided and nobody had invoked since 1792, and she stepped up beside him now with a parchment already in her hand and the expression of a girl who had read everything Rita Skeeter had published in 5 years, taken notes, and organized them by actionable offense. Miss Skeeter. Before you file tonight, you'll want to verify 3 things with your legal department. Her voice was exam hall level. First, whether describing a blood adoption sealed under ministry ritual license as smuggling under a dead baby's name constitutes, and I'm quoting the Prophet's own printed correction of March 1989, since you've been through this before, reckless disregard of documented magical fact. Second, whether the phrase Death Eater's cast-off can survive contact with a Gringotts certified instrument, on file and available for press inspection by appointment, in which the wizard in question is recorded by the Goblin Nation as having died opposing you-know-who. Goblin records are admissible, Miss Skeeter. Yours are quotable. There's a difference, and it's worth about 10,000 galleons in front of the Rite Committee. She let the parchment fall open, a solicitor's letterhead. Heard whether your editor knows that the House of Black keeps a folder. It's alphabetized. You're not the first entry, but you're the thickest. The acid green quill had stopped moving. Skeeter's smile stayed on its hook, but her eyes had gone quick and cold behind the jeweled rims, reassessing the girl in front of her the way 20 minutes earlier she had priced the champions. What she said eventually, and it came out almost admiring, was, "You're 14. 15 in September," Hermione said. "Print that." It's checkable. The article that ran that Sunday was titled "The Fourth Champion, Dignity and Destiny," was sourced entirely to onlookers and officials, contained no broom cupboards, misquoted nobody actionable, and described Harry's second as formidably briefed. Ted framed the phrase and hung it in his office. Skeeter thereafter circled the story at a wary distance, filing pieces that were snide about the tournament, fawning about Crumb, and on the subject of House Black, so scrupulously accurate that her regular readers wrote in complaining she'd gone soft. She was not done. Hermione warned the war room. A journalist who could get into a warded castle's grounds for color pieces had a method, and methods were worth watching for. The folder acquired a page, Skeeter. Access unexplained. Watching. The dragons, when creatures watching, and Charlie Weasley's indiscretion and Hagrid's midnight tour delivered the same word by 3 roads in the same week, changed the color of everything. Nesting mothers, Hermione said flat in the war room with the reference books already open because she had, of course, guessed the category from the shape of the secrecy. They're going to put schoolchildren in an arena with nesting mothers. I withdraw my Halloween prediction. Something's gone wrong before Christmas twice. The house's response ran on 2 tracks, because by November that was simply how Harry's life worked. On the official track, Ted lodged with the tournament panel a single meticulous question. On what date did the panel intend to inform the compelled minor champion of the nature of the first task? Given the panel's written acknowledgement appended, and the panel, allergic now to parchment with the black seal on it, replied within days that champions would be formally briefed, which was how Cedric Diggory, Fleur Delacour, and Victor Crumb all came to know about the dragons a full week out, legitimately. With their heads start intact, and none of them ever learned whom to thank. You could have kept the edge, Ron said, wistful, watching Cedric's table absorb the news across the great hall. The edge was never the point. Harry had heard Andromeda say it about the Wisengamot and had not fully believed her until now, feeling it settle. 4 of us are getting sent at dragons for a crowd's entertainment. If one of the others gets hurt because knowing was a privilege, that's the house's name on it forever in 3 countries. Fairness is cheaper. Also, he admitted, because it was Ron, Hermione said if I took a secrecy advantage over Cedric Diggory, she'd write it in receivable under debts owed to Hufflepuff, and I'd be paying it off for years. On the unofficial track, the war room went to work on the actual problem, which Hermione framed on the board in her exam capitals. You cannot outfight a dragon. You can outthink a situation. Define the situation. The situation they defined was not fight the dragon. The brief was retrieve an object the dragon guards. The dragon was not an enemy. She was a mother doing her job in a place she hated. From that reframing, the plan assembled itself over 10 evenings, with contributions logged. Ron, who knew dragons through Charlie the way sailors' brothers know storms, supplied the governing fact: she's not defending the nest from you. She's defending it from everything. Her attention is a budget. Creature supplied the arena survey, pacing the champion's enclosure by night, invisible and indignant at the seating. Tonks by owl supplied the footwork drills adapted to uneven stone. Hermione supplied the two charms that were the plan's spine, both fourth-year adjacent, both drilled until Harry could cast them cold, and the note of doctrine under which the whole scheme was filed: we don't beat her, we bore her. What the crowd saw on the 24th of November was this. 3 champions before Harry fought spectacle battles, summoned brooms, transfigured dogs, charmed eyes, burns and near things, and screaming applause. Then the 4th champion walked out into the rocks against a Hungarian horntail, the worst draw of the day, and did not appear to do anything at all. He moved when the great head was elsewhere and stopped utterly when it swung back. He was, the crowd slowly understood, moving only inside the blind rhythm of her attention, reading her budget like a ledger, and the 2 spells he cast were so quiet the commentary missed both. The first, a Gemino Echo Hermione had adapted from a library book about counterfeiters, bloomed a slow scatter of egg-shaped stones at the nest's far edge, not decoys that fooled the mother. Nothing fooled the mother, but discrepancies that itemized, that had to be checked one by a creature whose whole mind was an audit of threats. The second, cast on himself, was nothing but old folly healer's craft from a book of Alara's that the Portuguese great aunt had sent in October, a sentinel used by mediwitches to keep from spooking bitten patients. He did not smell like predator, he did not smell like anything. He was a slow discrepancy at the margin of a tired mother's budget. And while she audited stones, Altair Regulus Black walked into the nest of the most dangerous dragon in Europe the way you walk through a ward you belong in, lifted the golden egg without haste and walked out. Silence, then the stands detonated. He was the only champion the horntail never flamed at, never struck at, never, the handlers confirmed afterward, wonderingly, even registered as adversarial. The judges, with no burns to deduct and no drama to reward, quarreled visibly and scored him second. Charlie Weasley's crew scored it differently. 3 of them came to the tent afterward to shake his hand, and the oldest of them, a woman with burn scars to her elbow, said the thing that went home in Harry's chest and stayed. 14 years I've worked mothers. That's the first time I've watched a wizard treat one like she had a point of view. Where'd you learn that? From a healer, Harry said. Sort of a family style. The golden egg was opened for the first time that evening in Gryffindor Tower at the demand of the entire house, with Lee Jordan providing ceremonial commentary, and the resulting shriek cleared the common room to the walls, set Crookshanks off like a siren, and was audible per next day testimony in the Hufflepuff cellars. Harry wrestled it shut to a standing ovation of the sarcastic kind. Great, Ron said, ears ringing from behind an armchair. Task 2's a banshee. You're going to outpolite a banshee. The egg went into the war room under a silencing charm and a sticky label in Hermione's capitals. Problem, February, status, screaming, and there it sat, screaming on schedule whenever tested, until January solved it, and the label became Tower shorthand that outlived the tournament by years, applied to essays, Quidditch standings, and once, memorably, by Ginny to Percy. In the champion's tent, Cedric Diggory crossed the canvas with his burn salve still shining and shook Harry's hand in front of Karkaroff and everyone, and said, loudly enough to be quoted, because Cedric was the kind of person the house's ledgers had no column for yet, whoever tipped us about the dragons, if you ever find them, pass on my thanks. And in the stands, wedged between Ron and a Gryffindor banner, Hermione Granger unclenched her hands from her scarf for the first time in an hour and discovered, in the privacy of her own head, filed with uncharacteristic disorder under a heading she declined to examine, that she had not been afraid he would fail. She had been afraid he would be hurt. The distinction, she noted, was doing something to her ability to breathe evenly, and she was going to have to think about it. Later. On the astronomy tower that night, over butterbeer that creature had produced from somewhere with the smugness of an elf who would absolutely say so at the end, she raised her bottle to the 4th champion and said only, you looked like you belonged to yourself out there. I did, Harry said. It was true, and he was still turning the trueness over. First time in front of a crowd, I think. They were all watching, and it didn't weigh anything. He knocked his bottle gently against hers. Your charm did the walking. Alara's book did the rest. I just kept the appointment. Below them the castle glowed and murmured, shiplights on the lake, carriage lights by the forest, a golden egg sitting on a Gryffindor bedside table with its screaming still folded inside it, and neither of them said the other thing, the thing about categories and flasks and doors nobody watched, because the night had earned an hour off, and because Creature was on the stairs, watching, total, exactly as agreed. Chapter 4 and Chapter 5. The Court of Whispers. The trial of Sirius Orion Black convened at 9 in the morning on the 2nd of December, in courtroom 10, before the full Wisengamot, and it lasted 4 hours and 11 minutes, which Ted Tonks would afterward describe as 3 hours and 50 minutes of procedure wrapped around 21 minutes of anybody actually being surprised. Harry and Hermione attended by rite. That had been its own preliminary skirmish, resolved when Ted pointed out that the heir of the accused's house and the signatory heir match held statutory places at any proceeding touching the house's headship, and that the statute in question had been drafted in 1622 and never repealed, and would the clerk like to be the first official in 372 years to refuse it? The clerk would not. They sat in the family box in the good coats, flanked by Andromeda in courtroom Black and Marius, who had been offered the choice of staying home, and had replied that he had waited 58 years to watch this family do something correctly in public and would be attending in his best suit. What the Wisengamot heard, once the procedure unwound, was almost embarrassingly simple. That there had never been a trial, the assembled body took a moment to absorb that, some of them having comfortably assumed otherwise for 13 years. That the head of a noble and most ancient house held the right to demand one, and that the man in the chair, cleared by the family magic itself before goblin witnesses, was that head. That the Fidelius charm on the Potter cottage had been cast with Peter Pettigrew as secret keeper, a switch to which Albus Dumbledore, called as witness, testified in a level voice, confirming he had known the charm was cast and had not known of the substitution, and that the record of his own certainty of Black's guilt had rested, he said, with the words dropping into a courtroom silence like stones into a well, on the assumption that the arrangement I had recommended was the arrangement that was made. I did not verify it has been, a pause the length of a held breath, the practice of a long life to assume that what I recommend is what occurs. This body may weigh how that practice has aged. Hermione wrote that down verbatim. Harry watched her do it and watched the sentence go into accounts payable, not as ammunition, she said later, but as diagnosis. The pensive evidence ran 21 minutes. Sirius's memories, certified untampered by 2 goblin assessors and a ministry legilimens, of the night of the switch, of Godric's Hollow, of the street in which Peter Pettigrew had screamed his accusation, blasted the gas main, and gone down a storm drain with his own severed finger left behind like a stage prop. Veritaserum was offered by the defense and declined by the prosecution as unnecessary, the prosecution by that point consisting of a junior barrister from the DMLE who had inherited the brief that morning and conducted himself throughout like a man handed a live grenade painted to look like a case file. Amelia Bones asked exactly 4 questions from the bench. The last one was directed not at any witness but at the room. Is there any soul in this chamber prepared to state, for the record, a reason this man was held 12 years without the hearing that a shoplifter receives? The silence went on 9 seconds. Harry counted. Somewhere in it, Cornelius Fudge studied the grain of the bench in front of him with the attention of a wandmaker. The verdict was unanimous, which the prophet called historic and Andromeda called arithmetic. Not guilty on all counts, wrongful imprisonment entered into the record, compensation referred to committee, and the line that made the gallery erupt and 3 photographers earn their year's wages, the chief witch's closing observation that the Wisengamot extended to Lord Black the apology of the chamber, for whatever a chamber's apology is worth after 12 years, which this member suspects is not much, but it is tendered entire. Sirius stood. He had sat through 4 hours like a man carved from the dock's own wood, and now he stood, a free man in the good coat, and he did not look at the press gallery or the minister or the assembled quality of wizarding Britain. He looked up at the family box at Harry, and what he said into the noise was lost to the room but not to the 2 people it was aimed at, because they had both learned to read him across crowded rooms by then. Front row. Told you. They came down the ministry's front steps together into a wall of flashbulbs, Lord Black in his heir and the heir match and the restored cousin and the old squib in his best suit. The House of Black walking out of the front door of the government that had buried it, in daylight on the record, and the photograph that ran above the fold the next morning, the one that hung afterward in the kitchen at Grimmauld Place in the frame budget's finest work. Caught the exact moment Sirius threw his head back on the steps and laughed at the December sky like a man let out of every prison at once. At the edge of that photograph, unremarked by the caption, a witch in ministry grey could be seen turning away with her quill already moving, Under-Secretary D. Umbridge, noting names. Hermione kept the clipping anyway. She kept everything. It was going to matter, she said, though not for years, and she was right about that too. And one further photograph reached Grimmauld Place that week, by private commission, because the house settled its oldest accounts first. A freelance photographer of Ted's acquaintance had been retained, on standing instruction dating back to a certain August shopping list, to be at the apothecary end of Diagon Alley when the verdict edition hit the stands, and his long lens caught in perfect focus the exact moment Lucius Malfoy, emerging from Twilfit and Tattings, took in the front page, not guilty. Black exonerated, lordship confirmed, the fall of the face executed in 3 distinct stages like a condemned building. Sirius had it framed in silver, hung it in the downstairs lavatory at eye level, guest height, and captioned it in his own hand, the shade lands somewhere else. Creature, who had opinions about Malfoy's going back decades, was observed to dust it twice daily, front and back, with reverence otherwise reserved for the tapestry. The Yule Ball was announced the following week, and Gryffindor Tower went through its annual transformation into a stock exchange of rumor, negotiation, and public despair. Harry, who had faced a nesting horntail with his pulse level, discovered that the phrase champions traditionally open the ball with a partnered dance did to his insides what the dragon had not. He asked her in the library because that was their country, and he did it with the directness the summer had built into both of them, which is to say he put a note on top of the book she was reading, in his own handwriting, terms drafted like a contract because it would make her laugh and because irony was a place to stand, proposed that the two persons named below attend the Yule Ball as partners. Said persons being already contractually described, by an instrument neither of them drafted as heir and heir match, and it being the operating principle of said persons that nobody else gets to define what that means. Now therefore they define it, for the avoidance of doubt, as follows: best friends, co-conspirators, and the two people in this castle who least want to spend that evening explaining themselves to anyone else. Dancing 1-1 opening number obligatory, after which terms lapse into general merriment. Signed the heir who cannot dance and is disclosing that defect in good faith prior to execution. She read it twice. She took out her quill, crossed out 1-1 and wrote 3-3, initialed the amendment, signed beneath it accepted, the heir match who can and will teach him, and did not look up from her book, and the tips of her ears stayed pink for 11 minutes, which Harry did not mention, having by then absorbed enough of the family grammar to know which observations you banked and which you spent. The teaching happened in the war room evenings, to a wireless creature had repaired and improved until it received, in defiance of several enchantments and possibly the statute, a Muggle station that played the slow songs Hermione Granger had raised her daughter on. Hermione taught the way she did everything, structure first. The box step is just a square, Harry, you walk squares all day, and Harry learned the way he did everything, badly until the moment his body decided the thing was flying, after which it was easy. Ron sat on a desk through half the sessions doing commentary and eating the biscuit budget, wholly unembarrassed, having reached with them the settlement the three of them would keep for life. That the two of them were a unit of some kind that had no name yet and did not require one, and that he was that unit's brother, with a brother's full privileges of mockery and defense. On the night the great hall wore silver frost and enchanted stars, and the champions' procession formed up in the entrance hall under the combined gaze of three schools, and Harry Potter, who had once worn Dudley's cast-offs to school photographs, stood in black formal robes with the raven and wands at his collar beside Hermione Granger in periwinkle blue, her hair won over by Andromeda's own hands, and the hall, seeing them, produced a collective sound that the prophet Stringer transcribed. Accurately for once, as they opened the ball. He stepped on her foot once in the first 8 bars, and she said, without moving her lips, noted for the record, and after that his body remembered it was flying, and the 3 contracted dances became 5 without either of them renegotiating, and the rest of the evening lapsed, per terms, into general merriment. Ron, resplendent in the new dress robes Sirius had sent with a card reading Burn the Maroon Ones, McGonagall dancing one stately number with Regulus Black, who had asked her with a bow that predated the war, both wars, every war anyone present could remember. Victor Crumb, who had asked Hermione in November and taken her regretful refusal with a grave courtesy that upgraded him permanently in the war room's ledgers, introducing her instead to his headmaster with the phrase, "This is the witch who reads," at which Karkaroff smiled like a man biting foil. And Creature, stationed at the refreshments table in his house colors tea towel by special petition of the Hogwarts elves who had heard things, repelling 3 separate students' attempts to spike the punch with the silent efficiency of a goalkeeper. Near midnight the two of them ended up on the terrace steps with their outer layers swapped for warmth, her wrap around his shoulders having been deemed by both parties funnier, watching the enchanted snow come down and dissolve a foot above the rose hedges. "Eater's here somewhere," Hermione said, conversational. "Banned from the grounds, and her column tomorrow will have 3 details nobody outside this party could know. That's not a source, that's presence. I'll work out the how. I'm close. It's something small. Watch, it'll be something you could hold in your hand." Then in exactly the same register, which was how she delivered the things that were not small, "My parents asked me at half-term what you are to me. For the forms at Gringotts, technically, but really. Mum asked, I've been drafting the answer for a month, and I want to file it with you first because that's the protocol we run. Filed jointly or it doesn't count," Harry said. The snow dissolved and dissolved above the roses. "You're the person my life happened next to until it happened with." She said it evenly, eyes on the middle distance, a clerk reading a deed that happened to be made of her own pulse. That's the whole draft. 3 years of trolls and time-turners and dementors, and then 1 summer of tapestries, and I looked up in some kitchen in August and noticed there wasn't a version of my future I'd bothered imagining that didn't have you standing in it. Not, and here the evenness bent just slightly like light entering water, not anything anyone needs to name yet. We're 14 and 15. The contract says 17, and the contract's smarter than everyone who's ever panicked about it. But you asked what I filed with my mother, that's what I filed. The snow came down. Somewhere behind them the last waltz was winding through the doors, and the terrace stones held the cold the way old stone does, patiently, and Harry looked at the person his life had happened next to until it happened with, and found the answer had been drafted in him for months too, and required in the end no drafting at all. Co-signed, he said, as written, no amendments. Her shoulder came to rest against his. The library line, the proof went through line, and they stayed out until the snow stopped, wearing each other's warmth, 15 years old in no hurry whatsoever. While inside the castle the band played the last song and the enchanted stars wheeled slow over 300 people, not one of whom they needed to explain themselves to. Christmas at Grimmauld Place, the first of the new dispensation, fell between the ball and the forge, and Sirius threw himself at it with the unnerving totality of a man celebrating 13 at once. There was a tree in the drawing room so large it had required negotiation with the ceiling. There were paper crowns, non-negotiable, worn at table by a lord, a squib, 2 dentists, 1 headmistress-in-waiting who dropped in on Boxing Day and stayed 4 hours, and an elf whose crown creature wore for a week afterward at a formal angle. And there were stockings, which Harry had believed himself too old for right up until the moment he found one with his name on it. Both names, creatures' compromise being to letter Harry on the cuff and embroider a small constellation underneath, and had to spend a minute at the window with his back to the room. The gifts ran to pattern, books annotated in 3 generations of margins, a watch of Fleamont Potters from the vaults with a note from Sirius reading it kept time through 2 wars, it can survive your owls, and from Marius Muggle fountain pens for them both, because, the card said, the other side of your life deserves decent equipment too. Late on the night itself, Harry came down for water and found Sirius alone in the drawing room in a paper crown, looking at the tapestry with a glass in his hand, at the gold thread where his brother's name met a star, and neither of them said anything at all. Harry just took the chair next to him, and they sat with it, the tree light and the gas flames and the wall of names, until the glass was empty, and the house sent them both to bed with a creak apiece. The locket went into the forge on the 28th of December. Gringotts did not perform such work in the public halls. The party, Harry, Sirius, Hermione, Creature, and Gornock in ceremonial black and silver, went down by cart and then by stair, below the vault levels, below the dragon levels, into galleries where the torches burned white and the walls stopped pretending to be architecture and admitted to being mountain root, and the air itself felt old, pressed smooth by weight, like the air in a place where the world kept its originals. The deep halls. Goblins passed them in silence, and every one of them, seeing the box Creature carried, made the same gesture, a hand flat over the sternum, and Gornock asked quietly what it meant, said, "Acknowledgement of an unmaking. We are makers, Mr. Black. We do not unmake lightly, and we honor the necessity when it walks past." The forge of the deep halls was a chamber like the inside of a struck bell, and the fire in its center did not flicker, because it was not that kind of fire. It stood a column of white gold stillness, and it made no sound, and looking at it Harry understood, in the wordless way the hearthroom had taught him, that this was the fire the family's green office flames were a distant, domesticated grandchild of, and that it was older than the bank, older than the treaty, older, possibly, than the language anyone present could have said so in. The price had been negotiated in November, and Hermione had sat in on the negotiation at Gornock's pointed invitation, and called it afterward the finest education of her life. The bank did not want gold. The house had offered gold and been refused with something close to gentleness. The bank wanted, and the house gave. 3 pieces of goblin-wrought silver from the black vaults, taken in payment or plunder by wizards in centuries so distant the account had gone to legend, restored now to the maker's line with a written acknowledgement, the first of its kind under any house's seal, that goblin work returns to goblin hands when the wizard who bargained for it dies, and that the House of Black recognized the maker's law and would say so publicly whenever the treaty question was next put before the Wisengamot. "You are purchasing an unmaking with a precedent," Gornock had said. "I am obliged to tell you the precedent is worth more than the service." And Hermione had answered before anyone else could, "We know, that's the point. Precedents are how you apologize to a whole people instead of one account manager." And Gornock had looked at her for a long moment and then made a note in the gray linen ledger which he declined ever to translate. The unmaking itself took 4 minutes and was attended by 9 goblins of the forge in aprons of dragonhide gone white with age. The locket was set on an anvil that predated the anvil's own word for itself. The senior smith read out in gobbledegook and then in English, because the client was owed the knowing, a single sentence: "What was made to hold a debt against death is unmade, and the debt falls due." Then the tongs went into the white fire and came out holding a piece of it, and the fire was set against the gold, and the locket screamed. It screamed with a young man's voice, and then with a high cold voice that was not young and had never been young, and the scream bent the torchlight and made the 9 goblins lean into it like sailors into weather, and Creature stood at the anvil's foot with his ears flat and his eyes open, visibly refusing to look away, because Master's last order was being carried out and somebody who loved him should witness it. The serpentine S cracked. Something came off the metal like smoke that hated, hung an instant in the shape of a slit-eyed face, and was taken by the fire's stillness, the way a shout is taken by snowfall, absorbed, cancelled, unhappened, and the 2 halves of the locket lay on the anvil, just gold now, only gold, cooling. Nobody spoke for a while. The fire stood. Somewhere very far away, in a temporary body in an Albanian forest or a rented room, something that had once been Tom Riddle felt a tooth pulled from a jaw it did not know it still possessed, and screamed too at nothing at Forrest, at the sudden arithmetic of being less. And though none of them would know that detail for years, every one of them, even the goblins, felt the far-off flinch arrive in the chamber like the pressure change before a storm breaks somewhere else. Creature stepped forward. He took the 2 cooled halves of plain gold in his old hands, and he held them for a moment with his head bowed, 12 years of the swallowed knife coming out of his chest in one long exhale, and then he turned and presented them with full ceremony to Harry. "It is done, Master Altair," he said, using that name for the first time, and his voice was a rasp and a bell at once. "Tell him, when you speak to the tapestry. Tell Master Regulus, Creature, and Master's son, and Master's son's chosen, and the makers under the mountain. It took all of us. He should know it took all of us. He always thought," and the old voice broke at last on the far side of duty where breaking was allowed, "he always thought he had to do everything alone." Harry knelt and put his arms around the elf in the deep halls before 9 goblins of the forge and the lord of his house, and nobody in that chamber found it remarkable at all. Narcissa Malfoy chose the venue herself, a muggle tarum in a market town in the Cotswolds, mid-January, 3 in the afternoon, a place of doilies and horse brasses where no wizard of her husband's acquaintance would be found alive. She was there when they arrived, veiled hat, muggle coat worn with the faint heroic discomfort of a woman in costume, and she rose and kissed Andromeda's cheek as though 22 years were 22 days, and the 2 sisters looked at each other for a moment in a silence with a whole biography inside it. She had asked for Andromeda and the heir if his council permits. The council had debated it for 3 evenings. It was Hermione in the end who had settled the question. "Everything she sent us has been true, early, and against her own interest if discovered. In my ledger, that's not a source anymore. That's an ally who can't say so. You don't leave allies standing in doorways." Over tea in a corner table's bubble of privacy secured by one unobtrusive charm and the tarum's absolute muggle indifference, Narcissa Malfoy laid out, in the manner of a woman itemizing a dinner service, the state of the other side of the board. Her husband, she said, had spent the autumn in a state she had not seen since 1981. The mark, she said, without drama, pronouncing the word as one pronounces a diagnosis, had been darkening, slowly since summer, faster since Halloween. "Whatever was done in your vaults last month," and her eyes over the teacup where the precise cool gray of her whole family was felt. "He didn't speak of it. He drank and had the elf whipped and wrote 4 letters he burned unsent. My rede for what a wife's rede is worth is that something his master counted on is gone, and the master is both weakened and," pause, selecting the word with tongs, "accelerated, frightened things move early. And the school," Andromeda said, "the letter about the teacher." "Barty Crouch's son died in Azkaban," Narcissa said. "That is the record. My Aunt Bellatrix, who does not write, wrote to Lucius in November, and I read it because I read everything in my house. That is how it has remained my house. One line concerned young Barty. It said, 'The faithful one keeps his post well, does he not?' Present tense, sister, the faithful one keeping a post." She set down her cup, and the click of china was the loudest thing she had said all afternoon. "There is a dead man teaching at Hogwarts, and my husband's circle knows it, and its business is your nephew, because there is no other business at Hogwarts this year worth a resurrection. I cannot prove it. I will not testify to it. I am not here, and this tea has not happened. But you will act as though it is true, because it is, and when the year turns bad, and it will, my price is not gold either." For the first time the composure moved 1 degree like ice settling. "My price is Draco. When it comes apart and everyone who dines at my table on Thursdays is running or dead or worse, my son gets a door that opens. Whatever he has said, whatever he has been made into by then, a door." "On the house's word," Harry said before Andromeda could speak, because some answers had to come from the blood and he was learning which ones. "Write the date down, Hermione." "Already written," Hermione said. Narcissa Malfoy looked across the doilies at the 2 of them, the heir and the heir match, children still, keeping ledgers, and something passed over the beautiful cold face that was almost a mother's expression and almost a chess player's, and in the way of Black's, entirely both. "So the old machine turns out to run after all," she said, "when someone finally oils it with sense instead of blood. Aunt Walburga will be spinning in her frame. Do give her my love. No, on reflection, do tell her exactly who I had tea with. Sundays at 4, sister, the same table, whenever you can. I have 22 years of gossip and nobody living I can tell. Harry went to Dumbledore in February alone. The council had wargamed the confrontation for a month, and in the end the decisive argument had once again been Hermione's, delivered in the war room with the receipt lying on the table between them all. We keep planning this as an ambush, and every version ends with us holding a body and no answers. He'll fall on the sword the moment he sees it coming, apologize beautifully, resign something, and we'll never learn the why. But he's also the only adult in this castle who's known everything since 1981. There's a dead man teaching defense and a war restarting, and we can't afford him as an enemy or a martyr. So don't ambush, audit. Harry goes alone, papers face down, and asks. You can hex a schemer. You can't hex a boy asking an honest question. He knows that better than anyone alive. It's been his own best weapon for 100 years. The office was as it had always been, the instruments, the portraits pretending sleep, Fawkes on his perch like a banked fire. Dumbledore poured tea and did not touch his own, and Harry laid the folder on the desk, face down, and asked the honest question. You had my father's writ in November 1981. The bank has your office's seal on the receipt. You sealed away the guardianship, you renewed a placement you knew was irregular every 7 years, and you had a watcher on the house where I slept in a cupboard for 10 years. I'm not here for the apology. I've read your committee testimony. You apologize like other men duel, sir. It's the finest in Britain and I'd lose. I'm here because I can't make the ledger balance. The columns say either you're cruel, and I've met cruel. I ate at its table for 13 years and you're not it. Or the columns say there's an entry I can't see. Show me the entry. The old man was silent for a long moment. The instruments ticked and breathed silver. When he spoke to the window, to the white grounds and the far frozen lake, and his voice had put down, for once, all of its music. When the prophecy was made, I heard it. When your parents died, all 4 of them, Harry, I knew all 4. I stood in this office and I understood 3 things in one night, and I have never been able to make anyone understand that they arrived together, indivisible, like one dreadful cord. That Voldemort was not gone because of what I suspected he had made of himself, that the boy who survived would be the axis of his return, marked, hunted, prophesied, and that the boy was the heir of the House of Black. He turned from the window. You have spent a happy summer learning what that house is. Allow me to tell you what it was from where I stood in 1981. It was the 3rd greatest concentration of dark artifacts, blood-loyal retainers, and unaccountable magical force in Britain. It had just produced the war's most devoted lieutenants, and its family magic, which answers to no law and no ministry, was about to recognize as its future lord an infant who already carried, though I could not then prove it, a fragment of Voldemort's own sundered soul behind his forehead. The fire settled. Harry did not move. Later he would inventory what it cost to sit still inside that sentence and file the cost under prices worth paying, because his stillness was the reason the old man kept talking. You know about the anchors. Your goblins unmade one in December, and I felt the whole castle's wards exhale, and I began to hope things I had forbidden myself for 13 years. Yes, you carry or carried, I do not know which, and the not knowing is the first honest joy I have had in some time, a shard of him. And so in one November week I faced this arithmetic. A marked child prophesied to face a deathless enemy, heir to a throne of exactly the kind of power that turns marked children into the next enemy. Every road I could see through the House of Black ended in a lordling raised on legacy and grievance, told from the cradle he was chosen, twice over, by prophecy and by blood. I had watched that boy grow up before Harry. I taught him. He opened the Chamber of Secrets in 1943, and the hat had put him in my own house's colors within the decade. The blue eyes came back from the window, and they were old in a way the office's clutter usually disguised. So I chose the cupboard over the throne. I sealed the writ. I placed you where blood protection could be argued and legacy could not reach, and I paid for it in a currency I minted myself and audited never. Your Mr. Tonks's phrase, it was reported to me. It is the truest thing anyone has said of me in open session in 40 years. You chose for everyone, Harry said. The anger he had been promised since July was present now, arrived punctually for its appointment, and he was surprised to find it standing quietly at his shoulder rather than in his mouth. The summer had taught it manners without teaching it doubt. For me, for Sirius, 12 years, sir, for a man you'd taught on an assumption you didn't verify. For the Grangers, whose daughter your world conscripted by Quill the night she was born, and who got to find out at a tea table 14 years later from us, because your version had no plans to tell them at all. You saw a throne and decided no one could be trusted on it, so you kept everyone off it, and the whole time the actual house, the real one, not your 1981 file on it, was holding a contract that said the throne can only be shared by consent and a hearth that feeds on exactly the thing you starved me of. You weren't wrong that the power was dangerous. You were wrong about what it runs on. That's what Dark Lords get first, isn't it? Not the killing, the certainty. The deciding for everyone alone, because only you can see the whole board. By that measure, the most dangerous thing in this castle isn't in my scar, headmaster. It's the habit we're sitting in the middle of. The silence that followed lasted a long time, and Fawkes, halfway through it, left his perch and came to stand on the arm of Harry's chair, which both of them watched him do, and neither of them commented on, because the bird's ledgers were his own. "The habit," Dumbledore said at last, "is 113 years old, and you are the second person to name it to my face. The first was my sister, and she did not live to see me disagree with her." He reached across the desk and turned the folder over, the receipt, the filings, 13 years of quiet renewals, and read his own paper trail without flinching, and then squared its edges and slid it back. "I will not insult either of us with the beautiful apology. I gather my technique has been scouted. I will offer terms instead, since I am told the House prefers them. Full disclosure from me to your counsel of everything, the prophecy's wording, the anchors as I know them, the scar as I suspect it, in writing, against my every instinct, which is precisely why it must be in writing. In exchange," and here, for one moment under the 113 years, something surfaced that was not calculation at all, and had perhaps been waiting a very long time for permission to exist, "you will permit an old man to attend the rest of the war he helped misbuild, as counsel rather than architect. Your architecture is better, it has a hearth in it." "Terms accepted," Harry said, "pending council review," and Albus Dumbledore laughed once, short and real, the laugh of a man audited at last, and poured the tea that had gone cold and drank it anyway. The golden egg, incidentally, had been solved since January, and the solving had balanced the ledger. Cedric Diggory had stopped Harry on a staircase 2 weeks into term, checked both directions with the elaborate casualness of an honest person attempting tradecraft, and said, "The egg. Take a bath with it, prefect's bathroom, 5th floor, passwords pine fresh, trust me, it wants to be underwater." Then going pink, "Somebody did me a good turn before the dragons. Whole year I've been wondering who to pay it back to. Odds felt decent it was you." "Never confirmed," Harry said, "never denied," and Cedric grinned the grin that had half of Hogwarts writing his name on their book covers, and went on up the stairs. And that evening the war room convened around a bathtub-adjacent transcription of the egg's underwater song, and Hermione had the species identified inside 40 minutes, and the hour limit worked out inside 90. At which point she looked up from the tide charts of the Black Lake with an expression that made Ron move the biscuits protectively, and said the sentence that generated the writ, the Murmish translation, Ted's linguist, and 3 weeks of contingency drills. "They're going to take people." In the folder under Receivable, a line was retired, Hufflepuff debt to paid in full, and beneath it a new line opened in its place, because that was how the ledger worked once you started keeping it honestly. Diggory, see good bank, extend credit indefinitely. The second task gave the lake back its hostages on the last day of February, and by evening the school had the whole shape of it to argue over at dinner. How the merfolk had taken, for each champion, the thing they would miss most. How the fourth champion had gone down under a sentinel and a bubble head in that same unhurried nesting mother style, first to the village, first to his hostage, and how the hostage had been, to the surprise of no one who read the prophet and the visible fury of several sixth-year romantics, Hermione Granger. And how he had then, with his hour running out, stayed, wand drawn, treading the cold dark, until the little Delacour girl's sister failed the Grindylows and the hour broke and the merfolk's spears came up around the remaining child, and the fourth champion had looked at the spears and produced from a dragonhide holster a rolled parchment in a bubble charm and held it up like a writ. It was, in fact, a writ. Prepared by Ted for exactly the categories of emergency the war room had brainstormed under the heading, "They put people underwater, RTHEY insane, jurisdiction." It asserted in Murmish, courtesy of a translation commissioned from a linguist at the Department for the Regulation and Control of Magical Creatures who owed Ted lunch, that the House of Black extended formal guest right to all hostages under its protection, and invoked the lake folk's own law of the surrendered guest, and it worked, not because merfolk are moved by parchment, the chieftainess explained to Dumbledore afterward, with what he reported as considerable amusement, but because in 600 years of wizards splashing self-importantly through her village, this was the first one who had arrived carrying their law, translated, sealed, and offered politely, and courtesy of that size was its own kind of magic. Harry surfaced with Gabrielle Delacour on his back 11 minutes past the hour, to a judge's table in open dispute, and was scored after the dispute got loud first on the grounds, read into the record by Amelia Bones's observer, of initiative, jurisprudence, and conduct becoming a house. Fleur Delacour kissed him on both cheeks in front of the entire school, called him a lord in the old way, whatever his age, and adopted Hermione on the spot with the ferocity of an elder sister acquiring a sibling by conquest. Rita Skeeter's column on Monday called it staged. It was her last column for some time, because Hermione caught her on the Thursday. It was, as promised, something you could hold in your hand, a beetle, fat and unhurried, with markings around its antennae exactly like jeweled spectacles, sitting on the windowsill of the hospital wing during a champion's medical check it had no way to know was scheduled. Hermione, who had spent February cross-referencing every scene Skeeter had impossibly witnessed against a ministry registry that listed no animagi born after 1953, put a jar over it with the calm of a woman completing a proof, punched air holes in the lid with a hairpin, and carried it to the war room where the beetle was shown, through glass, the following exhibits. The registry page its name did not appear on. The statutory penalty schedule for unregistered animagi, 5 years as of the 1986 revision, and a draft letter to the DMLE dated but unsent. Then Hermione let it go out the window, unharmed, unregistered, wholly owned. "We don't need a caged journalist," she told the folder as she filed the incident. "We need Britain's most strict gossip columnist knowing that we could have and didn't and might. That's not blackmail, whatever Ron says. It's an unregistered debt." Creature taught me the difference. Blackmail spends, debts compound. Winter broke late that year. On the last cold Saturday of it, the house convened at Grimmauld Place for what Creature's hand-lettered menu called the Feast of Accounts Settled, and the long kitchen table sat 14. The family in all its new arithmetic, Grangers and Tonkses and one exonerated lord at its head, Marius with his rose, Ron beside Ginny with his own napkin ring now, a guest of such standing that Creature had stopped counting him as company, which was, everyone agreed, the highest honor the house currently bestowed. Harry stood at the drawing-room tapestry before dinner, alone by design for 1 minute, because he had a message to deliver, and the delivery mattered. The wall had changed again that week. Beside the gold thread of the mended lines, the tapestry had done a thing no grammar in Andromeda's book had a precedent for, and put out, at the joining of Regulus Black in the empty worked space where Elara, nay Fawley waited for her photographs from Portugal, a single thread of silver running down through Altair called Harry and out along the line of the Concords weaving toward Hermione, and where the silver crossed the gold it had made a small woven star. Nobody had told it to. Tapestries, Andromeda said, editorialize. It was the textile equivalent of the house clearing its throat, moved. "It's done," Harry told the woven name quietly per instructions. "Creature and your son's chosen, and the makers under the mountain. It took all of us." He touched the star once where silver crossed gold. "He wanted you to know it took all of us. Nobody does everything alone, not even you, not anymore." Downstairs a door banged. Tonks had knocked over the umbrella stand. The stand had learned not to complain about it. Sirius was laughing, and the smell of Creature's roast was climbing the stairs like a tide with opinions, and above the sideboard the framed photograph from the ministry steps caught the gaslight, the house of Black in daylight walking out the front door. Harry went down to dinner. Behind him in the empty drawing room, in the quiet that old houses keep for their own purposes, the little star held its place in the weave, silver on gold, patient as a banked coal, and the wall of names watched over the sound of 14 people sitting down to eat, which was of every magic in that ancient and terrible house, the one its builders had planned for least and the one in the end that held. Chapter 5 and Chapter 6, the grave debt. Dumbledore kept his terms. That was the spring's first strange gift. A headmaster who arrived at Grimmauld Place by flew on the second Saturday of the Easter holidays with a leather portfolio under his arm, and per the council's conditions, no twinkle whatsoever, and who sat at the kitchen table. The kitchen table, Sirius repeated afterward, my mother's kitchen table, and Albus Dumbledore sat at it drinking Creature's tea like an auditor from head office, and disclosed. He disclosed the prophecy, complete, both clauses, and stood witness while Hermione transcribed it, and sealed the transcription under house wards. He disclosed the anchors, the diary already destroyed in the chamber, the locket unmade in December, his researches pointing toward a cup, a diadem, a ring he had traced to a shack at Little Hangleton and been forbidden by the council, in writing in Hermione's capitals. "Do not touch it alone. You know why we're writing this down, from retrieving without goblin assessors present." He disclosed the scar and what he suspected lived behind it, and the theory he had built over 13 years and never spoken aloud entire. That the fragment was unanchored, parasitic, and in his considered judgment, removable only by the death of the host. And then he sat in the kitchen's quiet while the family absorbed that, and it was Marius, of all the table, who broke the silence, setting down his cup with a click and saying, in the dry paper voice that had survived being unpersoned by the finest dark family in Britain. "In my experience, headmaster, this house's judgments about which of its children must be sacrificed for the health of the whole have a certain track record. I'd get a second opinion." They got a second opinion. The second opinion arrived in April on Gringotts' letterhead over the seals of the forge, and it ran to 9 pages of goblin curse analysis, and its operative paragraph, which Hermione read aloud to the war room with her voice going steadier the way it did when things were enormous, said, "The makers concur the fragment is parasitic and concur it is unanchored, and dissent from the conclusion of host death, which is a wand maker's conclusion, reason from wands. The forge does not reason from wands." A A parasite unanchored is a debt unhoused, and debts unhoused can be called due by a creditor of standing. The question is not how to kill the vessel. The question is who holds the debt, and beneath it, in Gornuk's own hand, one line, ask the boy's house who died holding this creature's promissory notes. Then ask what the family magic does with unpaid paper. Regulus, Harry said into the war room's silence. The name went through him the way the hearthstone's warmth had, title recognizing. He died taking one of the anchors. He was murdered, functionally, by the thing he was unmaking, a marked servant, killed in the course of breaking the mark. Andromeda, what does the family magic do with that? Andromeda had gone very still, and when she spoke it was slowly, a woman walking around a very old machine she had only ever read about. It enters it, she said, in the ledger. The real one, the one under the wards, the one the tapestry is just the display face of. Blood debt, oath break, and grave wrong, all three at once, recorded against the debtor. Nobody's collected on a black grave debt in 3 centuries, because collection requires the debtor to come within the family magic's reach, and debtors of that kind are careful. She looked up, and her eyes had the December Forge look. He took your blood at his rebirth, or he will, if the headmaster's theory about ritual patterns holds, blood of the enemy. He thinks it buys him your mother's protection, neutralized. But you're not just Lily's son, are you? You're the son of the man whose death sits unpaid in our ledger, and if he takes the blood of the creditor's blood into his own body willingly by his own right, he doesn't neutralize the protection, Hermione finished. The whole room had arrived at it together, the way the war room did its best work, but she got there first by half a breath. She always got there first by half a breath. He serves himself the debt. He makes himself collectible. Oh, she said, and sat down and laughed once, the appalled laugh she laughed at elegant, terrible things. Oh, it's Arcturus all over again. It's the Concord's grammar. The family magic doesn't do vengeance, it does accounts. He's going to stand in a graveyard and voluntarily sign for everything he owes this house, and he doesn't know the house keeps books, because in his whole obscene extended life it has never once occurred to him that anything as human as a family could constitute a jurisdiction. Which left, the council agreed, in the last week of the holidays, with the whole board laid out on the kitchen table under the map Creature had drawn of the third task's growing maze, only the operational questions. They could not prevent the taking. Dumbledore's watch on the impostor continued and continued to find nothing actionable. A dead man wearing a friend's face and wearing it flawlessly, and to move without proof was to trade a known threat for an unknown one. What they could do was what the house had done all year. They could read the terms early and arrive prepared and make the enemy's contract eat him. He wants Harry at that graveyard, Sirius said. The whole year points there, so we accept the meeting. We accept the meeting, Andromeda agreed, and we set the agenda. Living in the same castle as the enemy's agent, knowing and being unable to act, was, Hermione declared in mid-May, the single worst assignment of the year, and she had spent March being publicly compared to a beetle. The rules of engagement were absolute and Dumbledore's own, agreed with the council in writing. No confrontation, no avoidance, no change of any kind detectable from outside. Barty Crouch Jr. had spent 9 months building a flawless Alastor Moody, and the only advantage anyone held was that he did not know his audience had stopped believing the performance. So Harry went to defense twice a week and sat in the 3rd row and was taught, well, that was the obscenity of it, brilliantly by his would-be murderer, and learned constant vigilance from a man he was practicing it on, and turned in essays to be marked by the hand that had put his name in the goblet, and the war room graded his composure afterward the way Tonks graded footwork. Once, only once, the mask lined in. A lesson on curse detection had run long, and the scarred face had swung its blue eye toward Harry at the door, and the gravel voice said offhand in exactly old Moody's register of paranoid comradeship, Potter, or is it Black now? The papers can't settle. All that old family machinery around you these days. Contracts, elves, goblin lawyers, the I-word fixed. A word of advice from an old orer, machinery's only as good as the men oiling it. Ever wonder what all that protection's for? What they're saving you up to be. The question was a scalpel dressed as a platitude, and Harry felt it probe, felt the whole graveyard-shaped design behind it lean forward for the answer, and gave it the truth, because the truth was the best armor in the house's whole arsenal, and the one thing the creature wearing Moody's face could do nothing with. Dinner mostly, he said. It's mostly for dinner, sir. 14 people most Sundays. You'd be welcome, except my elf's fussy about guests who dose by the clock. He says a man who drinks that regular is either cursed or keeping schedule for somebody, and either way he counts the spoons. He shouldered his bag, nodded politely at the suddenly very still blue eye, and left, and made it around 2 corners before his knees informed him of the invoice, and Hermione, waiting at the 3rd corner by arrangement, took one look at his face and walked him to the kitchens for tea without a single question, which was its own fluency, and only said, once he'd stopped vibrating, well, now he gets to spend 6 weeks wondering whether an elf made him. Creature did make him, Harry said into the tea. Yes, said Hermione with terrible contentment, but he can't check. The preparations in the end came down to 4 objects and a sentence, which Hermione said was the correct shape for a plan. plans with more moving parts than a hand had fingers being, per Tonks's manual hobbies. The first object was a ring. Gornuck delivered it personally in May, a plain band of forged silver, priced, he said, at 1 nut, because the bank's charter required a consideration, and the bank's sense of occasion required it be nominal. A portkey sentinel keyed by the makers that warmed against the skin in the presence of any portkey enchantment not registered to the wearer's house. It went on Harry's right hand and stayed there. The second was the holster, Regulus's dragon hide, refitted by the same forge to do one thing it had not done before: answer a one-word command in gobbledygook, taught to Harry by Gornuck with the solemnity of a man conferring citizenship, that would swap the wand it held for the wand concealed in its lining. The wand in the lining was Harry's own. The wand it would surrender to a searcher was a very good replica with a core of nothing in particular, purchased, with documentation, from a novelty manufacturer in Liverpool, because, Ted observed, the wizarding world's greatest ritualists would check a boy's hand and his sleeve, and would never in 9 centuries think to ask whether the famous wand they'd confiscated was famous. The third was Creature, and the sentence. The sentence had been drafted by the full council, tested against every scenario the war room could build, and reduced, per doctrine, to words a frightened person could say with a bound jaw if it came to that, and it was the standing order. Creature's standing order, sworn before the hearth in the oldest room, witnessed by the house itself, the gas flames leaning in. If the young master calls in blood through the bond of the house, Creature comes, through anything. Wards, wars, jurisdictions, the elf had recited the list himself, with relish, through anything, masters. There's no anywhere that is not somewhere to an elf, and takes away whomever the young master names. Not fights, takes away. Elf magic did not duel, it was older and ruder than dueling, it simply declined to acknowledge the wall. The fourth object Hermione made herself, and gave him the night before the task, on the astronomy tower without ceremony, in a matchbox. It was a button. Plain black, indistinguishable from the other buttons on the house formal cloak he'd wear into the arena, and she had spent 3 weeks of library nights on it with Flitwick's distant, plausibly deniable blessing. A protean-linked twin to a button she now wore inside her collar, enchanted to carry one bit of information in each direction. Pressed once from his side, taken, alive, activate everything. Warm from her side, constant, a pulse an anxious hand could check. We know, we're moving, hold. It's not much, she said, watching him sew it on himself, because Creature had taught him in some stitches you did with your own hands. 1 bit each way. I wanted words 2-way, a whole channel, and it kept destabilizing past a mile, and I ran out of month. 1 bit is what I could make true at any distance. I tested it to Aberdeen. 1 bit is everything, Harry said. 1 bit is the difference between alone and not. He tied off the thread, bit it, and looked at her in the last of the light. 15, furious with herself over a miracle hair coming out of its arrangement, the person his life happened with. Hermione, whatever's in that maze, I'm coming back. I know, she said. I did the arithmetic. It's just, and for once in her life she made no attempt whatsoever to finish the sentence with a citation, and put her arms around him instead, hard, and he put his around her, and the two of them stood in the wind at the top of the castle for a long time, holding the plan and each other, which were by then the same thing. On the morning of the third task, the champions were called from breakfast to a side chamber, and Harry went and braced for officials and found families. The Diggories around Cedric, Fleur's parents, and the small silver comet that was Gabrielle already orbiting her sister, Crumb's dark-browed mother and father by the fire, and filling the whole east end of the room in a way that made his chest do something complicated, all of them. Sirius in the good coat, free in public at Hogwarts, shaking hands with a slightly dazed Amos Diggory, Andromeda and Ted, Tonks, hair Gryffindor gold for the occasion, on protective detail she'd assigned herself. The Grangers, muggles walking into a castle out of their daughter's letters at last, Helen turning in place under the enchanted vaulting with her hand at her mouth. Marius in his best suit being introduced to McGonagall's staffroom colleagues by name, of the London Blacks, yes, the tapestry ones, with 58 years of exile worn suddenly light, and Hermione, who had walked down as family without anyone needing to define the term per doctrine. Champions' families, Cedric said at his shoulder, watching the room. They told us it was tradition. You looked like you'd been hit with something. Year before last, Harry said, my family was a cupboard. He watched Creature, who had materialized by the pastry table in his house colors, and was subjecting the Hogwarts elves' breakfast pastries to a quality inspection that was going to end in an alliance or a war. It's a long story. It's got a bank in it. It's got a maze in it tonight, Cedric said. Listen. Whatever's wrong in this tournament, and don't tell me nothing is, you've had horrors in your eyes since October. My dad can't see it, but I'm in it, so I'll ask you straight and once. What do I do out there if it goes strange? Harry looked at him, the honest length of him, good bank, extend credit indefinitely, and told him a piece of the truth, which was all he had clearance for, and it would turn out exactly enough. Stay off the cup until you've looked at it twice. Anything feels wrong, sparks first, pride after. And if you see me do something mad, don't follow me. Run the other way and shout for the headmaster. Swear it like you mean it. Cedric studied him for a moment, a Hufflepuff parsing a Black sentence, loyalty auditing cunning, and then he put out his hand, and they shook on it, and that handshake, though neither could know it, was the second thing that saved his life. The ring was the first. The day ran golden and strange, the way pre-battle days do. He gave them the castle. The Grangers photographed everything, including, at Helen's insistence, the librarian. Marius stood a long time at the trophy room case that held a tarnished shield with 2 names on it, C. Black, A. Black, Cousins, Beaters, 1934, and said nothing, and touched the glass once and moved on. Sirius took an unauthorized detour to a corridor behind a tapestry of dancing trolls and emerged suspiciously misty. It's a room, it was our room, and lunch in the great hall seated muggle dentists between a lord and a squib under a sky charmed the exact blue of the day outside, and if the House of Black had ever in 7 centuries assembled a stranger table, the tapestry kept no record of it. At dusk they walked him down to the Quidditch pitch together, and at the champion's enclosure Hermione checked one last time with a fingertip through his cloak the button, warm, live, tested to Aberdeen. Appointments at the far end, she said, steady as a clerk. Her eyes were not. I'll keep it, Harry said. Hold the line. I always hold the line, said Hermione Granger, and kissed him on the cheek in front of the crowd, the flashbulbs, the judges, and one imposter with a whirring eye, and walked to the family box with her chin at the exam angle and held the line. The maze was cold and it was wrong. That was his overwhelming impression, moving through walls of hedge that swallowed the crowd's noise inside 20 feet. The tournament's showpiece was a stage set, and something had gotten at it. The enchantments were Hogwarts' own. He could feel the castle's grammar in them, but they'd been edited, the way a forged letter edits a hand, obstacles rerouted, paths herded, the whole living topology of the thing gently, patiently biased, a maze with a thumb on it. The others felt it too in their ways. The maze itself he handled by doctrine. The arena is a situation. Define the situation. A boggart at the second turning got 2/3 through becoming a kitchen table with 14 empty chairs before Ridiculous filled them, which told him things about himself he filed for later. An acromantula was not fought but budgeted, decoyed onto a discrepancy and left auditing it, the Horntel's lesson holding for every guardian since. And the golden mist that turned the world upside down he simply walked through on Hermione's June briefing. Trust the feet. The mist lies to the eyes and rents the panic. 11 steps, counted aloud. He crossed Fleur's path once and she was pale and fast, and later heard, 2 rows over, the unmistakable sound of Crumb's voice casting a curse Crumb would never cast, flat, conducted wrong, and put his wand through the hedge without ceremony and stunned mid-word the thing wearing Crumb, and sent up green sparks over the spot per the protocol Ted had made the panel adopt in writing, and moved on with his heart going like a drum in his head, above it, cold and level and keeping books. The thumb wanted the field cleared. The thumb was clearing it of witnesses. He and Cedric came out into the final avenue together from opposite corners, both running, and saw the cup on its plinth blazing blue-white 100 feet ahead and stopped by unspoken agreement in the last cover because Cedric Diggory had spent a year extending credit and reading the same wrongness everyone with sense had felt in that maze. Together, Cedric said, Hogwarts win either way. Split the glory, split the Cedric. Harry's right hand had gone to fire. The sentinel ring, silent all year through every practice portkey and every flue, was burning against his finger like a coin left in the sun, and the world did the thing it had done at Halloween, went far away and came back wrong, and he heard his own voice arrive very calm, the summer's calm, the readiness that comes after you have already had every feeling in advance. The cup's a portkey, unregistered, it's the taking. Always going to be the cup. He looked at the plinth, at the beautiful blazing thing, everything Arcturus had armored them against, wearing a party hat, and made the call the council had wargamed and hoped never to need, except the meeting, set the agenda. I have to take it. If it's not me, it stays armed for whoever's next, and I'm the one wearing the equipment. You're the witness. Green sparks, then find Dumbledore, not Moody. Cedric, hear me, not Moody. Tell him the ring burned. He'll know. You're going alone to the other end of a trap, Cedric said, on purpose. I'm the only one here it can't take alone. Harry pressed the black button on his cloak once, taken alive, activate everything, and felt a heartbeat later, faithful at any distance, tested to Aberdeen, the answering warmth begin against his chest, constant as a pulse. We know, we're moving, hold. He was already not alone. That was the whole architecture of the year sewn onto a cloak. Sparks, Dumbledore. The ring burned, go. And Harry Potter walked out of cover, alone in his house cloak with its one warm button, and took the triwizard cup like a man keeping an appointment. The graveyard assembled itself around him out of hook and dark, yew and leaning stone, a church spire against a gray-lidded sky, a cauldron the size of a font already fuming in the trampled grass, and the sensation, instant, total, of the button warm against his chest, of arriving exactly where the year had always been pointed. What followed he experienced in the strange double exposure the summer had trained into him, terror below, running its ancient programs, and above it the cold clerk of the house, keeping the record, because the record was a weapon, and he was the only one present who could take the minutes. Wormtail, silver hand still unearned, wand out, faster and more competent than the rat had any right to be. The disarming expected, the search expected, and the replica wand confiscated from the dragonhide holster with a sneer of triumph, logged by the clerk with satisfaction, exactly as purchased from Liverpool with documentation. Being bound to the yew-shadowed headstone, Tom Riddle, the enemy's own father conscripted as furniture, expected, all of it expected, the whole rite proceeding on the schedule Dumbledore's disclosure had predicted, and the terror stayed below decks because expectation, it turned out, was the whole difference. You could not ambush a boy with his own briefing. Bone of the father, unknowingly given. Flesh of the servant, willingly sacrificed. Wormtail's scream went across the graveyard and Harry looked away from that, the clerk excusing itself from one entry. And then Wormtail came to him with the knife to the bound heir of the House of Black and spoke the line the council had read in advance in 9-page goblin exegesis, blood of the enemy, forcibly taken. For the record, Harry said, conversational, to the man with the knife, because the words had been drafted at a kitchen table and every syllable was load-bearing, witnessed instruments like to be heard. Gornuk had taught them that on the first night, I am Altair Regulus Black, son of Regulus Arcturus Black, whom your master's locket murdered in the performance of its unmaking. His death is entered, his paper is held, you are about to serve my blood to the debtor. He looked past Wormtail at the fuming cauldron, at the small, hideous burden waiting beside it in its wrappings, and raised his voice slightly, an air addressing a counterparty. The House of Black observes that the debtor is entering the jurisdiction voluntarily. Proceed. Wormtail, who understood none of it and was frightened by all of it, cut his arm and took the blood and served it. The thing that rose from the cauldron, white and wet and lipless in the fuming dark, was the most feared wizard of the age, and Harry, bound to the headstone of the man it had unmade itself escaping, watched it happen with the button warm against his chest and the clerk in his head writing one sentence over and over, the sentence Hermione had laughed her appalled laugh at in a war room that smelled of tea. He doesn't know the house keeps books. Lord Voldemort came up out of his second berth exulting, and the exulting lasted 11 seconds. He touched Harry's face. That was the demonstration the rite had promised him, the whole point of blood of the enemy, to lay his new hand against the old protection and feel nothing. And his hand came down, one long white finger against the scar, and the graveyard's cold air went taut, and what happened was not nothing, it was audit. Harry felt it from the inside, the way he'd felt the hearthstone, something vast and patient and utterly unimpressed arriving through his blood into the point of contact. 7 centuries of accounts receivable waking up in the presence of a debtor who had just voluntarily, by his own right, in his own voice, taken the creditor's blood into his body and thereby carried the ledger inside his own walls. The white finger spasmed. Voldemort did not scream, he was too old in pain's uses to scream, but he came off the touch like a man off a live rail, and across his new-made face went an expression his followers had died never seeing, incomprehension. Somewhere under Harry's collarbone, the fragment behind the scar, 13 years a squatter, keen, thin and high like a struck wire, resonating between the debt and the debtor, suddenly legible, suddenly itemized, a parasite discovering it had been, all along, collateral. What, said Lord Voldemort softly to the graveyard, to the blood moving in his own new veins, is in you? Terms, Harry said, and conditions. The duel when it came, after the summoning, after the circle of masked apparitions cracking into place among the stones, after a rally of Cruciatus he took the edge of and would feel in his teeth for a week, was priori incantatem, though Harry did not know the word until afterward. The replica from Liverpool had been handed back to him with mocking courtesy, dueling etiquette performed as theatre for the circle, and Harry had said one word in gobbledygook, and the dragonhide holster had performed the only magic of its refitted life. And the wand that rose to meet Voldemort's was the true one, Holly, Phoenix Feather, Brother Core, and the 2 spells met in the dark over the graves and locked, and the world filled with golden light and the sound, Harry would swear it forever, of a phoenix singing somewhere over Scotland, and down the thread of joined light came the echoes. The clerk in his head stopped writing. Cedric had not died tonight, that grief had been cancelled in a maze by a burning ring, so the first shape out of the wand was an old man Harry didn't know, a muggle in a dressing gown, grumbling about wands and nerve, and then a witch, and the golden cage of light went quiet around them, then Lily, then James. And then last, pulling free of the wand light like a swimmer out of surf, narrow-faced, careful-eyed, 20 years old forever, in the muggle clothes he'd worn on a bench in Godric's Hollow in the spring of 1981, Regulus Arcturus Black, who looked at the creature clutching the brother wand with the cold cataloguing contempt of the house at its worst put finally to its best use, and then turned and looked at his son. Time, inside the cage, ran on courtesy rather than physics. The shades of his parents spoke, hold on, hold the connection, will linger when it breaks, run, and Harry held, arms shaking, while the beads of light fought up and down the thread, and Regulus's shade came close, close enough that the golden light was all there was. And what the dead man said his son never repeated entire, not even to Hermione, not for years, keeping it the way you keep the sealed page of a letter, but 3 fragments of it surfaced over a lifetime, at weddings, at namings. At one particular tapestry, and they were, you read it out loud to him, the whole clause. Oh, you are her son and mine, and creature, and my son's chosen and the maker's. I heard it. We hear more than you'd think. The house talks in its sleep, and last, as the thread began to shriek in the cage to fail, with a glance across the graveyard that took in the cauldron, the circle, the whole ruinous rite, and priced it like an account manager. He paid in your blood, Altair. The papers served. Now go home and let the family magic do its work. It was never the wands that were going to finish this. It was the bookkeeping. The cage broke. Harry ran, shades at his back like a rearguard of his whole biography, and the circle's curses hit stone and you and each other, and the white face screamed orders through the dark, and none of it mattered by half a second, because Harry Potter went to one knee behind the riddle headstone, put his bleeding arm to the cut, blood to blood, the bond of the house, and called in no language at all down the oldest line in his life, "Creature, take us home." The graveyard folded. The last thing its occupants saw of the House of Black was an elderly elf in a tea towel of house colors standing on a Death Eater's tomb in the sudden silence, collecting with visible disdain the dropped replica wand evidence masters from Liverpool with documentation, and vanishing with a crack that took boy, blood, cup, and case entire, and left Lord Voldemort newborn and screaming among his kneeling servants, owning, of that whole engineered evening, nothing. He came back to the world flat on the kitchen table at Grimmauld Place, with the household around him like a surgical team, which it briefly was. Andromeda's wand moving down his arm, sealing the cut, Ted's voice dictating times and injuries to Dictaquil for the record. Before the adrenaline eats the timeline, Sirius gripping his ankle of all things, the nearest part of him not under repair, gripping it like a tiller and creature on the table itself, standing guard over the cup in the replica wand with the ferocity of a museum, and the button, her button, still warm against his chest, pulsing its one bit. We know, we're moving, hold. Until the Floo roared green and its maker came through it at a dead run, still in her school robes, Dumbledore and McGonagall a step behind, and the one bit became, without transition, 2 arms and a face buried against his neck, and the whole channel unlimited bandwidth, no distance, and he got his shaking hand up into her hair and held on, and for a while the record could keep itself. The record, being the house's record, did not have to keep itself long. Within the hour at that same table the account was taken. Veritasrum witnessed statements, pensive extraction of the entire graveyard, goblin assessors flew in at midnight to certify the memory untampered, the cup examined and its portkey signature matched to a maker, and the sentence Amelia Bones said when she arrived at 1 in the morning with 2 oars and saw the evidentiary stack already built, docketed, and certified, which entered family legend beside Creature's dinner for 9. In 19 years of law enforcement, I have never once arrived at the scene of a crime to find the paperwork finished. I could weep, walk me through it. They walked her through it. By sunrise, the prophet's plates had been broken and recast twice, and the edition that finally ran carried the headline the wizarding world had spent 13 years assuring itself it would never read. He is returned, over Bones's signed statement and the goblin certification seals, and the remarkable thing, the thing historians would mark, was what the edition did not carry: doubt. There was no whispering year, no smear campaign, no undesirable, no boy standing alone in a corridor of averted eyes insisting on what he had seen. There was a docket. Amos Diggory gave the prophet its human line, and gave it holding his son by the back of the neck on his own doorstep. The black boy told mine, if it goes strange, run the other way and shout. My son is alive because somebody taught that boy to plan for other people's children. Hermione cut that one out too. It went in receivable, though she noted, initialing the entry, that the debt ran, in all honesty, the other way. And at Hogwarts that same hour, the other jaw of the trap closed exactly as drafted, because Cedric Diggory had run from the maze with green sparks still falling and done precisely what he'd been told. Not Moody, Dumbledore, the ring burned. The impostor, deprived of his master's triumphant boy corpse, deprived of the graveside report he'd been promised by the evening's schedule, had gone to improvise at the edge of the crowd and found the crowd's edge already held. McGonagall on his left making conversation, Flitwick on his right admiring the night, and Albus Dumbledore in front of him, one already drawn but held down at his side like a closed book, saying pleasantly, terribly, "Alastair, walk with me. Or don't, and we'll learn together how much polyjuice is left in that flask." The flask, on its chain, held 40 minutes. The interrogation in the headmaster's office, with the real Alastair Moody hauled blinking out of his own 7-lock trunk, held everything else. Barty Crouch Jr., melting back into his own dead face in front of witnesses, proud of it, singing it, the goblet, the maze, the graveyard, the master risen, delivered under Veritasrum before Bones's own deputy, transcribed, signed, sealed. Fudge arrived at Hogwarts at dawn with a Dementor for an escort and the expression of a man coming to close an unpleasant account, and was met on the front steps by a wall of parchment. The deposition, the pensive certifications, the goblin seals, the House of Black's formal petition, filed by Ted at 4 a.m., enjoining any interference with the material witness crouch, and standing behind the parchment, arms folded, the boy who lived twice, the headmaster, the head of the DMLE, and Lord Black in the good coat. The Dementor was sent back to the gates. The minister read the deposition twice, went the color of the parchment, and said the thing ministers say, that this would need very careful handling, and Amelia Bones said the thing that ended the first day of the Second War before the prophet had even inked its morning plates. It's had careful handling, Cornelius. It's docketed. Full Wisengamot emergency session, Thursday. The House of Black has petitioned, the witness is singing, and the evidence walked itself in the front door overnight. The only question left deciding is whether the minister's office appears in this story as the government that acted on it. She smiled her monocled smile, or as a footnote that needed subpoenaing. The docket doesn't care, Thursday either way. The hospital wing kept him one night on Madame Pomfrey's non-negotiable insistence for the cruciatus after tremor and a blood replenisher, and she said, glaring at the assembled house until it arranged itself into visiting hours compliance, quiet. She got compliance, she did not strictly get quiet. Sirius and Marius held the corner chairs into the small hours, talking low about Regulus, the shade, the bench at Godric's Hollow, and somewhere in that murmured conversation the last knot of 13 years came out of Sirius, not loudly, just a long exhale into his hands while an old squib patted his shoulder and said stoutly that in his day, too, the best of the family had always been the ones the family never deserved. Creature sat cross-legged on the foot of the bed itself, and outraged Pomfrey pretended not to see, polishing over and over with a soft cloth, a cup that was evidence and two halves of a locket that were not, humming something tuneless that Harry finally identified on the edge of sleep as a lullaby and did not ask whose. Dumbledore came at midnight, stood a while at the window, and left on the bedside table without commentary a chocolate frog card of himself on which he had crossed out the entire achievements paragraph and written, in violet ink, consulted, latterly, to better architects, and Harry laughed until the tremor made him stop, and kept the card. The Weasleys came at breakfast, the whole red-headed regiment of them, Molly first through the door with enough food for a siege and the fixed intent of mothering anything in reach, which turned out to include Sirius, Creature, and a startled Madame Pomfrey. Ron pulled a chair up backward, sat with his arms across the top of it, and studied his best friend for a long moment, the tremor, the bandaged arm, the chocolate frog card propped against the water jug, and delivered the verdict of the only court whose opinion Harry had never once had to earn. You went to a graveyard, insulted you-know-whose paperwork to his face, nicked back your own wand with a magic holster, and got extracted by Creature. Mate. Charlie works with dragons, and you have officially had the best worst year of anyone I know. A pause, the ears going pink, the voice dropping to what mattered. Buttons and standing orders and Lake Ritz, you lot planned for all of it, for getting taken. Next time, and don't argue, there's a war on now, so there's a next time. I want a button too. You've got one, Hermione said from the left side without opening her eyes. I made 4, spares or doctrine, yours is on your chess set, check the Black Queen. Ron went home that summer and checked, the Black Queen was warm, and Hermione stayed. There had been a look between her and Pomfrey, one round of a negotiation conducted entirely in eyebrows, comprehensively lost by the matron, and the chair had been moved to the bed's left side, blood replenisher side, and she had taken his hand at some point in the certification hours and located no compelling clause requiring its return. She was still there when the gray came up in the windows, asleep at last with her cheek on the blanket and her fingers laced in his, the button inside her collar gone quiet at last because its whole message had come home. And Harry lay in the growing light with his family posted around him like wards, aching in his teeth and his scar and entirely, unprecedentedly unafraid, doing at leisure in the ledger behind his eyes the arithmetic of the night. Voldemort was returned, entered on the debit side, war coming certain. But itemized against it in the house's patient hand, risen weakened, 2 anchors down and the count known, risen observed, his rebirth in a certified pensive and his servant singing to the Wisengamot by Thursday. Risen exposed, no quiet year of shadows this time, no ministry sleep. And risen indebted, the creditor's blood in his veins like a served writ, his own right hand unable to touch his chosen enemy without the ledger convulsing, the family magic of the house he'd bled patient in his bloodstream, keeping books compounding. He paid in your blood, the papers served, now go home and let the family magic do its work. He was home. That was the other item, the one that outweighed the column. He had been taken from a fortress to the far end of a trap, alone, and alone had lasted the 11 seconds it took to press a button, because the house had rebuilt the meaning of the word. They had planned for his taking, and he had been taken, and the plan had held every stitch of it, the ring, the holster, the standing order, the button, the sentence said out loud over a knife. All of it drafted at a kitchen table by the found and mended family of 2 children whom the world had once filed under a loan. And it had worked not because any single piece was mighty, but because every piece had been true, tested, and witnessed, which was, he understood now at 14, in the gray light. With her hand in his, the whole of the house's actual magic and the reason it had needed both of them, the old blood to hold the ledger, and the new blood to check the arithmetic. Chapter 6 and Chapter 7. The house that chose the emergency session of the full Wisengamot convened on Thursday at 10, and by 4 minutes past, the chamber had heard, from the mouth of a dead man, the end of the world it had been pretending to live in. Barty Crouch Jr. testified for 2 hours under veritaserum, from a warded dock, with his father sitting in the third tier looking like a monument to himself left out in acid rain. The testimony had everything the Prophet's special edition would need. Azkaban, the switch, a mother's dying mercy, the years under Imperius in his father's cellar, the World Cup, the flask, the goblet, the maze, and the graveyard, his master risen, gentlemen risen and returned, and you are all corpses on a schedule, delivered with the serene good manners of the truly finished. It also had unedited, because veritaserum did not do editing, the parts nobody had scripted, that the master had risen weakened, that something had gone from him that he had counted on, that the touching of the boy had hurt him astonishingly, and that the inner circle's first meeting had therefore been held by a thing newly afraid, in a voice that dared anyone present to name the fear, and that Barty Jr., faithful unto and beyond death, had smiled into his interrogation ever since, because even his devotion had run the arithmetic and found it altered. When the dock was cleared, Cornelius Fudge rose to manage the narrative, and discovered the narrative had left without him. His opening line, "These claims, however alarming," was interrupted from the floor. "Claims, Cornelius. Certified pensive evidence and a veritaserum transcript are claims now." And the interruption came not from Dumbledore's benches, but from the alliance whose existence the chamber was watching being born in real time. Bones's Law and Order block, Augusta Longbottom's old family conservatives, the Greengrass neutrals whose price had been quietly paid in trade concessions negotiated by a goblin, and the seat, occupied today under a writ of proxy that had made the clerk's hands shake when he certified it, of the noble and most ancient house of Black. Fudge lasted 40 minutes. The vote of no confidence was tabled by lunch, scheduled for the following week, and everyone in the chamber could count. And then in the emptied hour when the session broke and the corridors boiled, Albus Dumbledore made his last move as an architect, and it was, everyone agreed afterward, even Ted, even Andromeda, a beautiful one, because it was made of purely good intentions, which had always been the man's favorite material. He moved before the reconvened afternoon session, in the name of war powers as old as Grindelwald's fall, that in a state of open conflict, prophesied combatants being minors shall be placed under the protective instruments of the chief warlock, their residence, movements, and engagements directed by the same, for the duration and their own preservation. It was in the cold reading Hermione performed on the certified copy that evening, 13 years of the same choice, recompiled under wartime law. The cupboard again at scale with better intentions and a nicer name, and this time it came for both of them because the instrument's schedule named as prophesied combatant and essential associate respectively, Harry James Potter, also styled Altair Regulus Black, and Hermione Jean Granger, heir match of record. "He can't help it," she said, laying the copy flat on the kitchen table, and her voice held no anger at all, which was somehow the most serious register she owned. "Do you see, even now, even after the terms, even after the tea he drank at this table, there's a war he's afraid for us, and fear runs down the oldest channel in the man, custody. He never once in 113 years learned the difference between keeping people and keeping people safe." She looked up around the full council, and her finger rested on the one line of the instrument its drafter had, of course, included, because his fairness was as compulsive as his control, the schedule of exceptions. But he taught us the counter himself in his own office. He said our architecture was better, so we don't fight the instrument, we moot it. Protective custody attaches to unattached minors. We stop being unattached in law in public in front of the whole chamber, in a form so old and so absolute that his instrument slides off it like rain. We invoke the Regency provision. Harry claims the house. The provision was Arcturus's, of course. It sat in the succession articles like a key left under a mat by a man who had seen governments panic before. Where the house's head is dead, disqualified, or consenting, an heir of the blood who has passed the rite of the written blood may claim the headship before his majority, under a regency council of the family magic's own recognition, and from the hour of that claim he is at law, not a minor ward but a sitting lord under regency, and no instrument of custody, wardship, or protection may attach to him or to any signatory of his house's standing contracts, save by the house's own council's assent. "Consenting," Sirius said when the article had been read out. He was quiet a moment, and the kitchen watched him. The man who had waited 13 years for the name of Black to be worth wearing being asked, 1 year in, to hand its crown to a 15-year-old. Then he laughed low and unburdened, and Harry understood, watching him, that he had never once wanted the throne, only the family, and that this, too, was the house's oldest lesson, taught by every soul who'd ever sat at this table and none of the portraits. Consenting, kid, I've been consenting since a stone office under London. I'll keep Lord for the war councils and the death threats, mine's the face that scares them anyway. But the house was always yours. Regulus countersigned it when you were 8 days old. All I'm doing is agreeing with my brother in public, which, his voice went rough for exactly one word, which would have been a novelty once. Call the bank, call the whole chamber. Let's do it where Britain can see. The claiming of the House of Black was performed on the following Monday, at the reconvened session's opening, before the full Wisengamot, 300 witnesses and 1 goblin of standing, because the family magic required no audience at all, and the family's new doctrine required the largest one in Britain. Gornock carried the ring in on a cushion of grey linen, and it was not the heir's ring Harry had worn all year, but the other one, the old one, out of a vault whose door had a name instead of a number. The Lord's ring of the House of Black, black stone and old silver, the raven and wands cut so deep by so many centuries of wear that the crest had become a kind of geology. The chamber had been noisy. It stopped being noisy, Wizarding Britain discovering row by craning row that it had never actually seen this done, that the last public claiming of any most ancient house predated everyone present except the man it was about to disinherit from custody of 2 children. Harry walked down alone. That too was doctrine argued in council and won over 4 adults' instincts by the 2 people it concerned. The whole point, Hermione had said, is that nobody carries him to it. He came to the floor in the house's formal black, 14 years old and 15 within the month, scar and clasps and steady hands, and Sirius met him there and spoke the consent in the old form, unscripted addendum included. He is my brother's son, and my son in every way the law allows, and this house has never in 700 years done anything so obviously correct, and the chamber, which had come to watch politics, went gradually and completely silent as it understood it was watching an older jurisdiction entirely, because the ring was not a ring in the moment it mattered. Harry took it from the linen cushion, and the family magic rose to meet him, and everyone in that chamber felt it arrive, whatever their blood. The pressure change of 7 centuries turning over, the gaslights of the chamber leaning like the flames of a house in London, a sound below sound, hearth-deep tidal, the sound of an ancient ledger opening to a new page. What Harry felt standing at the center of it he would describe afterward only to Hermione, because only she had a hearthstone's worth of context. It read me. All of it, all 4 names, both mothers, both fathers, the cupboard, the vault, the graveyard, the button, the whole file. And then it did the thing the rite of the written blood had done on the first night, in the stone office where all of this began. It paused, the pause of a writer deciding how to say a difficult thing, and decided, and the black stone kindled from within, 1 spark of silver in its depth like a star surfacing in deep water, and the ring closed itself gently around the finger of Altair Regulus Black, called Harry, son of 4 parents, lord of the noble and most ancient house of Black under Regency, and the wards of a chamber that had stood since the founding of the ministry inclined themselves, measurably. Recorded by the clerk's instruments, toward the boy at its center, the state's own stones acknowledging a jurisdiction that predated the state. Into the ringing silence that followed, the chief witch, to her lasting credit, found the correct procedural response, which was to have the claim entered in the record. And into the settling of quills, before the session's business could resume and swallow the moment, Hermione Granger rose from the family box and asked leave to lay 1 instrument before the chamber. They had drafted it together over 3 evenings at the kitchen table, with the whole council arguing punctuation, and Creature, who had demanded and received a seat at the drafting because he had carried the house's smallest and heaviest secrets longer than anyone breathing, contributing the single clause everyone afterward quoted. It was styled the First Amendment to the Concord of the Severed Branch, and she read it into the record herself, standing 15 in periwinkle-adjacent courtroom blue, her voice in the exam hall register that got steadier as things got bigger, while the certified master copy unrolled its turning seals on the clerk's table, and 300 adults listened to 2 children refound a house. That the parties, being the heir, now lord of the House of Black, and the first witch of the returned line of Marius, do jointly affirm the Concord's standing and jointly amend it as follows. First, that the choice reserved to the parties at 17 is hereby made subject to no condition, penalty, expectation, or consequence whatsoever in gold, standing, protection, or the weaving of the tapestry, all of which are confirmed to both lines in perpetuity regardless of the party's choice, so that when the choice comes, it shall weigh nothing and mean everything. Second, that the protections of the shield clause are extended at the house's charge to the whole of both parties' families, blood and chosen, wizard, squib, and muggle, and to such persons as the parties shall name as household, the schedule of names to be kept, the amendment said in Creature's clause, by the house's eldest servant, who has kept everything else. Third, that the House of Black declares as standing policy and before this chamber as witness, that it acquires its members henceforth exclusively by consent, No betrothal shall be contracted, no heir named, no name woven or burned, but by the free and informed agreement of the person concerned. This policy to bind the house is magic itself, which has heard it, the drafters having read it aloud twice in the drawing-room to the wall. The house that filled this chamber's oldest benches by blood, Hermione finished, looking up from the parchment into 300 faces, some moved, some calculating, one high in the visitors' gallery unreadable behind half-moon spectacles, will fill them now by choice. We are advised this has never been done. We are advised, in fact, that it is impossible, that family magic doesn't take instruction, that the old houses are what they are. The House of Black begs to differ and enters in evidence itself. The instrument is executed, sealed, and lodged with the goblin nation. The severed branch consents to the tree, and here she set down the parchment and delivered the last line straight to the gallery, to the architect in the tone of a clerk closing a very old file, consents to be climbed. The Wisengamot, which had no procedure for what it was feeling, invented one on the spot. It stood. Not all of it. The Malfoy benches sat pale and still, doing sums, but row upon row, Bones's block and the Longbottom wing and the neutrals in the gallery. Wizarding Britain rising to its feet in a noise like weather for two children who had taken the oldest dark name in the islands and turned it, in one public year, into the safest word they knew. And in the middle tier Augusta Longbottom could be seen telling everyone in reach that she had been to dinner there, actually twice. And afterward in the corridor in the crush, Albus Dumbledore was waiting, and the War Powers instrument was in his hand, and he did not speak to them. He simply tore it once lengthwise in front of the whole moving crowd, and inclined his head to the two of them, the smallest bow Harry had ever seen contain an entire surrendered century, and walked away up the corridor toward the rest of the war, a counselor. The prophet needed 3 days and 4 editions to metabolize the Monday session, and never fully managed it. Lord Black, 15, shared the front page with the consent amendment, old magic, new rules, and a photograph, taken at the exact right half-second by a photographer who was never poor again, of the black stone kindling on a 15-year-old's hand while the chamber's gaslights laned. The editorials ran the full spectrum. The traditionalist sheets denounced the amendment as the end of the old houses, the reformist sheets denounced the lordship as the return of them, and both, Hermione noted, pinning the two columns side by side on the war room board under a card reading working as intended, were now arguing about the House of Black on the House of Black's chosen ground, which was consent instead of on the enemy's, which was blood. At school that September, the recalibration finished what Halloween had started. It was Owl Year, there was a war on, and the strangest feature of Harry's 5th autumn at Hogwarts was how aggressively ordinary it insisted on being. He was a lord under Regency with a standing Wisengamot proxy and a price on his head, and he was also a boy who had charms homework, lost points for talking in history of magic, and got comprehensively beaten at chess every Thursday by Ron, who had taken the Black Queen off her button duty for match nights on the grounds that espionage interfered with her openings. The new defense professor was the real Alastor Moody, teaching 1 year by way of convalescence and apology, and his first lesson opened with the flask on the desk and the sentence, "Constant vigilance," which, as this school spent 9 months proving, includes vigilance about me. And his third lesson dismissed everyone 10 minutes early except Potter and Granger, to whom he said, gruff, without preamble, that he'd reviewed the year's file. That the arm and flask observation was aura work of the first water, and that when the elf was willing, Alastor Moody would like to shake his hand. Creature, informed, was insufferable for a month, exactly as contracted. Neville's grandmother got her invitation, and came to dinner in a hat that had opinions, and left 3 hours later, having adopted the coalition whip's role she would hold for the rest of the war, with Marius's personal rose cuttings and the statement, delivered to the hall at large, that she had not enjoyed an evening so much since her wedding, at which, she reminded everyone, a Black had hexed her brother-in-law, and quite right too. Voldemort's answer came at the dark of the moon, 10 days later, and it was exactly as intelligent as they had feared and aimed exactly where they had known it would aim, not at the fortress, at the foundations, at the softest name on the tapestry. The wards at Rye went off at 6 minutes past 2 in the morning. They were goblin-laid and house-fed, the first commission of Harry's lordship, paid for in June over Marius's dry protest that nobody in 60 years had bothered to curse a rose garden, and they did their work with the pitiless competence of forge craft. The killing squad that came over the marsh, 4 of the inner circle with Bellatrix Lestrange's own lieutenant leading, met, instead of a sleeping squib, a fortified position that had been expecting them personally. The lead pair hit the outer line at the marsh gate and were held there, forge wards reading intent and answering it in kind, silver light going up off the wall like water off a struck anvil. The second pair, clever, tried the Muggle street front on the theory that house wards went soft where the statute made them subtle, and discovered that goblins did not share wizards' assumptions about which laws outranked which. The door knocker itself took a wand hand to the wrist. The house lights never came on. The householder, per the Auror's incident report, had by then already moved himself to the designated interior point, exactly per drill, with his slippers, his late wife's photograph, and the report noted the good secateurs in case he informed the arriving strike pair it came to close work in the roses. The garden held them at the wall. The alarm thread pulled in Grimmauld Place, the standing wing at the ministry, and 2 Aurors billeted in the town under Bones's new dispersal doctrine. Creature arrived by way of no route whatsoever, with Tonks's strike pair a heartbeat behind, and the report Amelia Bones read to the emergency committee at dawn recorded a repelled assault, 2 Death Eaters taken alive and wrapped for questioning, and 1 casualty on the defending side. A bed of Nuits de June roses incinerated by a deflected curse, for which the report noted, with the first levity the DMLE had permitted itself since June, the householder has demanded compensation in writing from the ministry, the House of Black, and care of her solicitor, N. Malfoy, who supplied the original cuttings. Harry and Hermione reached Rye with the escort party at 3 in the morning, and found the old man in his kitchen in his dressing gown, making tea for the Aurors, a hand steadier than any of theirs, directing the securing of his premises with the crisp property-managing authority of a retired solicitor who had been through the Blitz as a boy, and had views about being evacuated, which he expressed, when Sirius raised it, in one sentence that entered the family lexicon beside Creature's dinner for 9. Young man, I was thrown out of one house by dark wizards in 1936, and I have decided, on reflection, not to make a habit of it. He came to Grimmauld Place anyway, for the summer, on terms, the terms being that it was to be called a visit, that somebody would water what remained of the garden, and that the house would rebuild the roses, which it did, by goblin contract, fireproof, which Marius declared vulgar and loved beyond all reason. And the war, having introduced itself, settled into its long first shape. A ministry that believed, a Wisengamot with a working majority and a coalition whip who was technically a 15-year-old's grey tant by courtesy, Hunt's quiet ones goblin-assessed for a cup and a diadem and a ring, with Regulus's methods as doctrine and do not touch it alone framed over the war-room door. And across the board from all of it, a diminished, furious, indebted thing in a manor in Wiltshire, learning by increments the shape of what the graveyard had cost him, unable to touch his chosen enemy, unable to trust his own blood, served every time his scar-linked rage reached out in the night and found a mind guarded by a warm button in a household of wards with the same patient notice. The account is open, the account is watched, the account compounds. Narcissa Malfoy came in through the front door on the first Sunday of August at 4 o'clock, unveiled in wizarding dress by outpost arrangement, and the significance of every one of those facts was lost on nobody in the house, least of all the house. Lucius was in a ministry holding cell by then, taken in the second wave of arrests after Crouch's testimony, and the graveyard pensive had made the mark itself probable cause. The manor was under sequestration review, and the Thursday dinners were finished forever. She arrived with no luggage and 1 son, and stood in the hall of her childhood's second home, under the spot where the elf heads had been, looking at the fresh plaster in the light, and what she said, before anyone could manage a greeting, was addressed to the walls themselves in the tone of a woman settling an old bet. You painted. Aunt Walburga said this hallway would outlast the family. I am pleased to report to her frame that it did not. Draco stood 2 steps behind his mother with the posture of a boy executing the most dangerous etiquette of his life. The summer had stripped something out of him, the sneer scaffolding, the certainty of a house that had turned out to be mortgaged to a monster, and what was left was watchful and 16 and visibly uncertain whether the door he had been promised would actually open, whatever, as his mother's letter had put it, he has said, whatever he has been made into by then. It opened the way doors opened at number 12 now, which is to say, Creature took his cloak and pronounced his bloodline's tea preferences from 40 years' memory. Sirius shook his hand with a wolf's grin in the sentence, welcome to the disappointing side of the family, cousin, we have better food. And Harry, who had been 15 months on the other end of Draco's careful quarter nods, said nothing ceremonial at all, just, you're in the blue room, second landing. Fair warning, the tapestry will want to look at you. The tapestry did. It had burned Narcissa off its weave the day the amendment was read into it, some autonomous bookkeeping of the house's own that Andromeda declined to explain to anyone, and rewoven her within the hour on the restored side beside her sisters, and it held Draco's thread now at the margin, unwoven, patient, in accordance with standing policy, read aloud twice, by the free and informed agreement of the person concerned. He stood in front of it a long time that evening. He signed nothing for a year. Nobody asked. That was the point. It had cost a chamber full of witnesses to make it the point, and the house kept its own law first, or the law was upholstery. At tea, Narcissa laid a folded parchment beside her cup. Names, safe houses, the manor's flu registry, the location of a cup she had once been asked to hold and had, on the instinct of a woman who read everything in her house, declined. Payment on account, she said, for the door. The door was already yours, Harry said. Write it down as a gift, or the ledger gets sentimental. Merlin forbid, said Narcissa Black Malfoy, and almost smiled, and took her tea the way her sister took it, no sugar, all archive, and stayed until dark, and came back every Sunday at 4 for the rest of her life. But that is the war's story, and the war, in the end, is not this one. This story has 2 more scenes, and then it keeps its own counsel. Dumbledore came to Grimmauld Place once more that August, on the last Friday, by appointment, carrying a parcel wrapped in brown paper. It was the cloak. James's cloak, silver-gray water folded into a square, held since a November 13 years gone. It was in my keeping, he said at the kitchen table over the tea that had become, somehow, the 2 of them's fixed instrument, because he lent it to me the week before Godric's Hollow, and because afterward I told myself a great many things about why I should hold it a while longer. I have stopped telling myself things this year. It is your father's, one of your father's. You have a spare, I am given to understand, in the holster line, so consider this the heirloom copy. He slid it across and watched the boy's hands take it, and then he said the thing he had come to say, plainly, the way the year had taught him, with no music in it at all. I have been asked by portraits and colleagues and my own brother why I fought so long to keep you from all this. A gesture economical, taking in the kitchen, the wards, the whole war machine of the house. I have given them the answers you heard in my office. The prophecy, the fragment, the throne. They were true, and they were not the answer. The answer, Harry, is that I looked at an orphan boy of enormous gifts, marked by destiny, heir to a great and terrible house that would tell him he was chosen, and I feared, more than I have feared anything in 50 years, that the house would make him me. The blue eyes were steady and very old and entirely without twinkle, which was, Harry had learned, the man's version of standing unarmed. I was the boy the old powers gathered around once. I know what it makes of you to be young and brilliant, and told you are the future by institutions that need you. It made me an architect. Architects, as your Mr. Tonks has observed for the record, pay themselves in necessary and never audit. So I kept you from your throne to save you from my biography, and in doing so I ran my biography again on you from the top. The cupboard was my greater good. I have no better confession than that, and no request except the one I make of Fawkes. When I circle back to the old habit, and I will, it is 113 years old, and it knows my name, sing, loudly. You and Miss Granger have the only architecture I have ever seen that is proofed against people like me. It has a hearth in it and an auditor. 2 auditors, Harry said. The elf counts spoons. 2 auditors, Dumbledore agreed gravely, and finished his tea, and at the door, already half into the evening, he paused and looked back down the hall at the light at the plaster where the heads had been, and said in valediction, the only sentence of the whole visit that sounded like the old music, because this once the music was earned. Your father wrote that the house should be made what it always pretended to be. Tell his thread from a man who has read a great many houses. It is the only one I know of that ever managed it. The first is small. It is the last night of that August, the summer of the lordship, and the kitchen has emptied late, and Harry sits alone at the long table with the last unread thing his father will ever say to him, the sealed page marked in the corner, later, when you have found her. He had carried it for 14 months. He had thought at first that the seal was for a wedding, some pureblood flourish, and had been shy of it, and then he had thought it was for the war's end, and then gradually, watching her across a year of tables, war rooms, courtrooms, hospital wings, he had understood that found her did not mean any ceremony. It meant what it said. You have found her when you have found her, when the one bit is warm at any distance. He was 15. He had been found and finding for a year. It was time. The seal knew his hand, the way everything of Regulus's did. One page, the narrow upright script, dated the 4th of March, 1981, the night a 20-year-old paid a century of storage in advance. If you are reading this, then the improbable engine my grandfather built has actually run, and there is a girl of Marius's line, and she is standing somewhere in your life, and you have known her long enough to open sealed letters in her direction. So this page is not for you. Fold it again. Give it to her. It was always for her. From the hour the quill of record pressed her name, I simply could not address it properly, not knowing what she would be called. My whole family never learned to speak to people before defining them. Let me be the first of us to leave the name blank and the welcome signed. He folded it again. He carried it upstairs. She was in the drawing room, in the armchair the tapestry light liked reading, the house quiet around her in the way the house was only quiet around her, attentively the way it was quiet around Creature. And he gave it to her and sat on the arm of the chair and did not read over her shoulder and watched her face instead, the way he'd watched it take the vellum and the ledger and the amendment, hypothesis, resistance, revision, landing, and watched it, at the last paragraph, simply incomprehensibly land. To the witch of the return line, from the heir who bound his blood to yours before either of us knew your name. I have one thing to tell you, and I have paid a bank to keep it 100 years because it is the only thing I know that is worth the fee. My family will have reached you wearing its best face, contracts, protections, gold, a tapestry hungry to weave you. Take all of it, it is owed, but none of it is the inheritance. I learned the inheritance in the last year of my life, too late to spend it, and I am writing it down so that it, at least, does not die on an island. The house is not the name, the blood, the wall, or the magic. The house is whoever would drink the poison so you didn't have to. That is the whole grammar of it. Everything else is upholstery. I had that and never knew it. An elf in the end was my whole house, and I drank in the dark thinking I died alone, and I did not. Neither will my son if you are reading this. Neither will you. So, welcome whoever you are. If he is anything of his foreparents, he read you the way out before the way in. Choose whatever you choose at 17. The paper weighs nothing. We cut the strings twice to be sure. But if when the hour comes you find you are choosing what I hope, then I ask one kindness, the only inheritance tax this house will ever charge you. Some evening at the wall, tell my thread what you chose and why out loud. The house talks in its sleep. I have reason to believe it also listens. R.E.B. Hermione Granger read the letter of Regulus Black twice, the second time with her hand flat over the crest at its head, the way you hold something warm, and then she stood and crossed to the tapestry, to the silver thread and the gold and the small woven star where they crossed, and stood a long moment and said out loud to the wall in the exam hall voice, steady as it got, not yet, ask me in 2 years. And the gas flames lined, and the star held its silver, and somewhere below them the hearth's banked coals settled with a sound like an old man turning comfortably in his sleep, content to wait, having waited before, being made in the end, and every soul in that house knew it by now, entirely of waiting rewarded. The second scene is the last, and it is 3 years later, and it is the 19th of September, 1998, and the war is over. It had ended in the spring, and it had ended the way the war room's oldest doctrine said it would, written on the board since the second week, not with wands, with bookkeeping. The cup, the diadem, the ring, hunted down over 2 years by goblin assessors and house method and Regulus's notes, unmade one by one in the deep halls, each unmaking attended by 9 smiths and 1 elf who never once looked away. The snake, taken at Godric's Hollow by a striped pair, whose evaluations had noted for 3 years running that they never glanced to check where the other one was. And at the end of it the diminished thing itself, cornered at last in the place all his ledgers crossed, faced by a 17-year-old he could not touch, holding a wand whose true master he had never been, before 300 witnesses, because the house's doctrine of audiences held to the end. The accounts of that morning say the Dark Lord's last curse rebounded, which is true, and what the accounts do not say, because only the 2 people standing closest felt it, was the sensation, at the instant of contact, of something vast and patient and utterly unimpressed arriving to collect. 7 centuries of jurisdiction, 1 grave debt, served, executed, and closed, and the fragment behind the scar going out with it, gently, like a tenant leaving with the bailiffs, and the boy left standing whole in the wreckage of the prophecy, with his own soul his own again, and 1 bit of warmth pulsing steady at his chest. We know, we're moving, hold. So it is over, and it is her 19th birthday, and the drawing room at Grimmauld Place is full for the party, the whole arithmetic of the Mendied house. Sirius and the Tonkses, the Grangers, Marius with a fireproof rose in his buttonhole, Ron with his own napkin ring and Luna Lovegood on his arm, Neville and his gran, Narcissa and a Draco whose thread had gone into the weave by signature that spring, Moody and Minerva and 1 retired architect drinking his tea unpoisoned. And then by gentle conspiracy of everyone in it, the room is decisively empty, 21 people discovering simultaneous urgent business with creatures caked downstairs. And the 2 of them are at the wall. They are 19 and 18. They have been lord and heir match, co-conspirators, war partners in each other's found country for 4 years, and they have kept, with the discipline of people raised by contracts, the Concord's one companionable rule: nothing asked, nothing owed, until the hour itself. The hour arrived formally last summer, a date inked in a gray linen ledger since 1996, and was deferred by joint minute, war business, pressure of Horcruxes, the only extension ever filed against the Concord in its 46 years. Granted by the House without comment, and creature swore, with the hearth banking itself an hour early that night, the House's version of discretion. But the amendment was theirs, and its first clause says the choice shall weigh nothing and mean everything, and they have discovered, standing at the wall where a silver thread crosses a gold one, that a choice that weighs nothing can be picked up early without ceremony whenever its owners like. I told him to ask me in 2 years, Hermione says, to the thread, to the star, to the room. It's been 3. The war can file my apologies. I understand the House accepts late payment when the interest is paid in full. You're sure, Harry says, not a doubt, a courtesy, the way out before the way in always to the last. He is his father's son, all of them. I read the terms, she says, and turns from the wall and looks at him, the person her life happened next to until it happened with, and her voice does the thing it has done since a courtroom, since a lake, since a troll in a bathroom neither of them can believe was real, gets steadier as the thing gets bigger. I always read the terms. There's no clause left, Harry. There's just the question, and it's ours. We bought it back from every dead man who ever tried to own it, and I would like now, please, to answer it. So the question was asked at last by no contract, quill, tapestry, prophecy, or house, but by a boy called 2 names, raising the hand of a girl the old world had once filed under nobody, and pressing to her knuckles once the whole of the answer. and if you require the words, they were short, and hers came first because she had, as usual, finished the reading early. And the first kiss of the rest of their lives happened in front of the wall of names in the house that had been a mausoleum, and was now the safest word either of them knew, unhurried, unwitnessed, entirely their own. Except, the tapestry does not record kisses. It is a formal instrument, but the family magic is old and it talks in its sleep, and it had on this one point been given direct instruction, twice out loud in this very room. So as the two of them stood together in the gaslight, the weave moved, one last time in this story. The silver thread and the gold drew fully together at the little star, and knit, and around the joining the tapestry put out in defiance of 7 centuries of its own iron grammar, in thread no chronicler of the house ever found a precedent for, a single line of script that was not a name, not a date, not a title, nothing any black wall had ever troubled itself to state in the whole long cold ledger of its existence, and it said, "By choice." They noticed it at the same moment, which was how they noticed most things by then, and stood reading the 2 words the wall had waited 7 centuries to learn, her hand still in his, and neither of them said anything clever, because there are rooms and hours where cleverness finally gets to stand down. What Harry thought looking at the little stitched line was that every architect of this moment was in the thread somewhere. The grandfather who wrote an apology with a fence in it, the father who cut the strings, the elf who banked the fire, the girl who read the terms twice and signed anyway. What Hermione thought she said aloud, eventually in the exam voice, gone very soft. It's the first sentence on this whole wall that isn't about blood. And the house settled around them, one long contented creak from foundation beam to roof slates, and kept in its oldest room the sound. And downstairs, at a table set for 21 and crowded with 23, an elderly elf paused mid-toast, tilted his great ears toward the ceiling, listening, and then raised his glass of cooking sherry with shattering dignity and announced to the found and mendied House of Black, who never learned how he knew, "Creature will make breakfast for 9. Chapter 7 end.